The
You're
value
doing
of
it
nothing.
again.
Elena
She watched
said
her
softly,
husband,
her
Roberto,
voice barely
across the
rising
room.
above the sound
He
of
was
the
holding
rain.
court near the
She
podium.
reached across the
his
table,
posture impeccable,
her fingers
his
brushing
smile
against his
practiced to
hand.
perfection. His skin
To
was
the outside
worn,
world,
but his muscles
they were
were
the
tense
pinnacle of
beneath her
success.
touch. A power
Lucas
couple
blinked,
whose union was
snapping
as
out of
solid
his
as the
trance,
foundation
and
of
forced
the
a smile
skyscrapers
that didn't
Roberto
quite
built.
reach his eyes.
But Clara
Doing
felt
what?
the distance between
Thinking
them
so
like a
hard I
physical
can hear the
chasm.
gears turning from
Wide
over
and
here,
uncrossable,
she teased.
Roberto
Though her
caught her
eyes
eye
searched
for a
his
fleeting
face with a
second.
gentle concern.
He did not smile.
She knew that look.
Instead,
It
he
had
gave
appeared
a barely
more frequently
perceptible
over the
nod,
last few weeks,
a signal that she was
shadowing
to remain
the bright
where she
optimism
was,
that
part of the
usually
scenery,
defined him while he closed
It
a
was
deal.
the look of a man
Clara turned her
carrying a weight
gaze
too
away
heavy for his shoulders,
feeling a familiar
a weight he
tightness in her
refused to
chest.
share. It was
Lucas
not anger,
turned his
not
hand
yet.
over.
It was a
interlacing
hollow
his
ache,
fingers
the
with
kind
hers.
that grows slowly
His grip
over
was
years
tight,
of being
desperate,
overlooked.
as if
She
she
remembered
remembered
the
the
man
anchor
who used
keeping
to
him
be,
from drifting
the
away
one who would
into
have
a
pulled her
storm he
onto the
couldn't
dance
name.
floor regardless
Just work
of
things,
who was
Elena.
watching. You know how
The
it
one
is.
who asked her
The
opinion
end of the
on
quarter
matters
is
big and
always
small.
chaotic. That man
You don't
seemed
work
like a
in an
stranger
office,
now,
Lucas, she
buried
reminded
beneath
him
layers
gently,
of ambition
her thumb
and
stroking the
secrecy.
back of his hand.
A waiter passed by.
You work with me,
offering a tray
we
of
fix
hors
watches.
d'oeuvres. There are
Clara
no
shook her
quarters in
head
our
slightly.
shop. Only
Her
broken
stomach was in
springs and
knots.
satisfied customers.
Something had changed in the
He
last
chuckled,
few weeks,
but the sound was hollow.
Roberto's phone
Right.
was always
The
face
shop.
down on the table.
He worked
I have
late,
some administrative
not at the
stuff
office,
to handle
but somewhere
today.
else. Family
He
stuff.
smelled of a different
The
cologne,
word hung in the air
something
between
sharper,
them,
younger,
heavy and loaded.
Clara, darling,
They rarely
you look
spoke
radiant
of his
tonight.
family.
The
Lucas
voice had
had
told her
belonged to
early
Margaret,
on that they were
a
traditional,
socialite whose
wealthy,
kindness was
and
often
distant.
diluted by gossip.
He had chosen a life
She
away
approached
from
with
them,
her husband
choosing
in tow,
her,
choosing
their
the
eyes
simplicity
scanning
of
Clara's
repairing
dress,
old
assessing
mechanisms
its worth.
over the cold precision
Roberto
of
is quite
corporate
the
mergers.
sensation this evening.
But lately,
The
the
auction
distance
results
seemed to
are
be closing.
phenomenal.
The phone
Thank you,
calls
Margaret,
came later
Clara
at night.
replied.
The
Her
letters
voice steadied
arrived
despite
with
the
thick,
turmoil
cream-colored
inside.
envelopes that
He works
Lucas
very
hid
hard.
in the drawer of his
We all see it,
nightstand.
Margaret said.
Elena took
leaning
a
in
sip of
slightly,
her coffee,
her voice
masking
dropping
the
to a
flicker of worry in
conspiratorial
her
whisper.
chest.
But
She
you know,
loved
hard
him
work
with a
often
ferocity that
requires
surprised
distractions.
even her.
One
She
hopes
loved
he
the way he
remembers where
hummed
home
when he
is.
was focused.
The comet
the way
landed
he
like
saved the
stone
crusts
in
of
still
bread
water.
for the birds in the
Clara
park.
forced a smile.
The way he looked at
though
her,
her fingers
as if she were the
tightened
only
around the
source of
champagne
light
flute.
in a dim world.
Roberto knows exactly
But love,
where home
she
is,
was learning,
said,
was
perhaps
not
too
always enough
firmly.
to keep the world at
Margaret
bay.
raised an eyebrow.
Is it about the meeting?
Sensing the tension,
She asked,
and excused
deciding
herself
to
with a
step over
polite
the
laugh.
invisible line they
Clara
had drawn
exhaled
around the
slowly.
subject. The
Lucas
scrutiny was
stiffened.
suffocating.
He pulled his
Everyone
hand away
saw the
slightly
perfection,
to pick up his
but
cup,
no one saw the
needing the
cracks.
distraction.
She looked back
What
at
meeting?
Roberto. The one
He
you've
was
been
laughing
preparing
now,
for.
a deep, booming
the
laugh
suit
that
hanging
used
on
to
the
be
back of the
reserved for
door
her.
isn't for
He was
fixing
standing
watches,
next to a
Lucas.
woman Clara did
It's
not
wool.
recognize.
It costs more than
The
our
woman
rent.
was younger,
She
dressed
kept
in
her voice
vibrant
steady,
red,
neutral,
leaning in too
She didn't
close
want him
as
to
she
feel
spoke.
accused.
Roberto
She
did
wanted
not
him to
step
feel
back.
safe.
He listened
Lucas
intently,
looked toward the
his
bedroom
body
door
angled
where the
toward
dark
her in a
charcoal
way that
suit hung
excluded
silently,
the rest of the room.
a symbol of a life
Clara
he
felt
had
a
tried
chill
to
run
escape.
down her spine.
He sighed.
It was
sound
not
ragged.
jealousy.
They
not
want
in
me
the
to come
traditional
home, Elena.
sense.
Just
It was
for
the
dinner.
realization of
My
irrelevance.
father. He says it's
She set
important.
the flute down on
He
a
says there are
passing
things
tray
I need to
and
know
began
about
to
the
move
future.
through the crowd.
And you think if
She
you
needed
go,
air.
they'll let you come back
She needed
here?
to breathe without
Elena
the weight of
asked, her voice
expectations
trembling
pressing on
slightly.
her lungs.
She hated the
As she
vulnerability
navigated
in
toward
her
the
tone,
terrace doors,
but she couldn't
pass
suppress
Roberto.
The fear
He did
was
not
primal.
notice her approach.
She knew what people
He was
like
too
his family
engaged in
did
the
to people like
conversation.
her.
His
They
hand
didn't see
gesturing
individuals.
emphatically as
They
he
saw
spoke about
obstacles.
investments.
I don't know.
Clara paused
Lucas
for a
admitted,
moment, his voice
standing
dropping
just
to a
behind his
whisper.
shoulder. He looked
She
at her,
waited
really
for him
looked
to
at
sense
her,
her presence,
and for a moment
to acknowledge
masked
her
slipped
existence.
completely.
Seconds
She saw the
ticked by.
exhaustion,
The
fear of
conversation
failure,
continued.
the terror of losing
Roberto
her.
checked his watch.
I told them about you.
A gesture of
I
impatience
told them I'm not
directed at
coming
someone
back
else.
without you.
But it felt
Elena's
like a
heart
dismissal
skipped a
of her
beat.
time.
Lucas,
you shouldn't have done
Roberto,
that. She said
not yet.
softly.
We
He
need to be
turned
ready.
startled, as
Ready
if
for
waking
what?
from a trance.
To be judged.
His eyes
Lucas
widened
stood up
slightly,
abruptly,
then narrowed
pacing
as he
the
assessed
small
the
length of the
situation.
room.
Clara,
The floorboards creaked
I didn't see
under
you
his
there.
steps. I'm going
I'm
out
tired
to the
of
terrace
hiding,
for some
Elena.
air, she said.
I'm tired of
keeping
pretending
her voice
that
low
where I
so
come
the
from
others
doesn't
wouldn't
exist.
hear the strain.
I love you.
Would you like to
That
join
should
me?
be the
Roberto
only
glanced
credential
at the
that
woman in
matters.
red.
Why
Then
should I
back
have
at
to
Clara.
apologize for
The
loving you
hesitation was
person I know.
microscopic, because
But
the
it was
world
there,
isn't fair. It was enough
she
to
said,
break something
standing up to
inside
meet
her.
him.
In a
She
moment,
placed her
Clara,
hands
he
on his
said,
chest,
turning back to the group,
feeling the rapid
I just
beat of
need to
his heart.
finalize this discussion.
And your family,
it's
they hold the
important.
keys to a world
Everything
you
is
were born
always
into.
important, Clara
I don't want to be
whispered,
the reason
more
you
to
lose
herself than to
everything.
him. You are
She
not the
turned
reason
and
I would
walked
lose
away.
anything. The sound
He
of her
said
heels
fiercely,
clicking against the
gripping her
marble
shoulders.
echoing in her ears.
You are the
like
only
a
thing I
countdown.
have that's real.
The terrace was
Everything
cool.
else is just
the night
noise.
era sharp contrast
Money,
to
status,
the stifling
legacy.
heat of the ballroom.
It's all noise.
She walked to
You
the
are the
railing,
music.
looking out
Tears
over the
pricked
city
Elena's
lights.
eyes.
They twinkled
wanted
like
to believe
distant
him.
stars.
God,
and
she
she
wanted
wanted
to
to
believe
believe
him.
him.
But
She
there was a
wrapped her
shadow
arms
looming
around
over
herself,
them,
a sense
trying
of
to hold
impending
together
doom
the
that she
pieces
couldn't
of her
shake.
composure.
She thought
How
about
had
the
it
letter
come to
she
this
had
they had
received
built a
yesterday,
life together,
the one
a
from the law
foundation
firm
of
she
shared
had never
dreams.
heard of.
When
Sitting
did the
unopened
dreams
in her
diverge?
bag.
When did she
She had
become
been
an
too afraid
accessory
to look at
instead
it,
of a partner?
fearing
the
it
door
was about
behind her
debt
opened.
or a mistake.
She didn't turn
or
around
something that would
immediately,
complicate their
hoping it
fragile
was a
life
waiter,
even more.
hoping it was
She
anyone
pushed the
but
thought
him.
away.
But the
Today was
footsteps
about
were
Lucas.
familiar.
Today
Heavy,
was about
confident.
standing together.
Roberto stepped
Okay,
out onto
she
the
whispered.
terrace.
We go
The
together.
door clicked shut
but
behind
we go
him,
on our terms.
muffling the music
We wear
from
what we
inside.
have. The silence between them was heavy.
If they can't see your worth when you're with
unspoken
me,
words,
then they don't deserve
you shouldn't be out here alone.
Lucas
Roberto
leaned his
said,
forehead against
his voice
hers,
lacking the
closing
warmth
his
it
eyes.
once held.
Thank you,
People
he
will
breathed.
talk. I
Let
don't know
them
what
talk,
I'd do
Clara
without
replied.
you.
Still
You'll never
looking
have
at
to
the
find
city,
out.
she
They already
promised.
talk. But as they
just
stood
wait
there,
for us to
wrapped
confirm
in
their
the warmth
rumors.
of there. Roberto
Small
moved
kitchen,
to stand beside
rain
her,
outside
but he kept a
intensified.
distance,
A
lashing
careful
against
foot
the
of
glass
space
as if
between
trying
them.
to get in.
You're being dramatic,
The phone on the
Clara.
wall rang.
It was
a sharp,
business
jarring
conversation
sound that broke the moment.
Nothing more.
Lucas didn't
It wasn't
move
the
to answer
conversation,
it.
Clara
They both
said,
knew who it was.
finally turning to
The
look
silence
at him.
stretched.
The moonlight
filled
caught
only
the
by the
tears she
ringing
had
and the
refused
rain.
to let fall
It was a
inside.
summons. It was the
The
way
time
you
for
looked at
hiding
her.
was over.
It was the way
The
you
time for
forgot I
judgment
was
was
standing
beginning.
there.
It's
Lucas
not just
finally
tonight,
pulled
Roberto.
away, walking
It's
to the
every
phone.
night.
He
It's the
picked up
phone
the
calls
receiver,
taken
his
in the
back
other
to
room.
Elena.
It's the
Yes,
late
he
nights
said,
that aren't
his
about
voice
work.
changing instantly.
Roberto's
becoming
expression
colder.
hardened.
The
voice
mask of the
air.
charming husband
We'll be
slipped,
there.
revealing
Yes.
the impatient
She's with
businessman
me.
beneath. He hung up
You're
without
imagining
saying
things.
goodbye.
You
He
have
turned back
everything
to
you
Elena.
The
And
house
boy
the
she loved
security,
was
the
gone,
status.
replaced by a
Why are
man
you looking
bracing
for problems
war.
where there are none?
They're
Because
expecting
I want
us
a
in an
husband,
hour,
he said.
not a provider.
Elena
Clara
nodded,
said,
walking
her
over
voice
to the mirror
trembling
in the
with
hallway.
suppressed emotion.
She smoothed her
I want to
simple
feel like I
dress,
matter to
the
you.
one she had mended
Not as a
twice.
prop for your image.
She looked
but
at her
as a
reflection.
person. Do
Seeing
you even
the
know what I'm
determination
thinking right
hardening
now?
in
Do
her
you care,
eyes.
Roberto's side?
She didn't know what
Rubbing
awaited
his
them in
temples
that
as
mansion.
if she were a minor
She didn't know about the
inconvenience in his
secrets
schedule.
hidden in her own
Clara,
past.
please. The
Not
legacy
tonight.
sleeping
We
quietly
have
in
guests.
a lawyer's office.
We have a
waiting for the
reputation
right
to
moment
maintain.
to wake. Can we not
All
do
she
this
knew
here?
was
There is
that
no
she
we
loved
anymore,
Lucas,
Clara said,
and she would
the
walk
words
into the
escaping
fire
before
with
she
him.
could stop them.
Let's go.
There
she
is
said,
you,
picking
and
up
there
her
is
coat.
me.
And
Lucas
there is a
nodded,
silence
grabbing
between
the
us
suit
that is
jacket.
getting louder every
As they
day.
stepped out into the
Roberto
hallway,
stepped closer.
the air felt
His
colder.
voice dropping to
the
a harsh
elevator
whisper.
ride down was silent.
Be careful, Clara.
Each floor
You don't know
dropping
what
them
you're
further
saying.
away from their
You don't know the
sanctuary
pressures I'm
and
under.
closer to the arena.
You think this life
when they
maintains
stepped out onto
itself,
the
you
street,
think I do this
the rain
for
had
fun.
stopped.
I think you do
leaving
it for
the city
her,
washed
Clara
clean
said.
but gray.
The accusation
a black
hung
car
in the
was
air,
waiting at the curb,
sharp and
engine
dangerous.
idling.
Roberto
It wasn't their
froze.
car. For a
Lucas
moment,
looked at Elena.
fear flashed
a
in his
silent
eyes,
question in his
quickly
eyes.
replaced by
She took his
defensiveness.
hand, squeezing it
You are
tight.
tired.
Together,
You're emotional,
she reminded him.
Go home.
Together,
I'll
he
have the
echoed.
driver take you. They walked toward
I
the
have
car,
to stay and
unaware
close
that this
event.
journey was not just
No,
to a
Clara
dinner,
said,
but
standing
to a
straighter.
reckoning.
I
The
won't be
wheels
sent
began
away
to
like
turn,
a child.
not just of the
I am
car,
your wife,
but of fate
I deserve
itself.
the truth.
As the,
The truth is
cityscape
what I
blurred
say it
past
is,
the
Roberto
window,
snapped, his
Elena
control
looked at her
slipping.
reflection in the glass.
And right now, the truth
for a
is that
fleeting
you are
second,
making a scene.
she thought she saw
Go
someone else
inside,
looking back,
smile, and pretend
someone
everything is
stronger,
perfect.
someone wealthy.
That is your role.
Someone powerful.
Clara looked at
She
him.
blinked,
Really
and it was
looked
gone.
at him. And
Just
saw
her.
a stranger.
Just Elena.
The man she loved
But the
was
feeling
gone,
lingered,
replaced by
a whisper
someone
of
who
a valued
she
image
wasn't
over
ready to
integrity.
hear.
Secrecy
Lucas
over
watched
honesty.
her,
memorizing
the
the
pain
line
was
of her
acute,
jaw,
a physical
the curve
weight
of
in
her
her
chest.
chest.
But beneath
Storing
the
them
pain,
away like
something
treasures
else
he
was feared
stirring.
might be
A
confiscated.
spark of clarity.
He didn't know that
She
she realized
the
in
key
that
to saving
moment that
everything
waiting
he
for
thought
him
he
to
was
change
losing.
was futile.
He didn't know
He
that
would
the
not
family
change.
waiting for them was
He would
about
only
to make
take
the biggest
more
hills.
until there was nothing
The
left
trees
of
here
her.
stood taller.
Fine,
spaced
Clara said
perfectly
softly.
apart.
I will
like
play the role
sentinels guarding a secret.
for tonight. As the
Roberto
car ascended
nodded,
the winding
satisfied,
driveway,
turning
the
back
mansion
toward the
came into
door.
view.
Good.
It was not a
We
home.
will talk later.
It was a monument,
But not here.
Stone
Clara
walls
added,
rose
her
into
voice
the
gaining
twilight,
strength.
punctuated
Not as
by
your
windows
employee,
that glowed with
as
a
your
warm,
wife.
inviting
Or not at all.
light that Elena
Roberto
knew was
paused
deceptive.
with his hand on
It
the
looked
door
like a
handle.
fortress designed
He didn't
to
look
keep things
back.
out.
Don't push me,
perhaps
Clara.
to keep things in.
You won't like where this
Lucas's
goes.
hand found
He
hers
opened
in
the
the
door
darkness
and
of the
stepped
back
back
into the
seat.
warmth and
His
the
palm
noise.
was damp,
leaving her
You don't
alone
have to
in the
do
cold.
this,
He whispered.
Clara watched
Though
the
they
door
both knew it
close,
was too late
separating
for
her
retreat.
from the life she
We can
knew.
tell the driver
The
to
city
turn
lights
around.
blurred through her
Elena
tears.
shook her head.
She thought
her
about the
eyes
house,
fixed on the
the
imposing
mansion that
structure.
felt more like a museum than a home.
We said together.
She thought about the
I'm not
documents
afraid of
she
a
had
house
seen on
Lucas.
his desk weeks ago.
But she was.
The ones she had
was afraid
ignored
of the silence
because she
that
didn't
seemed
want
to
know.
emanate from it.
She realized
A
now
silence
that
that
ignorance
judged
was no
before
longer
a single
shield.
word was spoken.
It was a vulnerability.
She looked down at her dress.
She wiped her eyes,
the one she had
taking
mended.
a deep breath of
in the
cold
reflection
air.
of the window.
The
it looked
suspense of what
plain
came
and
next
humble.
was terrifying.
Here, it felt like
but
a
it was also
uniform of
liberating.
inadequacy.
She
She knew
the car
something was
came to a
coming.
halt before
The way
grand
Roberto
entrance.
had reacted,
A uniformed
the fear in
driver
his
opened
eyes
the
when she
door,
mentioned her,
and the cool
it
evening
confirmed
air rushed
everything.
in. The perfect
Carrying the
facade
scent
was
of jasmine
cracking,
and damp
and Clara
earth.
knew, with a
Lucas
certainty
stepped
that
out
settled
first,
deep in her
then
bones,
offered his hand to
that when
help
it
her.
broke,
As
she
her
would
feet
not
touched
touch
the
the
gravel,
gravel standing
she
in
felt
the rubble.
exposed.
She turned
The
away
front
from
door
the railing
opened before they
and
could
walked
knock,
back toward
revealing
the door.
a man in a
She would go
tailored
inside,
suit who bowed slightly.
She would smile.
Mr. Lucas.
She would watch.
Mrs.
But she was
Sterling
no
is
longer
expecting
just a
you.
wife waiting
They
to be
walked through the
dismissed.
doorway into a
She was a
foyer
woman
so
waking
vast
up,
it echoed with
and
their
as she pushed
footsteps.
open the terrace door,
the floor was marble
stepping back
black
into
and
the
white
lions,
checkers,
the sharp
cold
angles of
even
his
through the
face,
soles of Elena's
casting
shoes.
shadows that made him
A
look
chandelier
older,
hung
harder.
above them.
Clara stared out
Crystals
the
catching
window,
the light and
watching the
fracturing
city
it
blur
into a
into
thousand
streaks of
tiny
neon
rainbows
and
that
gray.
danced on the walls.
Every mile that passed
It was
felt
beautiful,
like a stitch
but it
being
felt
pulled
sterile.
loose in the
There were
fabric
no
of their
family
marriage.
photos on the tables.
She wanted to speak,
no signs of
demand
life
answers,
other than the
to
pristine
scream until her
arrangement
voice
of
broke,
lilies in a
but the
vase
words
that lodged in her
smelled too
throat.
sweet.
The
Lucas,
confrontation on
the
the
voice
terrace
came from
had
the top of
changed
the
something
sweeping
fundamental.
staircase.
The uncertainty
descended
was gone,
slowly,
replaced by
her
a
hand
cold,
gliding along
hard
the
certainty
polished
that
wooden
settled in her
railing.
stomach like
She
lead.
was elegant.
He was
Her
hiding
hair
something,
swept up in a
and
style
tonight,
that looked
the
painful
mask
to
had slipped
maintain,
enough for her to see
wearing
the
a
cracks.
gown that shimmered like
When the
liquid
car
silver.
pulled into the driveway
This was
of the
Margaret,
mansion,
his mother.
the grandeur
Behind
of the
her
house
walked a
felt
man with
oppressive.
sharp features and
the columns,
eyes that
the
missed
manicured
nothing.
hedges,
Arthur,
the
his
heavy oak
father.
door.
Mother.
They were not symbols
Father,
of safety
Lucas
anymore.
said, his voice
They
steady.
were walls of a
Though
prison.
Elena
She
felt
had
the
willingly
tension
entered
radiating
years
from
ago.
his side.
Roberto
He
stepped
squeezed
out
her
of the
hand
car
briefly
without
before
waiting for
letting
the
go to
driver
step
to
forward.
open his door.
This is Elena.
He walked toward the entrance.
Margaret reached the bottom of the
footsteps
stairs
crisp on the
and
pavement.
stopped a few feet away.
Clara followed slowly.
Her gaze swept
her
over
heels
Elena,
clicking on the
starting
stone.
from her shoes
When they
and
entered the
rising
foyer,
slowly to
the
her
silence
face.
of the house
It
wrapped
wasn't a
around
look of
them.
hostility.
It was too
It was
large,
worse.
too empty.
It was a look of
echoing with the
assessment,
absence of
like
life
a buyer
despite the
inspecting
expensive
goods that
furniture.
didn't quite meet
I'm
the
going to bed,
specifications.
Roberto said.
Elena,
Loosening his tie as he
Margaret
walked
repeated.
past her, testing the
He didn't
name
look
as if
at
it
her.
were a foreign word.
He didn't ask if she was
Lucas
hungry.
has mentioned
if
she was
do.
tired, though he
If she
rarely
was
brings
okay.
guests. Don't wake me up
Home.
tomorrow. It's a
I have an
beautiful
early
home, Mrs. Sterling.
meeting, Elena
Roberto,
said,
Clara
her
said.
voice sounding too
Her voice
loud
was
in the
quiet,
quiet hall.
but it stopped him
She
at the bottom
curtsied
of the
slightly,
staircase.
an instinctive
He
gesture
paused,
of respect,
one
that
hand
felt
on the
clumsy
mahogany
in this
railing,
modern palace.
but he didn't turn around.
Arthur stepped forward.
Are you happy? The question
extending
hung
a hand
in the
that
air.
Elena shook,
heavy and dangerous.
His grip was firm.
Roberto's
dry and
shoulders
brief.
tensed.
Welcome.
For a second, dinner is
She
thought
thought
he
he
might
might
turn,
turn,
might offer
Please
some
follow
shred of
us.
honesty. He didn't ask.
how their
Instead, he
journey
let out a
was.
short,
He didn't
humorous
offer to
laugh.
take their coats.
Happy as a
He
child's
simply
word,
turned
Clara.
and walked.
We are
expecting
beyond
them
that.
to follow.
Good night. They moved
He
through
walked
a
up the
hallway
stairs,
lined with portraits
the sound
of
of his
ancestors
footsteps
who all
fading
shared
until
the
the
same
door to the
stern
master
expression.
bedroom clicked shut.
Elena felt like
Clara
an
stood
intruder
alone
in
in
the
the
foyer
foyer
for a long time.
Every step felt
The
heavier
grandfather
than the
clock
last.
in the corner ticked
Lucas
loudly.
walked beside her,
each
close
second
enough
marking
that their
the
arms
distance
brushed.
growing between them.
Breathe.
She knew she
He
would
murmured
not without
sleep.
looking at her. The image of the
Just
woman in
breathe.
red,
They're
the
just
way
people.
Roberto had looked
They
at
don't
her,
feel like
the
people,
defensive snap in
Elena's
his
voice.
whispered back. It all
They
played
feel like
on
judges.
a loop in her mind. The dining
She
room was
walked past the
dominated by a
staircase,
table long enough
past
to
the
seat
living room,
20, and stopped
yet only
in front
4
of the
places
closed
were
door
set
of
at
Roberto's
one
study.
end.
He
The
never let
distance
her
between
in
the
there.
chairs seemed
It was his
intentional,
sanctuary, his
creating
command
a
center.
physical gap.
Business
that mirrored
matters,
the emotional
he would
one.
say whenever she
Elena
asked.
sat where indicated.
Boring stuff for you.
Between Lucas
For
and
years,
an empty
she
chair
had
that
respected
felt like
that
a barrier.
boundary. Margaret
Believing it
sat
was
at the
about
head,
protecting her
with
from
Arthur to
stress.
her right. Now,
Servants
standing in
moved
the dim
silently
hallway
around
around
the
the
room.
room, she
placing
wondered if it
dishes
was about
covered with
protecting
silver
him from
domes.
scrutiny. The
Her
clink of
hand hovered
silverware
over the
against
doorknob.
china was the
Her
only
heart
sound.
hammered against her
When
ribs.
the domes were lifted,
Frantic bird
the food
trapped
was
in a
exquisite,
cage.
artfully
If she
arranged,
opened this
but
door,
Elena's
there
stomach
was no
was
going
tied
back.
in knots. Ignorance
She
was
picked
a
up her
shield,
fork,
and she was
noticing
about to drop
that there
it.
were 3 of them
She turned the
beside
knob.
her plate.
It was unlocked.
She hesitated.
The
unsure
room
which
smelled
one
of
to
leather,
use.
old paper,
The outer
and
one
his
for the
cologne.
salad.
Lucas
It was a
said
scent that
softly,
used to comfort
leaning
her.
in slightly.
Now
So
it made her
only she
nauseous.
could hear.
She
She
didn't
didn't
make a
turn
show
on the
of
main
it,
light,
but she saw
relying
Margaret's
instead
eyes
on the
narrow
small
slightly
desk
at the
lamps
whisper.
that cast a pool
Lucas
of
tells
yellow
us you
light
work in a
over the
repair
workspace.
shop.
The
Arthur
desk
said,
was
breaking the
immaculate,
silence.
almost sterile. He cut
No
into his
papers
meat
out of
with
place.
precise movements.
No stray pens.
Watchmaking, is
But
it?
Clara knew
Yes,
Roberto.
sir. He
Elena
was organized,
replied,
setting
he
her
was
fork
also
down
human.
gently. People left
restore
traces.
old mechanisms.
She began to open
Clocks,
the drawers,
watches,
one by
music
one.
boxes.
The top drawer
Things that
contained
people think
pens,
are broken
staplers,
beyond
notepads.
repair.
The
Quaint,
second drawer
Margaret
held
said,
contracts
taking a sip
signed
of
and
wine.
filed.
It
Her
must be
hands
comforting
trembled
to
as
work
she
with
reached
things
for the
that can be
bottom drawer.
fixed.
It was
Unlike
locked.
people.
She
Or
paused,
reputations.
listening to the silence
The
of the
air in the
house.
room grew heavier.
Upstairs, the
Elena
floorboards
felt the heat
creaked as
rise in her
Roberto
cheeks.
moved around the bedroom.
She looked at Lucas,
She
who
needed
had
to know.
stiffened.
She tried
Mother,
the code
Lucas
she knew
warned,
he
his
used
voice
for
low.
everything the company.
I'm merely
founding
making
date.
conversation.
It didn't work.
Margaret replied
She tried their
smoothly,
wedding
placing her
anniversary.
glass down.
Nothing. It's important
A
to
bitter taste
understand where
rose in her
people come
mouth.
from.
Of
Context
course, he
is
wouldn't
everything.
use that.
Lucas
She closed
has been
her
away
eyes
from the
thinking.
business for some
What
time.
mattered more to him
We were
than
hoping his
anything
return
power,
would signal
control.
a new focus. She tried the
But
date.
perhaps
he
his
became
distractions
CEO.
remain.
The drawer clicked
I'm not a
open.
distraction.
Inside, there was
Elena
a
said,
single manila
the words
folder
slipping
and a
out before she
small
could
black
stop them.
notebook. She
Clara
hadn't meant
picked
to
up the
speak so
folder first.
boldly, but the
Her
sting of
fingers
the
felt
word
numb
numb
as
as
she
she
lifted
lifted
the
the
flap.
flap. I love
Inside
him,
were bank
and I
statements,
support him,
but not for the company.
Arthur looked up from his
They were
plate,
personal
his eyes
transfers.
cold. Large
Love is a
sums,
volatile
volatile currency,
moving monthly
from their joint investment account to an entity.
Legacy,
called JL
however, is
Consulting.
solid.
It requires stability. She knew all their
partners who
understand the weight. She managed the charity board. I
She
understand
knew the
weight.
vendors, Elena
She
said,
did not know
her
JL
voice
trembling
consulting,
slightly.
but
She opened the
holding firm.
notebook. She
It was
placed
a
her
ledger,
hands on the table,
handwritten in
refusing
Roberto's
to
sharp,
hide them.
angular
I know what
script.
it's like to work
Dates,
for everything
amounts,
you
and
have.
notes.
I know what
Rent,
it's like
Oak
to
Street.
worry about rent,
Allowance,
about repairs,
travel,
about the
Paris.
future.
Gift.
That's not instability.
The dates corresponded
That's
with the
reality.
nights he had
Reality,
claimed to be working
Margaret
late.
mused. The amounts were
Exchanging a
staggering.
glance with Arthur.
Enough to buy a
How
car.
interesting.
Enough
We
to
deal
buy
in
a small
projections.
house.
In
This
growth.
wasn't just an affair.
In the future of
It was
an
a
empire,
second life,
not the survival
He was
of a
funding
day.
someone else's
Lucas
existence
slammed
with
his
the money
fork
down
down
on
on
the
the
plate
plate.
for their future. The
The
sound
for their
cracked through the
retirement.
room like a whip. For the children they had
The
never
servants
managed to
rose,
have. She is
because
not
he
a
was
project
always
for
too
you to
busy.
analyze. Clara
Lucas
felt
said,
the air
his voice
leave the room.
rising.
She
She is
gripped
the person
edge
I
of the
love.
desk to steady
If you
herself.
can't see her worth, then
her
you're
vision
blind.
blurred, not
Not
from
her,
tears,
but from
Lucas,
a sudden surge
Arthur
of
said,
adrenaline.
his voice dropping
She
an
felt
octave,
violated,
commanding silence.
not just emotionally,
Sit
but
down.
financially.
We are not finished.
They were partners in law.
Lucas remained standing.
He had
for a
treated her
moment,
like a
his chest
dependent,
heaving,
siphoning
He looked at
resources
Elena
without her
seeing
consent.
the fear in her eyes.
She
mixed
turned the
with
page of the
defiance.
notebook.
He
There was a
slowly
photograph
sat back
tucked
down,
into the binding,
but his hand found
pulled
hers
it out.
under the table.
It was a picture of
gripping it
Roberto
tightly.
and the woman
It was a
in red.
silent apology.
They were on
and
a beach
promise of
smiling,
protection
holding
all
hands.
at once. It looked
I
like a vacation
apologize,
photo,
Elena said
on the
softly,
back in
looking at
Roberto's
Arthur.
handwriting.
I
It
didn't
said
mean
our
to
fresh
disrupt
start.
your evening.
The words cut
I only
deeper
wanted
than
to
any
meet the
knife
people
could.
who raised the
Our
man
fresh
I
start.
love.
Did
Margaret's
that mean the
expression
end
softened
was she the
slightly,
obstacle to be
but
removed
only for a
she looked
fraction
around
of a
the room,
second,
seeing
Well,
it with
you have
new
met
eyes.
us.
Now you
The
see what
framed
we are.
photos of them on the
question
shelves were
is,
props.
Elena, can
The
you
wedding
survive
portrait
in this
on the wall
environment?
was a lie.
Or will you
This
crumble
room,
under the
this
pressure
house,
of a world
it was
you
all a
don't
staged
understand?
set.
And
The
she
question
was the
hung
only
in the
one
air,
who hadn't received
unanswered.
the script. The servants
She
returned
heard
to
to
clear
clear
the
the
plates
plates.
upstairs again. The silence returning
settling
to fill
in,
the space where
sleepily,
words had
obliviously.
failed.
Elena
Anger
looked at
rose
the
in
empty
her,
plate
hot
in
and
front
sharp,
of her,
but she forced
She
it
hadn't
down.
eaten a bite.
Panic would not
She
help
looked at
her.
Lucas,
Tears
who was
would
staring
not
at
help
his
her.
father with a
If
mixture
she woke him
of
now, he
resentment
would deny
and
it.
longing.
He would
He wanted their
gaslight her,
approval, she
tell her she was
realized.
misunderstanding,
Despite everything,
that it was for
he
business.
still wanted them
that
to
she
be
was
proud
being
of him.
hysterical, and she was
He
the
would
obstacle.
find a way to make her
As
feel
the dessert
crazy.
was served, she
A
needed
delicate
proof that
souffle
couldn't
that
be
looked
talked
too
away.
fragile to hold.
She needed to understand
Elena
the
felt a
full
shift
extent
in the
of the web
atmosphere.
he had woven.
The judgment wasn't
She took out
over.
her phone.
It was
and
merely
began to
pausing for
photograph the
breath.
documents.
She could feel
Every
the weight
page,
of their
every
expectations
number,
pressing
every
down on
signature.
Lucas.
And
Her
through
hands
him
were
on
steady
her.
now.
They were
The
trying to
shock
break
was
her
hardening
spirit
into
not
resolve.
with shouting. She
But with
photographed
cold,
the notebook,
calculated
the bank
indifference.
statements, the photo.
They wanted her to leave
She sent the
voluntarily
images to her
to
personal
realize she
cloud
didn't
account.
belong.
Then
But
deleted
as she
the
looked
recent
at
photos from
her
her
reflection
gallery.
in the silver
She
spoon
needed to
beside her plate.
Be careful. She didn't
He
see
was
the
clever.
humble repair girl.
He would check for traces.
She saw something else.
She placed the documents
flicker of
back
steel.
exactly as she
She
found
thought
them.
about the unopened
angle
letter
of the
in her
folder,
bag,
the
position
one
of
from
the
the
notebook.
lawyers.
She
locked
didn't
the
know what
drawer.
it said. She
But
turned
for the
off the
first
desk
time,
lamp. She wondered
standing
if it was
in the
a shield
darkness
she
of
had
the
been
study,
carrying without
Clara
knowing it.
felt a strange
Tell us,
sensation.
Elena. It was
Arthur
grief,
said,
yes. Leaning back
a
as the
profound
servants
mourning
withdrew
for the
again.
man she thought she
What are your
knew.
ambitions?
But beneath the grief
Surely
was
you don't
something
plan
else.
to fix watches
A clarity
forever.
she hadn't felt
I plan
in
to build a
years.
life. She realized
said,
that she
meeting
had
his
been
gaze.
waiting for permission
With
to be
Lucas.
happy. However
Waiting
that
for
looks.
him to validate
Ambition
her worth.
without direction
Tonight,
is just dreaming.
in this dark room,
Margaret
she
countered.
validated herself.
And dreams are expensive.
She was not a victim.
Lucas stood up
She was a
abruptly,
witness,
pushing his chair
and
back.
witnesses had power.
We're leaving. She walked out of the
Lucas, sit
study
down,
and closed
Arthur
the door
commanded.
softly. No, the hallway
Lucas
was
said,
still
his
dark,
voice shaking with
the house
emotion.
still sleeping.
You promised me a
She
dinner.
walked up the stairs.
You promised me a
her
chance
hand
to
trailing
introduce her.
along the banister.
Instead,
when she
you
reached the
treated her
bedroom
like an
door, she
employee
paused.
being interviewed for
She
a
could
job
hear
she didn't
Roberto's
apply
breathing
for.
through the wood.
I won't
slow
subject her
and
to
even.
this.
He was
We are
asleep,
trying to protect
peaceful
you,
in the knowledge
Arthur
that his
said,
secrets were
standing as
safe.
well.
He had
The
no
two men
idea
faced
that
each
the
other
ground
across
beneath
the
him
long
had
table.
just shifted.
A
He
generation
had no
of
idea
conflict
that the
spanning
woman
the
walking
distance.
toward the guest room
You
down
don't see the
hall
pitfalls.
was no longer
We
the
do.
wife who would
Then
smile
stop digging
and
them,
pretend.
Lucas snapped.
Clara went into
He
the
turned
guest
to
room
Elena
and closed the
Come
door.
on.
Elena
She did not
stood
turn
up,
on the light.
her legs feeling
She
weak.
sat on the edge of the
She
bed.
looked at Margaret,
her
who
phone
sat
clutched
clutched
in
in
her
her still.
hand.
Her
The
face
images
a
were
mask
there.
of disappointed
The
resolve.
truth was there.
Thank you
She
for the
looked at
meal,
the time.
Elena said.
It was 3 in
her
the
voice
morning.
steady despite
In
the
10
turmoil
days,
inside.
everything would
I
change.
hope one day you see
She
that
didn't know
value
how
isn't
yet,
always in
but
what
the
you
seed
own.
had been planted.
Sometimes it's
He
in
had
who
kicked
you
her
stand
out of
with.
his heart long ago.
She took Lucas's
Now
arm.
he was trying to kick her
They
out of
walked
his life.
out of the dining room,
But he had made a
through
mistake.
the hallway of ancestors.
He had underestimated
and into
her.
the cold foyer.
He thought money was
the
his
silence
weapon,
of the house,
but it would
seemed to
become
chase
hers.
them to the door.
She lay back
As
on
they
the
stepped
pillows,
out into the night
staring
air,
at the ceiling.
the cold hit them.
Sleep did not
sharp
come,
and cleansing,
but peace did.
Lucas let
It was
out a
the
long
peace
breath,
left.
his shoulders
Every
slumping.
time she closed her
I'm
eyes,
so
she
sorry,
saw the
he
ledger,
said,
the
turning to
handwritten
her.
notes.
I thought the photograph.
I thought
of
if they just
Roberto
met
and
you,
the
they'd
woman
see.
in red on a beach,
They
that was
saw
not
me,
theirs.
Elena said.
She lay still
looking
until the
back at
house
lit
began to
windows of the
stir.
mansion.
Listening
They
to
saw
the
exactly
familiar
what they
sounds
wanted
of the
to
staff
see.
moving
But
downstairs.
Lucas,
I
the
saw
clatter
them
of
too.
silverware,
And what
the
did you
hum of the
see?
espresso machine.
I saw people who are
These
afraid.
were the sounds of her
she
life.
life
softly,
or what she had
afraid
thought
of
was her
losing
life.
control.
Now
Afraid
they
of
felt like the
change.
sounds of a play.
She turned to
ending its
face
run.
him, cupping
She
his
rose
face
from
in
the
her
bed
hands.
and dressed carefully.
You don't have to be afraid.
She chose a simple
Not
blouse
with me.
and trousers.
Lucas
nothing
closed
too
his
formal,
eyes,
nothing
leaning
too
into her
casual.
touch.
But
She
as they
needed to
walked
look
back to the
composed.
car,
She
the
needed
lights
to
of the
look like
mansion
someone
seemed
who
to
could
follow
not be
them.
broken by a morning
Inside, behind the
conversation.
heavy curtains,
When she
Margaret
descended the
watched them
staircase,
go.
the
She
smell
turned
of
to
coffee
Arthur,
and toasted
her
bread
expression
greeted her.
unreadable.
Usually a
She has
comforting
spirit,
scent,
she said
but today
quietly.
it turned her stomach.
Spirit doesn't pay
She
dividends.
walked into the breakfast
Arthur
nook,
replied,
a
turning
sunlit
off the
room
light.
with views of
But
the
we shall
garden
see
they
how
had
long it
planned
lasts.
together years ago.
The car engine
Roberta
started,
was already there,
breaking the silence.
He sat
of
at the head
night.
of the table.
As they
drove
drove
away,
in a sharp charcoal
Elena
suit,
felt a chill
reading
that had
something on a
nothing to do
tablet.
with the weather.
He did not look
The
up when
rejection
she
was
entered.
clear now.
He did
The
not
bridge
say
was
good morning.
burning.
But
A
as the
single cup
mansion
of coffee
disappeared
sat
into
in
the
front of
darkness
her,
behind them,
still steaming,
she didn't feel
as if he had
defeated.
ordered it for her.
She felt a
but had
strange
no
awakening.
intention of sharing
The
the
letter in her
moment.
bag seemed
Clara
to burn
pulled out the
against her
chair
side.
opposite him and
The
sat
judgment
down.
of the Sterlings
The
was
silence
final,
stretched between
but it
them,
wasn't
thick
the
and
end.
suffocating.
It was the catalyst.
She picked up her cup,
and as the
the
car
warmth
merged
seeping
onto
into
the
her
highway,
palms,
up
grounding
to their
her.
apartment
We
building,
need to discuss the
Lucas
situation.
turned off the engine.
Roberto
but
said
didn't move.
finally, setting
He
the
stared at
tablet
the steering
down.
wheel. His
His
voice was
breathing
flat,
shallow.
devoid
I
of
shouldn't
the
have let
warmth
them
he
speak
used with
to you like
clients,
that.
devoid
said
of the
finally,
affection
his
he
voice
once
rough.
used with her. He didn't look at her.
He looked at her as if
He
she were a
couldn't.
contractor.
The shame
who had
was a
failed to
physical
deliver
weight on his
his
project.
shoulders.
Last
Elena
night
reached
was
over,
difficult, covering his
I think
hand
we
with
both
hers.
agree that things
Her
cannot
touch was
continue
warm,
as they
grounding.
are.
Clara
couldn't
took
stop
a sip
them,
of
Lucas.
coffee.
They
Buying
believe
herself
what
a
they
moment.
believe.
She
We
looked
can't
at
change
him,
their minds
really
by
looked at
fighting.
him, and
They
saw
offered
the
you
impatience
money,
lurking
Lucas
behind
said,
his
the
eyes.
words tasting like
He wanted
ash.
this over with.
Did you see that?
He wanted to get to
My
his
father
day, to
slid
his
the
work,
envelope
to
across
her.
the table.
Things
before
haven't
we
been
even
as they
stood
are
up.
for a long time.
They think everything
Roberto,
has a
she
price.
said softly. I didn't
But
take
yes,
it. Elena
we need to
reminded
discuss
him
it.
gently.
Roberto
And I never
nodded,
will.
reaching into
They
his
climbed the
briefcase,
stairs
which
to
sat
their
on the floor
apartment in
beside him.
silence. He pulled out a
familiar
manila
creak of
folder,
the third
thick
step,
and heavy,
the smell of
and
old
slid it
wood and
across the
laundry
polished
detergent.
wood of the table.
It should have felt
It
like
stopped
safety.
just inches from her hands.
Instead, it felt fragile.
My lawyer drew these
As
up.
soon as the door
It's
closed,
a settlement agreement.
Lucas leaned against
and a
it,
notice of
closing
residence
his eyes.
termination. Elena
Clara
walked
did
to the
not
small
touch the
table
folder.
where her bag lay.
She looked at it
She could
as
feel
if it
the
were a
envelope
dangerous
inside.
animal.
The one
Residence
from the law
termination,
firm.
she repeated.
It burned against
The
her
words
side
feeling
like a coal.
foreign in her mouth.
She had carried it
This
through
is
the
my
dinner,
home,
through
Roberto.
the judgment. We
Through
bought
the
this
insult.
together.
She
You know the
touched it
property
now.
is held
Her
under the
fingers
company
tracing the
trust,
embossed
Roberto
logo.
said.
Vance
His tone
Sterling.
instructional. The
Like he
same
was
name as
explaining a
Lucas's
basic
family,
concept
but
to
a
a
different
child.
branch. And the company
secret
is under
branch.
my control.
She didn't open it.
Legally, Clara.
Not yet.
You are a guest here.
Some truths were
and
too
guests
heavy
who
to
overstay
carry in
their
the dark.
welcome must leave.
Instead, she made
the cruelty
tea.
of the
routine
statement
calming
landed
her
with the
frayed
weight
nerves.
of a physical blow.
They sat on the sofa.
Clara felt the
not
air
touching.
hitch in her throat.
The space between
was
them
not just
filled with
ending
the
the
echo
echo
of his
mother's voice.
He was erasing her
Legacy
existence
from the life
stability,
they had built.
compatibility.
He was rewriting history.
The
to
words
suit his
looped in
narrative.
Elena's mind.
You want me to
They
leave?
didn't hate
she
her
said,
personally,
stating the
they
obvious
hated
to
what she
hear him say it
represented.
aloud.
Uncertainty.
I want us to move on.
Change.
Roberto corrected.
The unknown.
Leaning back in his
3
chair.
days passed.
I have found
The
someone
silence
else.
from the Sterling
You know
family
this.
was deafening.
There is no point
Lucas
in
went to the
pretending
shop.
anymore.
But
Juliana
his heart
deserved
wasn't in the
stability.
work.
He
She
dropped a
deserves a
gear
home,
twice, something
and
he
I
never
deserve
did.
peace.
Elena watched
Juliana,
him,
Clara said,
worrying that the
the name
stress
tasted
was
like
breaking
ash.
him.
She
knew
knew
she
she
had
had
to
her
be
in this
strong,
house, in our
not
home.
just for
It is
herself,
not our home
but for
anymore.
him.
It
On
is
the
an
fourth
asset,
day,
Roberto
a formal
said,
invitation
checking his
arrived.
watch.
Not
Here
to
are
the
the
mansion,
terms.
but to
You
the
signed the
Sterling
divorce
corporate
papers,
headquarters.
waiving any.
It requested
claim
their
to the
presence
company
for a
assets.
final discussion
In exchange,
regarding Lucas's
I will allow you to
position
keep
and
the car
future
you drive
involvement, and a small
The
monthly stipend
building was a
for
tower
6
of
months.
glass and steel
enough
that
to get you
pierced the
settled
clouds.
elsewhere. Elena
Clara
wore
felt
her
a cold
best suit,
laugh bubble
a
up in
navy
her chest,
blue she had bought
but
on
she
sale
suppressed
years
it.
ago.
The audacity
clean
was
and
staggering.
pressed, but
He had
next
stolen
stolen
from
from
their
their
joint
joint
accounts
accounts
to fund
his
his
rushing
affair.
through the lobby.
He was taking the
It looked
house,
dated.
the company,
Lucas
the
wore the
future,
charcoal suit,
and he was offering
the one
her a
that cost
stipend
more
like
than their
charity.
rent.
He
thought
looked
she
like a
was
prince
blind.
returning to a
He thought
castle
she was weak.
he no longer recognized.
And if I don't sign, she asked.
They took
her
the
voice
private
steady.
elevator to the
Roberto's
top floor.
expression hardened.
The doors opened
The
directly
mask of
into
the
a
reasonable
boardroom.
businessman slipped,
Arthur Sterling
revealing
stood at
the
the
head
head
of
of
the
the
table.
table.
Then
Margaret
I confessed
sat to his
everything.
right.
I
There
will
were
drag
no
this
plates
out for
this time,
years.
no silverware.
I will expose
Just
your
folders,
instability
pens, and cold water.
People will ask why
The
you were
view
so
behind
desperate
them was
to
the
hold
entire
on.
city.
I have resources,
sprawling and
Clara.
small.
I can make
Thank
sure
you for
you get
coming,
nothing,
Arthur said.
Not a penny. He didn't offer
You will
seats
leave
eventually,
immediately,
but you will
He
leave
let them
with
stand
less.
for a moment.
He was
asserting
threatening to
dominance.
destroy her reputation
Please
to
sit.
save his own.
Lucas pulled
He
out
was
the
using
chair
her
for
love
Elena.
for him, her
They
desire
sat side
for
by
privacy,
side,
facing the
weapon
wall of
against her.
windows and the
Clara
parents
looked
who
around
looked like
the room.
statues carved
The
from
sunlight
ice.
was brighter now.
We have reviewed the
illuminating
situation.
the dust motes
Arthur
dancing
began
in the
opening
air.
a folder.
It was so
He didn't
ordinary,
look up.
so mundane.
Lucas,
while
your
her
potential
life was
is
being
undeniable.
dismantled.
But
She
thought
thought
about
about
the
the folder
requires
in
direct
study.
It
The
requires
proof
a
of the
partner
transfers,
who understands
the
the
proof of the
trajectory
lies.
of this company.
She could pull it out now.
I told you, She
Lucas
could scream.
said, his voice tight.
She could throw the coffee
Elena
in his
is my
face.
partner.
But
In
anger
life,
would not win this
that
war.
should be enough.
Anger would make
In
him
life,
defensive.
perhaps, Margaret
Anger would make
interjected.
him hide the
Her voice
assets
smooth
better.
as polished
She
stone.
needed him to feel
But
safe.
in business,
She
sentiment
needed
is a
him to think
liability.
he had won.
We have projections.
Clara reached
Lucas.
out and placed
We
her
have
hand on the
shareholders.
folder.
They
The
expect
paper was
stability.
cool under her
When
fingertips.
they see you with someone
24
outside the
hours,
circle,
she said.
they question your
Roberto
judgment.
blinked.
They
surprised
question
by
your
her
focus.
compliance. Elena
He had
felt the
expected
sting,
tears,
but she
bargaining,
kept her back
maybe even a
straight.
scene. She looked
Well,
at
you said
Arthur.
I need to leave.
So this
Clara
is about
said,
public
opening
perception.
the folder.
You want him to
She
hide
didn't
me?
read the pages.
We want him to prioritize.
She knew what they said.
Arthur
She knew the
corrected.
betrayal was
He
written
slid a
in every
document
clause.
across the table.
Give me 24
stopped
hours
in front
to
of
pack
Lucas.
my personal things.
This is a revised
Then I will be
contract.
gone.
It
Roberto
secures your
relaxed
position as
visibly.
vice president.
The tension in his
It
shoulders
comes with a
dropped.
significant salary
won.
increase.
He
stock
believed his own
options,
propaganda
and a trust
that
fund
is reasonable.
will be unlocked upon
I will have the
certain
driver
conditions.
available to take you
Lucas
wherever
glanced
you need
at
to
the
go.
paper.
A hotel,
What conditions?
perhaps.
Or
Marriage,
your sisters,
Margaret said simply.
I will make my own
To
arrangements.
someone within the
Clara
consortium.
said.
Picking
We
up
have
the pen, he
identified
had
three
placed next to
suitable
the folder.
candidates.
Her hand
Daughters
did
of
not shake.
partners.
She
Women
signed
who
her name
understand
where
the
the
line
line
indicated.
indicated. The
Lucas
ink flowed
pushed the
dark
paper
and
away.
permanent.
It
But I
slid
want
back
you to know
across the
something,
polished
Roberto.
wood.
He
No.
stood up, buttoning
Lucas,
his suit jacket,
Arthur's voice
eager to
hardened.
leave. Do not
Yes,
be
this
foolish.
house, Clara
You
said,
are throwing
looking
away
up
your
at him.
birthright for
Her
a
eyes were
a
dry,
hobby.
clear,
She
and
is not a
unnervingly
hobby.
calm.
Lucas
It holds
slammed
more
his
memories
hand
than
on the
you
table.
think.
The
Walls
sound
have a way of
echoed in the
remembering.
vast room. Be careful
She's
what
the
you
only
wish
real
for.
thing I have.
Roberto paused.
You talk about
A
legacy?
flicker of unease
What
crossing
kind of
his
legacy
face,
is built on
quickly
misery?
dismissed. I won't
You're being
marry a
dramatic
stranger
again,
to make
Clara.
you happy.
It's just a house.
It is not about happiness.
Bricks and mortar,
Arthur said.
Goodbye,
standing
Clara.
up.
He
He
walked
turned
around
and
the
walked
table,
out of the nook,
stopping behind
his
Lucas.
footsteps echoing
He
on
placed
the
a
tile
hand
floor.
on his son's shoulder.
She heard the front door
Lucas
open and
flinched
close,
but didn't pull away.
the sound of his car
It is about
engine
survival.
starting. And then
The
the
company is
silence
facing
returned.
challenges.
Clara sat
We need
alone at the
unity.
table. We need
The
alliances.
coffee was cold now.
Your relationship
She looked
with
at the
Elena,
signed papers.
It isolates
She had
you.
just agreed to
It makes
nothing.
you vulnerable.
She had agreed to
Elena
be erased.
listened, her heart
But
pounding.
as she sat there,
she saw the
she
trap
touched
now.
the pocket of her
It wasn't just
trousers.
prejudice.
Her phone
it
was
was strategy. The photos of the
using
ledger
Lucas's
were safe.
love for her
The
as
cloud
leverage
upload
to
was
control
complete.
him.
She
They
stood
were
up
willing to
and
break
walked
his
to the
heart
window.
to save their stock
She watched
prices.
Roberto's car
She
disappear
looked at
down the
Lucas,
driveway,
seeing the
turning
conflict
onto the
tearing
main
him
road.
apart.
He was
He
going
wanted
to
her,
fight, but he
was
also
going to tell
wanted
her
to
the
belong.
deed was done.
He wanted their
He thought the
approval
clock had
so
stopped.
desperately it blinded
He thought the
him
game
to
was
their
over.
cruelty. Clara
So
placed
this is
her
the
hand
ultimatum,
against the cold
Elena
glass
said,
of the
her
window.
voice clear and
She
steady.
could feel the vibration
All
of
eyes
the
turned to
house.
her.
The settling
He chooses
of the
the company,
foundation.
or he
He
chooses
thought
me.
he owned the walls.
Arthur looked at
He
her,
thought he owned
really
the ground,
looked at her for the
but
first
he had
time.
forgotten the details.
It is not an ultimatum,
He had
my
forgotten
dear.
the trust fund
It is
her
a
uncle
reality.
had left her. You cannot
The
give
one
him
Roberto
what he
thought
needs.
was negligible.
You cannot open doors.
He had
for
forgotten
him.
the clause in the
You can only
mortgage
hold
he
them
had
shut.
signed in his haste.
You don't
to
know what I can
refinance
do.
last year.
Elena said softly.
He had given her 24
The letter in
hours
her
to
bag
leave.
felt heavy again.
But he had not
She knew
realized that in
things
those
they
24 hours.
She knew that
she
the
was not
Sterling
just
Empire
packing
was not as
boxes.
solid as it
She was
looked.
preparing a return.
She knew that the rival
pain was still
conglomerate,
there,
the
a
one she
dull
was heir
ache in
to,
her chest,
had
but
been
it was
quietly
no longer
buying shares
paralyzing.
of Sterling stock
It was
for
fuel.
months. She turned
She
away
knew
from
that
the
she held the
window and
keys
walked
to their
back
survival
the
in her
table.
purse.
She picked up
But
the
revealing
copy
it
of the
now would
divorce
look like
papers.
vengeance.
She would keep
It would
them.
validate their
evidence
fear
of
that
his
she was a
arrogance.
schemer.
Evidence
I know
of his
enough,
haste.
Margaret
Clara
said,
walked out of the
dismissing her
breakfast
with a wave
nook
of her
and
hand.
into the hallway.
You are a kind
The house
girl,
was
Elena,
quiet. I
waiting
believe
for
you
her
love
command.
him. But
She
love does
began
not
to
climb
climb
the
the
stairs.
stairs.
Not to
Love
pack
does
yet,
not merge
but to
portfolios.
think. She had
Go
10
home.
days before the
Think
legal
about what is best
formalities
for
were
him.
fully processed.
Not what is best
before
for
the
you.
locks could be changed.
Lucas stood up abruptly.
10 days was
We don't
a
need to
lifetime
think.
in the world of finance.
The answer is no.
10 days
I'm
was
not
enough
marrying
time
anyone.
to make a call.
And I'm not leaving
Enough
Elena.
time to transfer a
He
deed.
reached for her hand.
Enough time to
Come
turn
on.
the key in the lock
Lucas,
from the other
Arthur
side.
warned.
She
If
reached
you
the
walk
top
out
of
of
the
this
stairs
room,
and
you
looked
walk
down
out
the
of the
hallway
company.
toward the master
You will be
bedroom.
removed from the board.
She would not go in there.
You will lose your
That
access
room was
to
dead
the
to her
trust.
now. You
She
will be
walked
on your
toward
own.
the guest room.
Lucas
Her
paused.
sanctuary for the next
His hand
day.
hovered over
As she
Elena's.
closed the door,
She
the
leaned
silence
against
stretched
it,
thin and
closing her
brittle.
eyes.
This was the
The
moment.
suspense was a living
choice
thing
he had
now,
been fearing
coiled
since
in the
the
room
first
with
dinner.
her.
She
She
looked at his
imagined
father,
Roberto later
then at
today,
his mother,
smiling.
They waited,
telling his
confident
mistress
in their
that the
power.
wife was gone.
They believed money
She
was
imagined
the
the
only
celebration
gravity
they
that
would
held
have
the
in
world
this
together.
very house.
Lucas looked
Let
at
them
Elena.
celebrate.
She didn't
Let them feel
speak.
secure.
She didn't
Because
beg.
the higher the
She
build,
just waited.
the harder the fall.
She would love him either
Clara,
way. But she
opened
would
her
not be the
eyes
reason
and looked
he
at her
lost
reflection
himself.
in the mirror.
I'm
across
already
the
on my
room.
own.
The
Lucas
woman
said
staring
quietly.
back was different.
I have been
from the
since
one
the
at
day I
gala.
chose to be a
She
man
was
instead
quieter,
of a heir.
sharper, dangerous.
He took Elena's hand.
She whispered to the empty
They turned
room
and walked
10
toward the
24
door.
hours.
The click of their
The
shoes
deadline
on
hung
the
over her head.
floor was the
not
only
as a
sound,
threat, but as
As
a
they
challenge.
reached the handle, she had
Arthur's
signed the
voice
papers,
stopped
yes,
them.
but the ink
You
was
will
barely
regret
dry,
this,
Arthur said.
and the game had already
When the
changed
world turns
rules.
its back on you,
She
do
pushed
not
away
come
from the
begging.
table and
Lucas
walked up
didn't
the
turn
stairs.
around.
The
He
guest
won't.
room was her
They
starting
stepped
point.
out into the hallway.
It was sterile
The elevator
and
doors
personal,
opened
a room for
immediately,
visitors,
as
which
if
was
the building
exactly what she
itself
had
was
become in her
expelling
own
them.
home.
Inside
She
the
opened
small
closet.
box,
The
it
air
contained a
conditioning
few
was
dresses.
too cold. Simple
Elena
things she
shivered.
kept for days
Lucas
when she didn't
leaned
want to
against
wear the
the mirror,
designer labels
sliding
Roberto
down
preferred.
until he was sitting on
She
the
took
floor,
them down,
his head
folding
in his
them
hands.
neatly into a single
I lost
leather
everything,
suitcase.
he whispered.
She did not pack
Just
the
like
jewels.
that.
Elena
diamond
knelt
necklace
beside
on the
him.
vanity.
She didn't
The
offer
sapphire
platitudes
earrings in the drawer.
She didn't
They
say
were
it would be
gifts,
okay,
but they felt like
she
shackles.
just wrapped her arms around
They
him.
belonged to the wife
You
he
didn't
was
lose
discarding,
everything, Lucas.
not the woman she
You
was
kept
becoming.
yourself.
She
That's
left
the
them
only
gleaming
thing that
under the
matters.
lamp.
But what do we
Instead,
do now?
She opened the
He
small
asked,
wooden
looking up.
box at the back
His
of the
eyes
drawer.
were red.
Inside
My
was
father,
a silver
he has
locket,
resources.
a photograph
He
of
can
her
make things
parents,
difficult.
and the deed
The
to a
shop
small
our home.
apartment downtown that
We will
her
figure
uncle
it
had
out,
left her.
Elena said
A
firmly.
secret she had never shared
fix
with
things,
Roberto.
remember?
He assumed
That's
he
what
knew
we
all
do.
her assets.
When things are broken,
he assumed
we
he
find
knew
the
all her
mechanism.
weaknesses. We find the
That was
spring
his
that
first
snapped,
mistake,
and we fix
As she
it.
packed,
Lucas
the house
managed
seemed
a
to
weak
watch her.
smile. The
You
portraits
make it
on the
sound
wall,
so simple.
the furniture they
It's
had
not
chosen
simple,
together 10
she
years
admitted.
ago. But it's
The
possible.
rug in the hallway where they
The
had
elevator
danced
dinged
once,
at the
years
lobby.
ago.
They stood
when
up,
the music was still
brushing off
playing
their
between
clothes.
them.
As
As
they
paused
walked
by
out
the
into
window,
the bustling
looking
street,
out at the garden,
the city felt
the
different.
roses were in bloom.
It was no longer a
tended to
backdrop
by the
to their
gardener
love
every
story.
week.
It was
She
an
would not
arena.
see them bloom
They
next
were alone
season.
against an empire.
The thought brought a sharp
But as
pang of
Elena
loss,
walked beside
but she
Lucas,
did not let
her
it
hand
stop
in
her.
his.
She
Grief
felt
was a
the
luxury
envelope in
she
her
could
bag
not
again.
afford right now.
The secret power.
She needed clarity,
The truth that could
She
topple
needed to
his
be
father's
light.
arrogance.
She zipped
in a
the
single
suitcase
day.
shut.
She
The
wouldn't
sound
use
was
it yet.
final, like
Not
a
until the
period at
time
the end
was
of a
right.
sentence.
Not until
There
they
was a knock at the
understood that
door.
value wasn't
Clara
something
turned
you
to see
inherited.
Maria, The
It was something you
housekeeper,
built,
standing in the
and
hallway.
she was about to build
Maria
something
had been
they
with
couldn't
them for
ignore.
15 years.
The conflict had escalated.
She had seen Clara through illnesses,
The lines were
through
drawn,
holidays,
but
through
the war was
slow
just
quieting
beginning.
of the house.
And for the first
Her
time,
eyes were red-rimmed.
Elena didn't feel like
She
the
held a
victim
tray
of the
with a glass
story.
of water.
She felt like
Though
the
her
author.
hands were shaking
She
slightly.
squeezed Lucas's hand.
Mrs. Clara, Maria
"Let's go
said,
home,"
her voice
she
thick
said.
with emotion.
"We have work to
I
do."
heard. Mr.
Lucas
Roberto
nodded,
told the staff
taking a
you are
deep
leaving.
breath of the city air.
Clara walked over.
It smelled
and
of
took the glass
exhaust and
from
rain,
her.
of life.
She
and
touched
struggle.
Maria's arm.
It smelled
feeling
like
the
freedom.
tension in the older
Yeah, he
woman's
said.
muscles.
"We do.
It's true,
They
Maria.
walked away from the
I'm
tower
going.
of glass,
But where
two
Maria
small
whispered,
figures against
glancing
the
down the
skyline.
hallway as
Behind
if Roberto
them, in the
might appear
boardroom,
from the shadows.
Arthur Sterling watched
cannot
them
just
go
go
through the window.
This is your house.
He turned to Margaret.
You built this life.
He chose her.
Sometimes
He chose
Maria,
poverty.
A house
Margaret
is just a
corrected,
building,
closing
Clara
her
said
folder.
softly. Give it
And a
6
life
months.
is what you carry inside
She'll leave
you.
him when the reality
Don't worry
sets
about
in.
me. I will
Arthur
be okay.
wasn't so sure.
He is cruel.
He had seen
Maria
the look
said,
in the girl's
the
eyes.
words escaping before
It wasn't
she could
the look
catch
of
them.
someone who was defeated.
She looked frightened, but she
it was
stood
the
her
look of
ground.
someone who was waiting.
He treats people like
Perhaps,
things.
he murmured.
You are not a thing.
But I have a feeling
Clara
she knows
smiled,
something
a
we
sad,
don't.
genuine smile.
Margaret laughed.
I know.
Cold, sharp sound.
That is why I have to leave.
She's
if
a
I
watchmaker,
stay, I become
Arthur.
one.
What could
Thank
she
you,
possibly
Maria.
know?
For everything.
Arthur didn't answer.
Maria nodded.
He turned
tears
back to the
spilling
window.
over.
Watching
reached
until
out
the couple
and
from
hugged Clara
Hawthorne and
briefly.
Associates
A
felt
forbidden
heavier
gesture
than
in the
lead.
strict hierarchy
She had
of the
carried it
house,
for weeks,
but Clara
waiting
held
for the
her
right
tight.
moment.
When
Waiting
they
for a
parted,
sign.
Maria wiped
Today's
her eyes
rejection
and
felt
straightened
like a
her
sign,
uniform,
but
not
not
the
the
one
one
she had
food
expected.
for you.
For the
It
road.
felt like a door slamming
No, Clara
shut,
said gently,
forcing her
I
to
need
open
to
a
travel
window
away.
she had been too
But
afraid
thank
to
you.
touch.
Maria left.
When they finally
closing
reached
their
the
door
building,
softly. The climb
Clara
up the
finished
stairs was
packing.
exhausting. She took one
Not
last look
physically,
around the
but
room.
spiritually.
It was bare now.
Every step
Just the
reminded
bed,
them of
the
what they had
lamp,
left behind.
the empty spaces.
The
where
key
her
turned
things
in
had
the
been.
lock with a familiar
She picked
click,
up the suitcase,
but the home
and walked
inside
out into
felt
the
different.
hallway.
The
It was
house
no
was
longer
quiet.
just a sanctuary.
Roberto had not
It was a
returned
bunker.
yet.
He
Lucas
was likely
walked
with
straight
to the
to
kitchen sink,
celebrating the
turning on the
victory he
tap
thought
and
he had
staring at the
secured.
running water.
The thought did not
His
burn
hands
her
gripping
anymore.
the porcelain
It
edges.
just felt distant.
I'll
like
make some
news about a
coffee,
stranger.
Elena said softly.
She walked down the
breaking
stairs
silence.
slowly,
Her
dragging
voice
the
sounded
suitcase
thin in
behind
the
her.
small room. The wheels
Lucas
made a
didn't
soft
turn
humming
around.
sound on the marble
I don't think I
floor.
can drink anything
She stopped
right
in
now,
the foyer.
Elena.
She
My
placed the
stomach is in
suitcase
knots.
near the door.
Try.
She walked into the living room,
moving past him
running
to
her
fill the
hand
kettle.
along the back
She
of the
needed
sofa.
to do something with her
She walked
hands.
into the library.
She needed
where
the
they used to
routine.
read on Sundays.
The smell of coffee
She
grounds.
stopped at the
boil
desk
of
where
water
she had
to
found the
pour.
ledger. It was a
She
ritual
opened
of
the bottom
normalcy
drawer.
in a world
It was
that
locked
had
again.
just tilted on its
She left
axis.
it.
Let
We
him
need
keep
to
his
stay
secrets.
warm.
It's
She
going
had
to
the
be a
copies.
cold night.
That was
Lucas
enough.
finally turned.
She returned to
leaning
the
against
foyer
the counter.
and picked up her purse.
He looked exhausted.
She checked her phone.
The lines around his
One
eyes
message
deeper
from her
than they
lawyer.
had been that morning.
Funds released.
He meant it, you know.
Ready when you are.
My father.
Clara exhaled.
He won't just let me walk
The
away.
first piece of the
He'll
puzzle
call the
was in
bank.
place.
He'll talk
She
to
heard
the
the sound
landlord.
of a car
He'll
engine
make sure no
outside.
one hires me.
Roberto was
We
home.
have the shop. He had come
Elena
to witness
reminded
the
him,
eviction,
placing a
to
mug in
ensure
front
she
of
was
him.
gone. We have
The
our
front
skills.
door opened before
we
she
have
could
each other
reach for the handle.
For how long?
Roberto stood
Lucas
there,
asked,
his
still in
voice
his
cracking.
suit, looking
He
impatient.
picked up the mug but didn't
He saw
drink.
the suitcase. Love doesn't
He
pay
saw
the
her
heating
coat
bill,
on her
Elena.
shoulders.
I told
A
you
look
that.
of relief
I was
washed
so
over his
arrogant.
face.
I
Followed
thought my
by a
name
hint
was
of
enough.
confusion.
I thought
He
I
had
could just
expected
opt out of the
resistance.
system and still
He had
survive
expected
within
tears.
it. But you're
can't.
ready, he said. You either
It
own
wasn't
the
a
game
question,
or you're played
I
by
told
it.
you I would be.
Elena
Clara
sat down
replied.
opposite him.
Her voice was steady.
She wanted
calm.
to tell him. She
The
picked up the
words burned on her
suitcase.
tongue.
Roberto
I own
stepped
the game,
aside to
Lucas.
let her pass.
I own
but
the
he
board
blocked
you're
the
afraid
path
of.
slightly. But the timing
Needing
was
to
wrong.
have the last word.
If she told him now,
Clara, this is for the
immediately
best.
after his father
You'll
threatened
see.
him, it
In a
would look
year,
like a rescue
you'll wonder
mission.
why you stayed so
It
long.
would look like she had been
Perhaps
waiting for
Clara
them to fall, so
said,
she
looking
could
him in
swoop
the eye.
It
But
would
I won't
validate
wonder why I
every
left.
suspicion Margaret
She
had
walked
voiced.
past him.
She
He
needed
smelled
to
of
be
that
sure.
same sharp
She
cologne.
needed to know the
The one that
extent of
didn't
what she
belong to
held
her.
before she
She
laid it
stepped
on
out
the
onto
table.
the porch.
Listen to me.
The air was cool.
Elena said,
Evening settling
reaching
over the
across
city.
to cover his.
The driver was
Hand
waiting
with
by the
hers.
car.
We are
looking
not played.
uncomfortable.
We are players.
He opened the trunk for her.
We just didn't know the
She
rules
placed
yet.
the suitcase
Now we
inside.
do. Before
Lucas
she got
looked
into
at
the
her,
back seat,
searching for
she
hope in
turned
her
back to the
eyes.
house. You sound so
Roberto
sure.
was standing in the
I am,
doorway.
she lied,
silhouetted
just a
against against the light of the
She was
foyer.
sure of her love.
He looked like
but
a
the
king
rest was
standing in the
terrifying
gate of a
unknown.
castle he thought
Just
was
then,
impregnable.
her phone buzzed on
Clara
the table.
reached into her pocket.
The screen lit
and
up
pulled
with
out
an
the set of
unknown number.
keys.
Elena's
master
heart
key,
skipped
the
a
garage
beat.
key, the alarm
She knew that
code.
area code.
She held them up.
It was the same
They
one
glinted
from
in
the
the
envelope
twilight.
in her bag.
Take care of the
She
house,
had been ignoring
Roberto,
it for days.
she said,
Waiting
It
for
has
the
a way of
dust to
surprising
settle.
people.
But the dust
Roberto
wasn't
frowned.
settling. The
It was
comment
choking
unsettling him slightly.
I should take this.
What is that
she
supposed
said,
to mean?
standing
Nothing,
up quickly.
Clara said.
It might be
She
about
dropped
the shop.
keys into the
A
planter
supplier.
box by the door.
Lucas nodded.
The clink was
wiping
loud
his
in the
face with his
silence.
hands.
Just a
Go
figure
ahead.
of speech.
I'm going to lie
She
down
got
for
into
a
the
minute
car and closed the
Elena
door.
walked into the
The
small
driver
hallway,
looked at her in the
pulling the
rearview
door
mirror.
to the bedroom
Where to
almost
Mrs.
closed
Clara
to
the
give
Grand
herself
Hotel,
privacy.
she said.
Her
And then
hands
we have some
trembled
stops
as she
to make.
swiped to answer.
The car pulled
She
away.
pressed the phone to her
Claire
ear,
did not look
her
back.
breath catching in
She
her
watched
throat.
the mansion shrink
Ms.
in the
Vance.
side mirror.
The voice
The
on the
lights
other end
glowing
was
warm and
professional,
inviting,
smooth,
a trap
and
disguised
aged.
as a home.
Mr. Hawthorne.
Roberto stood
Yes,
in the doorway
Elena
until the
whispered,
car turned
gripping the
corner
wall for
and
support.
disappeared. This is
She
she.
picked up the keys
We have been
from the
trying to
planter,
reach you, feeling the
Hawthorne
weight
said.
of them. The conditions of the trust have been met. He had won. Your grandfather's
had the house,
stipulations
the
were
company,
clear.
the mistress, the
Upon your
freedom.
25th birthday,
But as he closed the door and
upon
locked
the
it,
event of
the
significant
silence of the
external
house
pressure
rushed back
regarding
to
your
meet him.
marital status,
It was heavier than
the
before.
assets are to be released.
Inside the car,
Given
Clara
the
leaned
recent
her head
developments
against the
with
window.
the Sterling family,
The city lights
the board
streaked
believes
by,
the clause
blurring
has
into
been
lines
triggered.
of gold and white.
Elena closed her
She
eyes.
felt a tear slide
The
down
pressure,
her cheek.
just
The
one.
ultimatum. She wiped it,
It wasn't
away
just a
quickly.
coincidence.
This was not the
Her
end.
grandfather,
It was
a
the
man
beginning
she
of
barely
the correction.
remembered, had
She
built an
touched her
empire
bag
rivaling
phone
the
rested.
Sterlings.
The
And he
documents
had
were
protected
safe.
her from the very
funds
thing
were
she was
accessible.
facing now. The law was
What
on
does
her
that mean
side,
exactly?
though Roberto
She
didn't know
asked,
it
her
yet.
voice barely
He
audible.
thought he had kicked out a
It
dependent.
means, Ms. Vance,
He had
that you
actually
are no
released
longer
a
just a
partner.
beneficiary.
The car stopped at
You
a
are the
red light.
majority shareholder.
Clara
of
looked
Vance
at her
Global.
reflection in the window.
As of this morning,
She looked
you hold
tired,
51%
but her eyes were
of
clear.
the outstanding
The
debt
fear was
of
gone.
Sterling Industries.
In its place was a cold,
the hallway seemed
hard
to spin.
determination.
Elena had
She
to
thought
lean
about
hard
the 10
against
days.
the wall.
The legal
The irony
process
was
would
so
take
sharp
time,
it felt like physical
but the financial
pain.
maneuvering
The
could
Sterlings
happen
had
overnight.
rejected her for being
She had
poor,
called in a
for
favor
being
from
a
an old
liability,
friend,
a
while
broker
she held
who
the
owed her
keys
uncle
to their
a debt.
survival in her
The
hand.
mortgage on the mansion
They had
was
tried to
coming
buy
due
her
for
off with a
refinancing
fraction
next
of what
week.
she already owned.
Roberto had been
They
too
had tried to
arrogant
break
check
Lucas
the fine
to
print,
save their company,
too busy planning
not knowing
his
that
new
the
life
woman
to
they
notice the
despised
clause
was the
that
only
allowed
one
for a
who could
transfer
actually
of debt
save it.
ownership under
Ms. Vance,
specific marital
Hawthorne
dissolution
prompted.
conditions.
Are you still there?
He thought he owned the debt.
I'm here.
He was
she
wrong.
said, her voice
The
strengthening.
light turned green.
A strange
The
calm
car
washed
moved
over
forward.
her. Clara
The fear
took
was
a deep
still
breath,
there,
but
she
it was
would check
mixed
into
with
the
a surge
hotel.
of power she
She
had
would
never
shower.
felt before.
She would sleep for
What
a
do I
few
need to do?
hours.
Nothing
tomorrow,
yet.
the real work
The lawyer
would begin.
replied.
She
The
imagined
transfer is
Roberto
complete.
inside the mansion.
You have full
now.
voting rights.
Probably pouring a
You
drink.
can call a board meeting
Probably
at any
calling
time.
Juliana.
You can
to tell her the
restructure the
coast
debt.
was clear.
You can. They would
dissolve
celebrate
the merger
tonight.
they are attempting.
They would
with our
toast to their
competitors.
future in the rooms
The power
Clara
is
had
yours.
just vacated.
But I must advise
them.
caution.
Let them feel
Revealing
secure.
your identity now
Security
will change
was the most
everything.
dangerous feeling.
Your
of all.
relationship with Mr.
It made
Sterling,
people careless.
It will never be
It
the
made
same.
them blind.
Elena
Clara
looked through
closed
the
her
crack
eyes
in the
for a
bedroom
moment,
door,
listening
She
to
could
the
see
hum
Lucas
of the tires
sitting
on
at the kitchen
asphalt.
table, his
She
head in his
remembered the
hands.
feeling of the keys
He looked
leaving
defeated.
her hand.
He looked like a
It
man
felt like
who had
shedding
lost
a
his
weight.
world.
She was
She
no
knew
longer
she
the
could walk
mistress
out
of
there
that
and give it
house.
back to him.
She was something
She
else
could fix
now.
the broken mechanism
She was the
with a
architect
single
of its
phone call.
future.
But
The
would
car
he see it
turned
as a
onto the
gift
main boulevard,
or as a
heading
transaction?
toward the city center?
Would he feel saved
away from
or
the
would he feel
quiet
small?
suburbs where the mansion
I understand.
The
Elaine
skyline
said
loomed
softly.
ahead.
A
I need
forest
some
of
time.
glass and steel.
Don't release any
Somewhere
public
in there,
statements.
her new life was waiting.
Keep my identity
And
confidential.
somewhere
for
behind
now.
her,
the
as
old
you
life
wish.
was already
But
crumbling.
remember, secrecy
Roberto
has a
couldn't
shelf
hear the
life.
cracks forming.
The market
yet.
will notice the shift
Completely
in voting
swallowed by
power
the
soon.
night.
Thank
Only
you,
then
Mr.
did he
Hawthorne.
exhale. A
She
long,
hung up
shuddering
before he
breath
could say
that
anything
released
else.
weeks of tension.
She stood in
It
the
was
hallway
done.
for a long
The
moment.
house was his.
The phone still
The
pressed
life
to
he
her
wanted
ear,
was finally
even though the
within
line was
reach.
dead.
He walked
She
to
looked
the
at her
planter box
reflection
and
in the
retrieved
mirror
the
on the
spare
wall.
set of keys.
She saw the same
jingling them
simple
softly.
dress, the same
The sound
tired
echoed
eyes.
too loudly.
But
in the
inside,
vast
everything
entrance
had
hall.
shifted.
He looked
She
up
was
at
no
the
longer
chandelier,
just Elena the
crystals
watchmaker.
catching the dim light.
She was Elena Vance,
For years,
heir to an
Clara
empire.
had kept those crystals
The woman
sparkling.
Margaret Sterling had
He
called
hadn't
a
noticed the
distraction.
dust until now.
Was now the
a
person
fine gray
who held the
layer
pen
settling
that
on
could
the
sign their
edges.
fate.
He frowned,
She took a deep breath,
brushing a finger
steadying
along the
herself.
console table.
She couldn't tell
There was
Lucas
no
yet.
note, no
Not
final
tonight.
message.
Tonight
Just the
was about
absence
grief.
of her presence.
He needed to
It
mourn
should
the
have felt
loss
like
of his
freedom.
family's approval.
Instead,
before
it
he
felt
could
like
accept
holding
a
his
new
breath.
reality.
He walked
If she
into
told
the
him
living
now,
room and
it would
poured
overshadow
himself a
his
drink.
pain.
The
It
amber
would make
liquid
his
swirling
sacrifice
in the
seem
crystal
unnecessary.
glass.
She
He
needed to let him
celebrate.
feel the weight of his
He needed
choice,
to mark the occasion.
so that when the truth
He
came
pulled
out
out his phone
he
and
would
dialed.
know that he had chosen
"It's
her
done,"
for
he
herself,
said when the line connected.
not for what she could give
"Come
him.
over."
Elena
20
slipped
minutes
the phone
later,
into her pocket
headlights swept
and
across
walked
the
back
front
into the
facade.
kitchen.
Juliana
Lucas looked
arrived
up,
in a sports
hope
car,
flickering in his
the
eyes.
engine roaring before
Was it bad
cutting off
news?
into the quiet
Elena
night.
forced a smile.
Roberto opened
though
the
her
door
heart was
before she
racing.
could knock.
No, she stepped
Just
inside,
administrative.
her eyes wide.
They need more
scanning
time
the high
to process
ceilings,
the
the
order.
grand staircase,
Nothing
the
we can't
artwork on the
handle.
walls.
Lucas
She
let out
wore
a
a bright
breath.
smile,
He seemed to have been
vibrant
holding
and
for hours.
energetic. A
Okay.
stark contrast
Okay, we
to
can
the
handle
somber
it.
mood Clara
We
had
always
left
do.
behind.
Always.
Roberto Roberto,
she agreed.
she breathed.
She
stepping
walked
into
over
his
to him
arms.
and wrapped
Is
her
it
arms around his
really
neck.
ours? It's mine.
Resting her
He
forehead
corrected
against
gently,
his, though he hugged her
She
tight.
could feel the warmth of
And
his
now
skin,
it's ours to share.
the steady beat of his
She
heart.
pulled away.
He had chosen
walking
her
her
over
over
millions
millions
of
of
dollars. She
He
spun
had
around,
chosen
her
love
dress
over
flaring
legacy.
out.
That
It's
was worth
magnificent.
more than any company
I can't
share.
believe she just left.
I'm scared, Elena.
Just like that,
he admitted into
She
her
knew
hair.
when she was beaten.
I know,
Roberto
she
said,
whispered,
taking a sip
but
of
I'm
his
here.
drink.
And I'm
He
not
tried
going
to sound
anywhere.
confident.
She held
but
him
the words
tighter,
felt hollow
hiding
in
the
the empty
secret that
space.
burned between them.
She understood
It was
the
a
reality
protective
of the
lie,
situation.
she told herself.
Juliana walked
For
over
now.
to the fireplace,
But as she looked over his
running
shoulder
her
at
hand
the
along
window,
the mantel,
where the city
we should
lights
change the
twinkled
decor.
like distant stars.
It's a bit dark.
She knew the
Heavy.
clock was ticking.
Maybe paint the
The
walls
Sterlings
a lighter
would feel
color.
the shift soon.
Get rid of some of
the
this
market
old
would
furniture.
react.
Roberto
And when the
watched
storm
her.
broke,
She
he
had
had
imagined
imagined
this
ready to
moment
stand not
1,000
just
times.
beside Lucas,
Juliana
but in
here,
front of
in
him,
this house with
shielding him from
But
the
hearing her
fallout
talk
of his
about
family's
changing
arrogance.
things,
The
erasing
irony
the
tasted
history of the
bitter
room,
and sweet all at
sent
once.
a strange ripple
They had
through
disowned
him.
her for not
Clara
being
chose
enough.
most of this,
not
he said
knowing she was
quietly.
the only one.
Juliana
who was too
turned,
much. Her expression
rested her
shifting
chin on
slightly.
Lucas's shoulder.
Clara isn't
closing
here
her
anymore,
eyes.
Roberto.
The game had
We're
changed.
making new memories.
The pieces were
We don't
set.
need reminders
And
of
she
the
was the
past.
only one who knew
Of course,
how the
he
board
said,
really
forcing a
worked.
smile.
Sleep,
Whatever
she
you
murmured.
want.
He
Tomorrow
walked
we
to the
start
sideboard
again.
and opened a
Tomorrow,
cabinet to
Lucas
retrieve another
echoed,
glass,
pulling
her.
away slightly
He
to
reached
look
for
at
the
her.
champagne. they
Whatever
kept for
happens,
special
we face it
occasions.
together.
His hand
Together,
paused.
she promised.
The stock was
But as she
lower
watched
than
him
he
walk
expected.
toward the bedroom,
There were only
Elena
2
touched
bottles
the
left.
pocket where her phone
Clara
lay.
usually managed
The weight
the
of the
inventory.
secret was heavy.
He shook off
But
the
for
thought
the first
and
time,
popped the cork.
she didn't feel
The sound was
burdened by
sharp,
it.
like a
She
gunshot
felt armed.
in the quiet house.
The Sterlings thought they
He
had
poured
won
the
by
wine,
cutting
the
them
bubbles
off.
fizzing aggressively.
They didn't know they had just
To us,
severed their
Juliana
own lifeline.
said, clinking her
And
glass
H. Lucas
against
slept
his.
fitfully.
Her
His
eyes
brow
sparkled
furrowed
with
even in
ambition.
rest.
To the future.
She watched the rise
To the
and
future,
fall of his chest,
Roberto echoed,
memorizing the rhythm.
He drank, but the
She
champagne
knew that when he
tasted
woke,
flat.
the reality of
moved through the
yesterday
house,
would
room
crash
by
down
room.
on him all over
Juliana
again.
pointed out what
The
she would
boardroom,
change.
the ultimatum,
The curtains
the
in the
rejection.
dining room were too
It wasn't
heavy.
a dream.
The rug in
It
the
was their
hallway
life
was
now.
worn.
She
The
slipped
art
out
in
of
the
bed
study was
quietly,
too somber.
careful not to wake
Roberto
him.
nodded along.
The apartment was cold.
But with every
The
suggestion,
heating had been
the
paid
house
for the
seemed
month.
to shrink.
But the
He
knowledge that
realized
future
with a
bills
dawning
were now
sense
their
of
sole
unease
responsibility
that he didn't know
made
where the
chills
bills
feel
were paid.
penetrating.
He didn't know
Elena
the name
walked
of
to
the
the
gardener
kitchen and
He
touched
didn't
the
know
phone
the
in her
code for
pocket.
the security
It
system
was a secret
that Clara
weight,
had always
a
entered.
stone of power.
He had
in a sea
assumed
of
these things
uncertainty.
ran themselves.
She could fix this.
Who manages the staff?
She could make a
Juliana
call
asked, as they
and the
passed
Sterling's
kitchen.
threats would vanish.
It was immaculate,
But
but
would
cold.
Lucas ever look at
No
her the
smell
same
of
way
dinner
again?
cooking.
Would he
No
feel
sound
like a
of
project
movement.
she had saved?
Maria handles
The
the
love they
scheduling,
shared was built
Roberto
on
said.
equality,
And the
on
agency
two
sends
people
the
fixing
rest.
broken things
Are they
together.
staying? Juliana
If she
asked,
revealed herself as
wrinkling
the
her
savior,
nose.
the balance
I'd prefer
would
new
tip.
people.
He would feel
People who are
indebted.
loyal to us.
And pride she
Their
knew
employees
was a
Roberto
fragile
said,
thing in a
perhaps too
man who had
sharply.
just lost his
They
inheritance.
do their job.
Lucas
Juliana
appeared in the
sensed his
doorway,
tension and
rubbing his
softened her
eyes.
tone.
He
I
wore the
just want
same
everything
clothes
to be
from
perfect.
yesterday, wrinkled
For
and
us.
weary.
This is our
Morning,
fresh start.
he rasped. The phrase
He
hung
tried
in
to
the air,
smile,
but
fresh
it was
start.
a ghost of his usual
Clara had
warmth.
seen that phrase in the
Morning,
notebook.
Elena
Roberto
replied,
pushed the memory
turning
on
away.
the kettle.
He walked
I
to
made
the window
coffee.
and looked
You're
out at
an
the dark
angel,
garden. He said,
The lights were
walking
off
over
out
to
there.
kiss her cheek.
Usually, his
Clara
lips
had
were
the
cold.
landscape lighting
He
time
leaned against the
perfectly.
counter.
Tonight,
staring at
the
the
garden
small
was
stack
devoid
of
of mail
mail
on the table.
Did you call
I
the
should
lawyer?
check the
Juliana
accounts.
asked. See
Coming
where
up
we
behind
stand
him.
with the shop
To
supplies.
finalize the transfer,
Elena's
it's in
heart
process,
tightened.
Roberto said.
She knew what he would find.
It takes time.
Arthur
But
Sterling
the papers
had
are
connections
signed
with every
She's
major
gone.
bank in the city.
Good,
Juliana
Lucas
said,
she
resting
started,
her head on
but
his
he was
shoulder.
already moving to his
I don't want her
laptop.
coming back.
Just a quick
Sometimes
check,
people try
he
to
said,
sneak back
opening
in.
the browser.
Claim they
He
forgot
logged
something.
in, his fingers
She
tapping
won't come back,
nervously on the
Roberto
keys.
said.
The
He
loading
remembered
Clara's
Clara's
spun
parting
for a few
words.
seconds.
It has a
an
way of
eternity in
surprising
the quiet
people.
room.
He shook
Then
his
the
head.
message popped up.
She was bluffing.
Account frozen.
She was
pending
hurt.
review.
She had no
Lucas
power.
stared at the screen.
He had the money.
He blinked.
He had the law
refreshed
on
the
his side.
page.
They
The
moved
message
to the master
remained.
bedroom. He tried
It was
another
the heart
account.
of the house.
Access
The
denied.
room where they had slept.
He let
for
out a
15
short,
years.
humorless laugh.
Juliana
He
walked
didn't
in
wait
and
Lucas
immediately
said, his
went
voice
to the
hollow.
closet.
I knew he
She
would,
opened the
but
doors.
I didn't think
half
he'd
of it
move
was
this
empty
fast.
now, where
He's
Clara's
freezing
clothes
everything.
had been.
The
The
business
other half
account
still held
my personal
Roberto's
savings.
suits.
I'll
He's
need
trying
more
to starve us
space,
out.
Juliana said,
Elena walked
measuring
over
the empty
and placed a
hangers
hand
with her
on his
eyes.
shoulder.
We might
She
need
could
to
feel the
expand
tension
walking.
radiating from his
Knock
muscles,
down this wall, maybe.
tight as steel
Roberto
cables.
looked at the bed.
We have cash
The
from
sheets
the shop.
were fresh.
We'll manage.
Changed by Maria
For
before
how long,
Clara
Elena?
left.
Lucas
They
smelled
stood
of
up,
lavender,
pushing the
Clara's
laptop
scent.
away as
He
if it
felt a
burned
sudden
him.
urge to
He
strip
began
the
to
bed,
pace the small
to change
kitchen.
everything.
He's
But
not
he
just
stopped
cutting me
himself.
off.
We
He's
can
sending
look
a
into
message.
renovations next
He
week,
wants me to
he
come
said.
crawling back.
Tonight, let's
He
just
wants me to bring
rest.
you to him.
Juliana
and tell you it's
turned
over.
off the main light.
He stopped and
leaving
looked
only
at
the
her,
bedside
his
lamps
eyes
on.
filled with a mixture
She
of
sat
anger
on the
and
edge of the
despair.
bed,
I
patting
can't
the
let him
space
win.
beside her.
But I can't let
Roberto
you
sat
suffer
down,
because of my
the mattress
stubbornness.
dipping under his weight.
I am not suffering.
It felt different,
Elena said firmly.
Or maybe he was different.
She stepped into his
He
path,
looked around the room,
forcing him to
the
look
photos
at her.
on the nightstand
I am
had
here
been removed by Clara.
choice. Only
Do
his
not take that
remained.
away from me
He
by
was alone
deciding
in the
what I can
frame,
endure.
smiling at a
But
camera
it's not
held
fair.
by a wife who was
Lucas
now gone.
shouted.
Are
The
you okay,
frustration
Juliana
finally
asked,
boiling over.
noticing his silence.
silence.
He slammed his hand
You
against
seemed
the
distracted,
wall.
then immediately
Just tired,
winced,
Roberto
rubbing
lied.
his knuckles.
It's been a long day.
You deserve better.
It's over now,
You deserve
Juliana
stability.
said, leaning in to
And
kiss his cheek.
I dragged you
No
into
more
a
fighting.
war I can't win.
No more secrets.
We are winning,
Just us.
Elena lied, her voice
Roberto
steady.
nodded, but he
We are
couldn't
still
relax.
standing.
That is
The
a
house
victory.
creaked.
Old
Lucas
houses
slumped
settled,
against the
he knew
counter,
that.
defeated.
But tonight,
I need to go to
every
the shop.
sound felt like a footstep.
I need to work. A
If I
floorboard
sit here,
groaned
I'll
in
go
the hallway.
crazy.
The wind
Okay,
tapped
Elena
against
said.
the window pane.
I'll come with you.
He thought about Clara.
The walk to the watch
hotel
shop
room.
was silent.
Was she crying?
The
Was
city
she
was
angry?
bustling.
Or was she
People
doing
rushing
something
to
else?
jobs
He
they
remembered
hated.
the calmness in
Worrying
her
about
eyes when she
problems that
left.
felt small.
It wasn't the
compared to
look of a
theirs.
defeated woman.
Elena watched
It was the
Lucas
look
from
of someone who
corner
knew
of her eye.
something he didn't.
He walked with his head
Roberto,
down, Juliana
avoiding the
whispered,
gaze of passers-by,
pulling him back to the present.
He felt exposed.
Look at me.
To the world,
He turned
was
to
still
her.
a Sterling.
She was
But he
beautiful,
knew he
young,
was now
full
in
of life.
exile.
The shame was a physical
represented
cloak he
everything
wore.
he thought he
When
wanted.
they arrived at the shop,
Freedom from
the familiar
responsibility.
smell of oil,
Freedom
and
from the
old wood
past.
greeted them.
But as
It
he
should have
looked
been
at her,
comforting.
he felt a sudden
Instead, it felt
crushing
like a
weight of
cage.
expectation.
Lucas went
She
straight to the
expected him to
workbench,
provide.
picking up.
She expected
loop
this
and a
house to be a
disassembled
palace.
clock. His
She
hands,
expected him
usually
to fix
so
the
steady,
curtains,
trembled
the staff,
slightly.
the bills, the light.
He tried to fit a gear
Clara
into
had
place,
handled the
but it
foundation
slipped,
so smoothly,
clattering
he had
onto the
forgotten
table.
it was there.
Damn it!
Now the foundation was
sweeping
exposed,
the tools aside,
and it looked shaky.
He buried his face
I
in
love
his
this
hands.
house, Juliana
I
said,
can't even fix
lying
a
back
simple
on the
mechanism.
pillows.
What
It
kind of
feels like
man
a
am
castle.
I? It's
Alina
a liability.
moved around the counter.
Roberto
and
muttered
stood
under his
behind
breath,
him.
then louder.
She didn't
"It's a
speak.
home."
She
stood
simply
up,
placed her
and walked to
hands
the
on his
window again.
shoulders, and
He
began
needed
to
air.
massage the
He
tension
looked out at
away.
the driveway.
She could feel
It was
the heat
empty.
of his skin,
No car.
the rapid pulse
No
in
lights.
his neck. Just
You
the
are a
dark
man
road
who is
leading
hurting.
away, she whispered.
He thought about the mortgage.
Give yourself grace,
He had
Lucas.
refinanced last
He called
year
me
to
this
free up
morning,
capital for
Lucas
his new
said into
ventures.
his palms.
The payments
My
were high,
father,
but
He
manageable.
didn't yell.
Or they
He
were
just
manageable
stated
when
facts.
Clara's dividends
He said
were
the
added
company's
to the
stock
account.
is dipping
He had
because
frozen
of
her
the uncertainty
access,
of my
but
position.
the income stream
He
was
said I
tied
am hurting
to the joint
shareholders.
holdings.
He made me feel
to
like a
untangle
criminal
that.
for wanting to
The
be
lawyer
happy.
would handle it.
Elena's
He
blood
always
ran
handled
cold.
it. Come
She
to
knew the
bed,
stock was
Juliana
dipping.
called out, her
She
voice
had seen the
sleepy.
reports on her
Stop
phone
worrying.
when she called Hawthorne.
You won.
It
Roberto
wasn't because
turned
of
from the
Lucas.
window.
It was
Yes,
because
he said.
Vance Global
I
had
won.
started quietly
He walked back
acquiring
to the bed
shares
and turned
creating
off the
market
lamp.
volatility.
The room
Her
plunged
father's
into
company
darkness.
was maneuvering.
He lay down
and
beside
Lucas was
Juliana,
taking the blame,
staring at the
The
ceiling.
irony was suffocating.
She fell asleep quickly.
She was the cause
her
of the
breathing
pressure,
even and
he was the
soft.
victim. Roberto lay
Lucas,
awake, she said.
the
her
silence
voice
of the
trembling
house
slightly.
pressed in on him.
It's not your fault.
It wasn't the peaceful silence.
It feels
of
like
sleep,
it,
he murmured.
It was a waiting
He turned on the
silence.
stool and
He
took
closed
her
his
hands in
eyes,
his.
trying to
His
summon
eyes
the
were
feeling
red-rimmed.
of triumph.
Elena,
He
I
tried
love
to
you.
imagine the next
More than
day,
anything.
the next week.
But I can't ask
But all
you
he
to
could
stay
see
in
was
this
Clara's
sinking
face
ship.
in the foyer.
If my father
The way
wants
she
me
had
to
dropped the
choose,
keys, maybe I should
the
let
way
you
she had
go,
said,
take
so you
care
can
of
be
the
safe.
house.
So
He
you don't
rolled
get
over,
dragged down
pulling
with
the
me.
covers up.
The words hit
The
her like a
lavender
physical
scent was
blow.
still there.
This was
Faint
the
but
ultimatum
persistent.
working its
He
poison.
buried his face
He
in
was
the
trying to
pillow,
sacrifice
trying to
himself
block it
for
out.
her.
He
Just
told
as she
himself
was planning
he
to
was just
sacrifice
tired.
her truth
He
for
told
him.
himself that
He
tomorrow
thought letting her go
everything
was
would
an
feel
act of
real.
love.
Tomorrow
No,
the papers would
Elena
be
said,
filed. Pulling her
tomorrow
hands
Clara
away
would be a
slightly to
memory.
cup his face.
But as he drifted
You don't
towards
get to
sleep,
make that choice
a
for
nagging
me.
thought kept
That is
him
my
on the
choice,
edge of consciousness.
and I choose you.
He had kicked her
Do
out.
you understand?
He had taken
I
everything.
am not a passenger
But
in
why
your
did it
life,
feel like
Lucas.
he was the one who
I
had
am
been
your
left
partner.
behind outside?
But I have
The
nothing
wind
to give
picked
you.
up, he
Rattling
whispered.
the window frame.
I'm broke.
A branch
I'm
scraped
disowned.
against the glass.
I'm nothing.
Sounding like
You
a
are everything
fingernail trying to
she
get
countered.
in. Tears
Roberto
pricking her
opened his eyes in the dark.
You are honest.
He listened.
You are kind.
The sound stopped.
You are real. He told himself
Money
it
comes
was
and
just
goes.
the wind.
Families
He closed
fade.
his eyes again.
But what we have,
But the
that is
feeling of
rare.
being watched remained.
Don't throw it away
A
because
shadow
you were
in the
scared.
corner of the room.
Lucas
that
looked
hadn't
at
been
her,
there before,
searching for any
The house
sign
was
of
holding
doubt.
its breath.
He found none.
And Roberto,
He
for
leaned
the first time in
forward
his
and
life,
rested his forehead
was afraid
against
to
hers.
exhale.
I'm so
The mansion,
scared, Elena.
In the mansion,
I know, she
the
breathed.
silence was heavy
But I'm
with
here.
history. They
With
stayed like that for a
unspoken
long
words and
moment,
accumulated
breathing
secret.
in sync.
Here,
But over
in the
Lucas's
sterile
shoulder,
neutrality of the
Elena's
Grand
eyes
Hotel,
opened. The silence
she looked
was
at the
empty.
phone sitting on
It
the
was the
workbench.
silence of a place
It
where no
buzzed
one knew
silently.
her name.
A text
Where
from
no one
Hawthorne.
expected anything.
The board
from
is
her.
ready for your
She
directive.
dropped the key card
The
on
sterling
the small
acquisition
desk by the
is at
entrance
49%
and walked further into the room.
One more push,
It was
and we
clean,
control the vote.
impersonal,
She looked
decorated
back
in
at
shades
Lucas.
of beige and gray.
He was closed his
A
eyes,
single bed,
finding
a
peace
television
in her
mounted on
presence.
the wall.
If she
A
told
window
him now, the
overlooking
peace
the
would
city
shatter.
skyline.
He would
It was
feel
a box,
manipulated.
a
He would feel
temporary
like a
container
pawn in
for
her
a
game.
woman who had nowhere
She
else
couldn't
to
do
go.
that to him.
Clara walked
She had
to
to
the
protect
window
him
and
from the
looked out
truth until he
The
was
city was
strong
alive
enough
down
to
there.
stand beside her.
Cars
as an
moved
equal,
like streams of
not
light.
beneath her.
People
as a
walked on the
beneficiary.
sidewalks.
She
Life
made her
continued
decision
without pause.
She would not reveal
She
her
pressed her
identity
hand
yet.
against the cold glass.
She would use her power to
She was
stabilize
alone,
the situation.
truly
from the
alone for the
shadows.
first time in 20
She would stop her
years.
company from
The
crushing
realization
Sterling
hit her not
completely,
like a wave,
giving them enough
but
rope
like a
to hang
slow
themselves,
sinking
but
sensation,
not enough to destroy
pulling her
Lucas's
down into the
legacy
mattress of her
entirely.
own sorrow.
She would become
She
the
turned
invisible
away from the
hand
window
that
and
guided
walked
them
to
to
the
safety.
bed.
She
was
sat on
lonely
the edge.
Her
She would have to
suitcase
bear the
standing
weight of
upright
the secret
beside her
alone.
like a sentinel.
I need to make a call.
She didn't unpack. Elena said softly.
She didn't turn on the
pulling
main
away.
light.
To my cousin,
She let the room stay
about
dim,
some family
lit
money.
only by the glow
Maybe
of
we
the
can get a
streetlights
small loan
filtering
to
through
keep
the
the shop
curtains.
running. She
Lucas
took off her
looked up,
shoes,
hope
placing them
flickering in his
neatly on the
eyes.
carpet.
You do that?
She took off
off her jacket,
Ask your family for
folding
help.
it over the chair.
They owe me. These
Elena
small,
said, her voice
mundane
steady.
actions felt
It
monumental.
wasn't a lie, not entirely.
In the mansion, let me
Maria
handle
would have
this.
unpacked for her.
You focus on the watches.
In the mansion,
Let me
Roberta
fight
would have
this
asked
battle.
her what she wanted for
Lucas
dinner.
hesitated.
Here, there was
His
no
pride
one.
warred with
The
his
responsibility
necessity.
for her own
Finally, he
survival
nodded.
rested entirely on her
Thank you.
shoulders.
She wrapped her
I don't know
arms
what I'd
around
do
herself,
without you.
rubbing her
You'll never
upper
have to
arms
find
as
out,
if she could
she
generate
promised.
warmth through friction.
She walked to the back
The
office
cold
and
wasn't just
closed
in
the
the
door.
room.
It
Her
was
hands
inside
shook
her.
as she dialed
It was the
Hawthorne.
coldness of betrayal.
When he answered, her
The
voice
voice
was
guarded
cold
like an
commanding.
obsolete object.
Mr. Hawthorne.
She thought
Change
about
of
Roberto
plans.
sleeping in the
Ms.
master
Vance,
bed,
the
with
lawyer
Juliana
sounded
beside
surprised.
him.
Is
She thought
everything
about
all
them
right?
touching the things
No,
she had touched,
she said,
looking
sleeping
through
in
the
the
thin
space
wall at
she had
Lucas, who
curated.
had picked up his tools
The image
again.
burned in her mind.
He was trying to fix
sharp
the
and
gear he
acidic.
had dropped.
A sob
He was
caught in
trying
her
to fix
throat.
himself.
She had held it
Do
back
not
all
initiate
day.
a hostile takeover.
She had held it back in the car,
Not yet.
in the lobby.
I want you to
elevator.
stabilize the stock.
But here, in the
By
dark,
the debt, but
there was no
restructure it.
audience to perform
Give them
for.
breathing room.
No reputation
That is
to maintain.
unconventional.
She let it
Hawthorne
out.
noted.
A single,
rejected you.
ragged breath
They
that turned
threatened
into a
you.
cry.
Why would you help
She buried
them?
her face in
Because
her
he is in
hands,
there,
her shoulders
Elena
shaking,
said,
her voice
The
cracking
tears came
slightly.
hot and fast.
And if I
soaking her
destroy them,
palms.
I destroy
She
a part
cried
of
for the
him.
marriage that
I
had
need
died
to save
years
the
ago,
company
but
without
she had
him
only
knowing
just
it was
buried.
me. Can
She
you do
cried
that?
for the wasted
There was a
time.
pause on the line.
The years spent
It will
trying
be
to be
difficult
enough for a man
but
who
yes,
had decided she was
we can
nothing.
create a shell company.
She cried for the
An
loneliness
anonymous
that
investor.
stretched out in front
Do it,
of Elena commanded.
or like a dark road.
And Mr. Hawthorne?
It was a raw, ugly
not a word
sound,
to anyone.
the sound of a
Especially
heartbreaking
not to
in real
Lucas
time.
Sterling.
She didn't
As you
try to
wish,
stop
Miss
Vance. She needed
She
to
hung
feel
up
it.
and leaned
She
against
needed
the
to know
door.
that she could still
sliding
feel
down
pain,
until she sat
because
on the
pain
floor.
meant she was alive.
The tears came then,
Minutes
hot and
passed,
fast, or maybe hours.
She wiped them away quickly.
Time felt fluid,
checking
in the
her
dim room.
reflection in A.
Eventually, the
darkened
tears
window.
slowed.
Her
She
eyes
composed
felt
her face.
swollen. Her head
She
heavy.
had to be strong.
She lay back on
She
the
had
bed,
to be the wall between
staring at the
Lucas and
ceiling.
the storm.
The white
When she
plaster
walked
was
back
blank,
out, offering
Lucas
no
looked up.
answers.
Did they agree?
She thought about her
They will
Uncle
transfer
Henry.
the funds tomorrow.
He had been the only
Elena
one who
said,
had warned
forcing
her.
a smile.
Clara, he had told
Lucas
her
let out a
once
long
years
breath
ago
his
when she
shoulders
first
dropping.
married Roberto.
You saved us,
Never
Elena.
tie your worth to
We
a
saved
man's
us,
wallet, she corrected
and never
gently.
tie your heart to
She
a
walked
man
over
who doesn't
and
know
kissed
how
him.
to hold it. She tasted
She
the
had
salt
dismissed
of
him
his
then.
relief. She had been
But
in
as
love.
she held him,
she had
felt
believed
the
that
distance
love was
growing.
enough to bridge
The
any
secret
gap.
was a wedge,
Now,
invisible
lying in
but
this hotel
real.
room, she
His
was
voice
protecting
echoed
him,
in her memory,
but she was
clear
also
and
hiding
steady.
from him. You have your
She
own
wondered
strength,
how long
Clara.
she could keep this up.
Don't let them convince
How
you
long
otherwise.
before the truth came out?
She reached for her
And
phone
when it
on
did,
the nightstand.
would he forgive her for
the
the
screen
lie?
lit up. The day wore
Blindingly
on.
bright in the
Customers
dark.
came and
There
went.
were no messages
unaware
from
of the
Roberto.
drama unfolding.
She hadn't
behind the
expected
counter.
any.
Lucas
There was a
worked
message
with
from
renewed
an
focus.
unknown number.
The weight lifted
She
slightly.
opened it.
It was
Elena
from
watched
Arthur,
her private
her
lawyer.
heart full of love,
The one
and
Roberto
heavy with
didn't know
fear.
about.
She had
The
chosen
one
to
who had
protect
handled
him,
her uncle's estate.
but she knew that
The
protection
funds are
came
liquid.
with a price.
Call me when you can.
She was walking a tightrope
rush,
over
but
a
soon.
canyon of secrets.
Clara stared at the
As
words.
evening fell, the funds
They locked up the shop.
The trust her
The
uncle
street
had
lights
left her.
flickered on.
Roberto had
Lucas
always
took her
dismissed
hand
it
as
as
they walked
negligible.
home.
A
I don't
small
say it
allowance
enough
that didn't
he said
matter
quietly.
compared to his empire.
But you are the best
He had
thing
never
that ever
asked for the
happened to me.
details. Elena
He had never
squeezed his
cared.
hand. That was
Hiding
his
the
second
tremor
mistake.
in her fingers.
She pressed the
I
call
know,
button.
she said.
The phone
And you
rang
are
twice
mine.
before Arthur
They
picked
walked
up.
into the night.
His voice was
Two
warm,
figures against the
professional,
city lights,
but laced with concern.
Elena looked up at
Clara,
the
are
sky,
you safe? I'm safe.
where the
Arthur,
first
she
stars
said.
were appearing.
Her voice sounded
She thought of
hoarse
the
from
empire
crying.
she owned.
She
the
cleared her
power she
throat.
wielded.
I'm at the
It
Grand
meant
Hotel.
nothing compared to
Good,
the warmth
Arthur
of
said.
sense that they were
I heard.
living on borrowed
Well,
time.
I heard you
and
left the
borrowed money.
residence. He
I'm
spent
so
late
sorry,
nights
Clara.
poring over bank
I wish I could have
statements.
been there.
Tracing the
There's
origins
nothing
of the
anyone
loan
could have
that
done,
had saved
Clara
them.
said.
He couldn't
Looking
find a
at her
source,
reflection in
and
the
that
dark
terrified
window.
him more than
He
the
made
debt
his
itself.
choice.
Now
To
I have to
Lucas,
make mine.
mystery meant danger.
You sound tired.
To Elena,
Arthur
it meant
noted
protection.
gently.
But
Do
the
you want
wall
to talk
between
about
them
it,
was
or
growing
do you want to
thicker
talk about
with
every
every
secret
secret
she
she
kept?
paused.
One
She
evening,
could talk about the
the
pain.
rain returned.
She could tell him
tapping
how much
against
it
the
hurt
window
to leave
pane
the
just
home
as it
she
had on the
loved.
night they went
But
to the
talking about
mansion.
it wouldn't change it.
Elena stood by the
And
sink,
she was done being
washing a
victim.
single cup. Let's talk about
Lucas
the business,
sat at the
Arthur.
table, a
You
letter
said
in
the
his
funds
hand.
are liquid, yes.
It was from his
Arthur
father's
confirmed.
lawyers.
The
They had
trust
noticed
matured
the
last
influx
month.
of capital into
Your
their
uncle
accounts.
structured it so it would
They were
only be
alleging
accessible to you
irregularities.
directly. They were
Roberto
threatening
has
an
no
audit.
claim on it.
They know it's
Lucas
entirely
said, his
separate
voice
from the
devoid of
marital
emotion.
assets. He didn't look
It's
up.
significant, Clara.
They say the funds are
more than you
suspicious.
might remember.
They say
How
if I
much
don't
she
return the
asked.
money and
She
sever
needed to know
ties
the
with
weight of the
questionable
tool in her
influences,
hand. They'll
enough to
report
cover
me
the
to the
mortgage on the
authorities,
mansion.
Arthur
Elena
said.
dried her hands
And enough to
slowly,
buy the debt
turning
if
to
it goes
face
into
him.
default.
Her heart
Your
hammered
uncle was
against her
very
ribs.
specific about the
She had
clauses.
anticipated this.
He knew Roberto's
The Sterlings
style.
were thorough.
He knew he
They would
leveraged
sniff out
everything.
any anomaly.
Clara
any
closed her
weakness.
eyes.
And she
Her
was the
uncle had
anomaly.
planned for this.
It's a bluff, Lucas.
He had known Roberto
They
better
want to
than
scare
she
you.
had.
Is it? He had left her a lifeboat,
Lucas finally looked
not
at
just a
her.
gift. His eyes
The
were
mortgage,
dark,
she repeated.
filled with exhaustion
Roberto
that went
refinanced it
beyond
last year.
sleeplessness. He used the
Where
house
did the
as
money come
collateral
from,
for his
Elena?
new ventures.
You told me it was a
Exactly,
family
Arthur
loan.
said. But I called
And
your
those
cousin.
ventures are risky.
She doesn't know anything.
If he misses
about
a payment,
the
heir
bank
left
can
the
call the
room.
loan. Elena
But if
froze.
someone else owns the
She had
debt,
been caught in the lie.
they control the property.
She could tell him the truth.
Clara
now.
sat up.
She could
The
walk
sadness
over to
was
him,
still there,
take the
a
letter,
dull ache
and
in
make
her
a phone
chest,
call that would
but it was being
silence his father
overshadowed by a
forever.
rising tide.
She could reveal that she was the heir to
This was not
Vance
about
Global,
revenge.
that she
It was
owned the
about
debt,
justice. That she was the
it
one
was about
holding the
ensuring
power.
that Roberto
But the timing
understood
was
the
wrong.
value of what he
It was still too
throwing
raw.
away. If
Can
she
we do it
revealed it
quietly,
now,
she asked.
after he had been threatened,
I don't want him to know
after he
it's
had
me.
sacrificed his
Not yet.
inheritance for her,
We can use a holding
it would
company,
look like
Arthur
manipulation.
said.
Shell
It would look like she
Corporation.
had let him suffer.
We can acquire the
just to
debt
prove a
position
point.
without
It
triggering
would
his
look like
alarms
revenge.
immediately.
But Clara,
I had to protect
are you sure
us,
this is aggressive?
Helena said, her voice
Once you start
trembling.
this, there is
She
no
couldn't
going
say
back.
more without saying
It will be
everything.
public eventually.
By lying, Clara looked
Lucas
around
stood
the
up,
empty hotel room,
the chair scraping
She
harshly
thought about the way
against the
Roberto
floor.
had looked at her.
I chose
when
you
he
over
handed her
millions,
the divorce
Elena.
papers.
I chose you
Like
over
she was
my
nothing.
family.
Like
I
she
did
was
that
less than
because
nothing.
I thought we were partners.
She thought about
But
Juliana
you're keeping
walking
secrets.
through her home,
Big
planning
secrets.
to paint over her life.
And now my father
There is no going
using
back,
those secrets
Arthur,
to
she
try
said
to
firmly.
destroy me.
He started
He rubbed
this
his
war.
face, his voice
I'm just going to
breaking.
finish it.
I can't do
Understood,
this.
Arthur said.
I can't fight a
I'll
war
draft the
where I don't even
paperwork.
know who the enemy
I'll need your
is.
signature tomorrow
Is it my
morning.
father?
Can you
Or
come
is
to
it
the
you?
office? I'll
The
be
word
there,
struck
Clara
her like a
said.
physical blow.
9 o'clock.
She saw the
Rest
doubt
well,
in his
Clara,
eyes.
Arthur said
It
softly.
wasn't anger. It
You're
was doing the
betrayal.
right thing.
He felt
Clara
powerless.
ended the call,
and she
She
realized
placed the
then
phone
that
back
the
on the
protection was
nightstand.
becoming his
The
prison.
room was still dark,
As long as
still
she was
cold,
here,
but she
hiding
felt
her
different.
power, he
The
would always
paralysis
feel
was
like
gone.
he was failing to
The
provide,
grief was still
failing
present,
to protect
but it was
her.
no longer
He would
drowning
always
her.
be looking over
It
his
was
shoulder,
She
waiting
stood
for
up
the other
and
shoe
walked
to
to the
drop.
suitcase.
He needed to
She
stand on
opened
his
it
own.
and took out a change
He
of
needed to
clothes.
know he could survive
She went into
without
the
her,
bathroom
without her
and turned on
money,
the shower.
without her secrets.
The water was hot,
and she needed to
steaming
build
up the
her
mirror.
empire
She
without the
stood
shadow
under
of
the
his
spray,
family's prejudice,
letting the water
hanging
wash
over
over
her
every
face.
move.
Mixing
She
with
made
the
the
remnants
decision
of her
in that
tears.
moment.
She
It
was
was
the
the
hardest
hardest
thing
thing
she had ever
trying
done.
to wash away the
harder than
feeling of
facing
being
his
touched
parents,
by pity,
harder
by
than
dismissal.
hiding the letter in
When
her
she
bag.
got out,
She had to
wrapped
let him
herself
go,
in the white hotel
not because
robe.
she stopped loving
She
him,
looked in the mirror,
but because she
her
loved
eyes
him
were
enough
red,
to
her
let him
face
find his
pale.
own strength.
But her jaw was
and
set.
she needed to find
She
hers
looked like someone
without him
who had
looking
survived
down
a
on her
storm
from a pedestal
and was
she had
now
secretly
checking the
built.
damage to prepare
You're
for
right,
the rebuild.
Elena said softly.
She dried her hair.
She walked
and
over to
brushed
the
her
table
teeth.
and placed her
Routine.
hands on the wood,
Structure.
steadying herself.
These were things she could
You
control.
shouldn't have to fight this
She
war.
turned off the bathroom
Not like
light
this, and went back
What does
to
that
the
mean?
bedroom.
Lucas
She didn't
asked,
turn on the television,
sensing the shift in her
She didn't
tone.
want noise.
The anger was
She
fading,
wanted to think,
replaced by fear.
She sat by the window.
It means
again.
I'm leaving.
The city
she
was
said.
quieter now.
The words felt
fewer cars,
like glass in
the
her
lights
throat.
in the surrounding
Lucas
buildings
stepped
were dimming
back
as
if
if
she
people
had
went
pushed
to
him.
sleep. What? Somewhere out
No,
there. Roberto
Elena,
was
no.
sleeping.
We can
Did he
fix
feel
this.
guilty? Did he feel
can return the
anything?
money.
Or was he dreaming
We
of his
can.
new life?
There's nothing to fix,
Unaware that the
Lucas.
ground was
She
shifting beneath him,
interrupted.
Clara
Clara
hoped he
strength.
slept well. She couldn't
She
let him
hoped he
argue.
felt secure.
If he argued,
Because
she would
security
break.
made people
You need to be
careless.
free. It
You
made
need
them
to
overlook
rebuild
the
your life
details.
without.
It made them
without
forget to check the
complicating
locks.
it.
Your
She
family
thought
wants
about
you
the
to
10
choose.
days.
Fine.
The title of the newspaper
choosing for
article
you.
she imagined
I don't want you
writing
to
in her
choose
head.
for me.
10 days
Lucas
later,
shouted. It was a
rounding the
specific
table to
time
grab
frame.
her arms.
The legal
I want
process
you to
would
stay.
take time.
I want us to
But the
fight
financial
together.
maneuvering could
And that's
happen
exactly
quickly.
the problem.
She had 9
Elena
days
said.
left to prepare.
Tears finally
9 days
spilling
to let
over.
them settle in.
She didn't wipe them
9
away.
days to let them
We
believe
aren't
they had
fighting
won.
together.
The suspense
fighting
of it
for
curled
you.
in her stomach,
You're fighting
not
against
like
them,
fear,
and in the
but
middle,
like
we're
anticipation.
losing us.
She was
You
no
need to know
longer
who
the
you
wife
are
being
without
kicked
me,
out.
Lucas.
She was the
And I
creditor
need to know who
waiting
I
for
am
the
without
default.
you.
That's
Clara
cowardice,
lay down on the
he
bed,
whispered,
his
his
grip
grip
on her
covers
arms
up.
loosening.
The pillows
You're
smelled
running
of
away.
laundry detergent.
Maybe, she
clean
admitted.
and impersonal.
Or maybe I'm giving
She
you the
closed
chance
her
to
eyes.
win.
She
If I
didn't
stay,
pray for
you'll always
forgiveness.
wonder if you
She
succeeded
didn't
because
pray
of
for
you
reconciliation
or because of me.
She prayed
Because
for
of my
strength.
connections, my
She
secrets.
prayed for the clarity
I
to
won't
see
be
the
that
path
doubt in
through
your
the
mind.
darkness. She pulled
She
away
thought
from
about
him
her
and
uncle's
walked
voice
toward
again.
the bedroom.
Don't let them
She didn't
convince
pack
you
much.
otherwise.
She took
She
a
wouldn't.
small suitcase
She would
from
show
the
them.
closet. She would
She
show
folded
Roberto.
a few clothes.
She would
simple
show
things.
Juliana. She left
She
the
would show
gifts he
herself.
had given her on the
Sleep
dresser.
came slowly.
She
in
left the
fragments.
money they had saved
She dreamed of
together
the
on
mansion.
kitchen counter.
In the dream,
She would
the
take
doors
only
were
her
locked.
memories. She was
The
standing
watch
on
he
the
had fixed
porch,
for her.
knocking.
The
but
photo
no
of
one
them in the
answered.
park.
Then the
The
windows
love that
lit
lived
up
in her heart,
one by one,
which she couldn't
but
pack
instead
away
of
no
warm
matter
light,
how hard
it was
she
cold
tried.
blue light.
Lucas
And
followed
in the
her
window,
to the
she
doorway.
saw a figure.
He leaned against
It wasn't
the frame,
Roberto, watching her
It was
pack.
her.
He looked
She was
broken
looking
out at herself.
If you walk out that
waiting
door,
to let
Elena,
herself in.
I don't know if
She
I
woke
can bring
up with
you
a
back.
start. Her heart
I'm not
pounding.
asking you to.
The room was
she
dark,
said,
zipping
the
the
clock on the
suitcase.
nightstand read
She stood
4
up and
o'clock
faced
a.m.
him. The
She was
distance
awake.
between them was only
She
a
was
few
ready.
feet. She
But it
sat
felt
up
like
and swung her
miles.
legs over the
You will
side
be
of the
okay,
bed.
Lucas.
She didn't
You were
need
stronger
more
than you
sleep.
know.
She needed
Stronger
to
than
work.
your father knows.
She opened her laptop
Prove it to them
and began to read.
Prove it to yourself.
She read about property
And what about
law.
us?
She
He
read
asked,
about
his
debt
voice
acquisition.
barely a whisper.
She read
Is
about
this
the
the end?
specific clauses
Elena
in the
looked at
mortgage
him,
contract.
memorizing
Arthur
the curve
had
of his
emailed
jaw,
her.
the
She
color
drank
of
the
his
coffee
eyes.
from the thermos.
She wanted to tell
had
him,
asked room service
"Wait
to
for me.
bring. When
It
I
was
come
bitter,
back,
but it
I will
kept
be
her
your
awake.
equal in every
The
way."
sun began to
But she
rise
couldn't.
outside the window.
Not yet, painting the
I don't
sky
know,
in shades
she
of
said
orange and
honestly.
purple. But right
New
now,
day.
this is the only
The
way
first
I
day
can
of the
protect
rest of
you
her life.
From them.
The first day
And
of the
from me.
countdown.
She picked
Clara
up the
saved
the document. It felt light, but her soul felt heavy. She stood up and walked to the window. She walked past him into the city was waking up. He didn't stop. The noise was returning. He stood in the bedroom doorway, watching her go. She placed her hand on the glass haunting his own life. This time, at the front door, Elena paused. She felt power. Her hand on the knob. It was a quiet power. She wanted to turn around, hidden beneath the surface. She wanted to throw herself into his arms. She whispered to the glass, to the city. I am the heir. To the husband sleeping in the house she once called home. I am yours. 10 days, the image of his father's, the words hung in the air, a promise, the accusation of manipulation. She turned away from the window. She told him now, began to get victory would be tainted. She chose a suit had to be earned. Sharp. Don't armor for the battle ahead, she said, not looking back. She was not going to the office. Live your life, Lucas. Clara stepped out. Elena, the heels of her shoes making one last precise, rhythmic sound the door on the polished floor. The hallway air was cold. She had chosen the dark suit deliberately. She stepped out and closed the door. A shield against the vulnerability that was the loudest sound she had ever heard. The hotel room had been a place of solitude. She stood in the hallway for a moment, this office was a place of action. She heard nothing. The air here smelled of old paper, no cries, leather, and coffee. Just silence. A scent that reminded her respecting her wish. Study. He was letting a comforting smell. Elena walked grounding her in a reality that her legs solid compared to the shifting. She pressed the button and waited. When the doors opened
toward the door
she
at the
stepped
end of the
inside
hall.
and turned around.
The nameplate read
The
Arthur
door to their
Sterling
apartment
and
was still
Associates.
closed. She paused
She
before
wondered if
knocking,
he was standing on
taking
the
a
other
deep
side
breath.
of it. Hand
She
on
was
the
not
wood,
coming
just
here
like
as a
her.
victim seeking
As
refuge.
the elevator descended,
She was coming
the
as a
tears
client
came
seeking
freely
justice. She
She
cried
knocked
for the
twice.
love she was leaving
The
behind.
door opened immediately.
She cried for the
Arthur
pain
stood
she was
there,
causing,
holding a file
but beneath
folder
the sorrow,
against his chest.
a steel resolve
He was an
hardening.
older man.
She was
with
no
silver
longer
hair
just
and
Elena,
kind
the
eyes that
watchmaker.
had seen too many
She was
families
Elena
fall
Vance.
apart.
And
He
she
had
had
been
been
her
her
uncle's
uncle's
friend first.
She exited
and her
the building
lawyer
into the
second.
night.
Clara,
The rain
he
had
said,
stopped,
stepping aside
leaving the
to let her
streets
in.
slick and reflective.
You looked determined.
A black car was
Determination
waiting
is
for
all
her
I have
around
left,
the corner.
Arthur.
Clara
Hawthorne's
replied,
driver,
walking into
She had
the
called him
office.
10 minutes ago.
It was spacious.
She got
with
into the
large
back seat.
windows overlooking
Where
the
to,
city.
Miss Vance?
She
the
didn't
driver
sit
asked.
immediately. Elena
She
looked
walked
at the
to the
apartment
window,
building
looking
one
out at the
last
skyline.
time through the tinted window.
Somewhere out there,
she
beyond
could
the
see a
glass
light
tower
on in their
was
window.
the suburb
Lucas
where the
was
mansion
there,
stood.
alone.
Did you get everything
The
ready? I
office,
did,
she said,
Arthur
her voice
said,
clear and steady.
closing the door softly.
Vance Global Headquarters.
He walked to his desk
As you
and
wish.
placed the folder down.
The car pulled away
But
from
before
the
we
curb.
look at the numbers,
Elena watched the
I need you to
apartment
know
building
something.
shrink in the
Your
distance
uncle,
until
he
it
loved you
disappeared
very
around
much.
a corner. He saw
She
things
touched
in
the
Roberto
pocket
that
where
you
her
were
phone
too
lay.
in love to see.
She would not call
Clara
him.
turned from the window.
She would not write.
The mention
She
of her
would build.
uncle brought a fresh
She would
wave
rise.
of emotion. And when
But
the
she
time
held
was
it back.
right, when
He
the
warned me,
Sterlings
she
were
said
on their
quietly.
knees and Lucas
I didn't
was standing
listen.
tall on his
You
own
were hopeful.
merit, Arthur
She would
corrected
return.
gently. Not as
There's
the
a
girl they
difference.
disowned. He
But as the
structured this
woman who
trust
owned the world they
specifically
lived
to
in,
protect you from
the
a
city lights
situation
blurred
like this.
past.
He knew
Elena
Roberto's
wiped her
ambition.
eyes and
He
straightened
knew
her
it would
spine.
eventually
The
consume
grief was
everything
there,
around
but it was fuel now.
including you. She opened
Arthur
her
opened
laptop
the
on the
folder
seat
and
beside her, slid a
the screen
document across
glowed
the
in the
desk.
dark car.
This
There
is
were
the
emails
statement of
waiting.
assets. Proposals.
The trust has grown
Mergers.
significantly over
Acquisitions.
the last 5 years.
The Sterling
It's not
company
just
was
liquid
struggling.
cash, Clara.
The anonymous
It
help
includes
she had
investment
provided was being
portfolios that are
withdrawn.
separate from your
They would feel the
marital
pinch
estate.
soon. Roberto
She
never
typed a
knew
command.
about them because
Initiate
your uncle
phase
kept
2.
them off the grid.
She wasn't doing
Clara
this to
walked
hurt
to the
them.
desk and
She
looked
was
down
doing
at
this
the
to
paper.
clear the board.
The numbers were
She
stark,
needed to reset
black
the
ink
game
on white
so
paper.
that when she and Lucas
They were
met
larger
again,
than she had imagined.
there would be no shadows.
Large enough to breathe.
No secrets.
Large enough
No
to
power
fight.
imbalance.
He left me a weapon.
Just two
she
people who
whispered.
had survived the
He
storm.
left you a foundation.
The car
Arthur
moved
said.
deeper into the
What you
financial
build on it is
district,
up to you.
toward the
But
towering
I must warn you
skyscrapers
again.
that pierced the clouds.
Using these funds to acquire
Elena
the
watched
debt
them
on the
rise.
mansion is
They
aggressive.
looked like monuments.
If Roberto finds
Soon,
out it's you before
one of them
the
would bear
transfer
her
is
name.
complete, she
He
thought
might
of
try to
Lucas.
contest it.
She hoped he was
might
sleeping.
try to freeze the
She
assets,
hoped he was
claiming
dreaming
their
of
marital
something
property.
better. I'm
They aren't,
sorry,
Clara said,
she
her
whispered
voice
to the
firm.
empty car.
The prenup
But you'll
covers
understand
assets
one
acquired
day.
during the marriage.
The driver didn't
This
respond.
trust was established
He simply
before the
drove
marriage.
on into the
It's
heart of the
mine.
city.
Legally,
into the
yes,
future.
Arthur said, leaning
Elena
forward.
closed her laptop.
But Roberto will fight
The separation
dirty.
was complete.
He will try to drag you
the pain
through
was
the mud
acute
to save his
but
reputation.
the path was clear.
Are you
She was
prepared
the
for
air
that
they
once
needed,
you move on the
but
debt?
she wouldn't give them
You
what
will
they
know you are
wanted
behind
until
it.
they learned what
The shell
they
company
deserved.
will hold for a
And
while,
neither would Lucas.
but not forever.
They would both
Clara
rise from
picked
the
up the
ashes
pen
of
from
this
the
breakup,
desk.
stronger,
It was heavy,
sharper,
solid,
ready. She waited.
the
in
car
her hand.
stopped at a red
Let him
light.
fight. She
Elena
said.
caught her
He thinks
reflection
I'm
in the
weak.
window.
He thinks
She
I'm
looked
emotional.
different.
Let
The
him
sadness was
underestimate
there,
me. But so was
That
the
is his
power.
weakness, not
The
mine.
girl who had walked
She
into
looked
the
at
Sterling
Arthur.
mansion.
How
in a
long do
mended
we have the
dress was
mortgage
gone.
payment is
The
due in
woman
10
who
days,
walked out of
Arthur
Lucas's
said.
life was
Roberto
something
has
else
been late on the
entirely.
previous 2
She
payments.
was the storm. The bank
Into
is
the
already
black car.
nervous. The
If
city
we
had
acquire
changed
the
with
note
seasons,
before the due date,
shifting
we
from the
become
damp chill of
creditor.
autumn to the
If he
crisp
misses
bite
the
of
payment
winter,
to us,
and
we
we
have
have
the
the
right
right
to
to tentative
foreclose.
bloom of spring.
It's a tight
But
window,
inside the
but it's
towering
possible.
glass headquarters
Then
of
we do
Vance
it,
Global,
Clara said.
the climate
She
was
didn't hesitate.
controlled, constant,
She
and
signed the
cold.
document where
Elena
Arthur
stood by the
indicated.
floor-to-ceiling
Her signature
window
was
of her
clear,
corner
steady.
office. It
Looking
wasn't the
down at the
signature of
streets
a
far
wife
below.
asking for permission.
The cars were mere
It
specks,
was the signature
the
of a
people
woman
invisible.
taking control.
From this height,
I want the
the world
transfer
looked
to happen
manageable.
quietly.
Organized.
Use the holding company.
Nothing
we
like the
discussed.
messy,
I don't want
painful
his name
reality
to
of
see
the
mine
life
on
she
the
had left
paperwork
behind.
until it's too
She
late.
turned away from the
It
window.
will be done,
her
Arthur
reflection
said,
catching
taking
the
the signed
glass.
paper. She
I'll
wore a suit
contact
now,
the bank's
tailored
liaison
and sharp,
immediately.
a far
They are
cry
eager
from the
to
mended
offload the
dress
risk.
she had worn to the the Sterling
Roberto's
mansion.
credit score has
Her
taken
hair
a
was
hit
pulled
recently
back, her
due
posture
to some
rigid.
missed business
She looked like a
payments.
CEO.
They see him
She
as a
felt like a
liability.
ghost. Clara
Ms.
felt
Vance,
a pang of something
voice
that
came
wasn't
from the
quite
intercom.
satisfaction.
The board is
It
assembled.
was sadness. Elena
Roberto
took a
was
deep breath,
failing,
steadying
the
her
empire
hands.
he had
I'm
prioritized
coming.
over her was
The
crumbling.
boardroom was a
She
cavern
had wanted
of
him
polished
to
mahogany
succeed
and
once.
soft lighting.
She had wanted to be
12 men and
success.
women sat around the table.
Now his failure
all
was the
older
key
than
to
her
her freedom.
all seasoned
Arthur,
veterans
she said,
of the industry.
pausing before she
When she
turned
entered,
to leave.
the conversation
"Thank you
died instantly.
for believing in me
There was still
when I didn't
skepticism
believe in
the room.
myself."
They saw
Arthur
her
stood
age.
up and came
They
around
saw her
the
gender.
desk.
They
He
did
placed
not
a
see
hand
the
on her
air.
shoulder.
They saw
A
the
fatherly
girl.
gesture.
They remembered the
Your
quiet
uncle believed in
beneficiary
you.
who had
I'm
stayed
just
in the
following
shadows
his
for
instructions.
years. They
You
did
are
not
stronger
know
than
about
you
the
know,
watchmaker's daughter.
Don't let him
who
make
had
you
learned
feel
the
small
value
again.
of every second.
I won't, Clara said.
Elena took her
She
seat
picked
at
up
the
her
head
bag.
of the table. I'll be in touch.
She placed a single
Keep me
folder in
updated
front
on
of
the
her.
transfer.
"Good morning."
Every step
she
of the
said.
way,
Arthur
her voice
promised.
was calm. Clara
Projecting
walked out of the
effortlessly
office
to the
and
back
down
of
the
the
hallway.
room.
Let's discuss the ride down felt slower than the ride up. Mr. Henderson,
She watched
the
the
senior
floor
board
numbers
member,
decrease.
cleared his throat.
When the doors opened to
He
the
leaned
lobby,
forward, his hands
she stepped
clasped.
out into the bustling
Ms.
city.
Vance, with all
The
due
noise hit
respect,
her immediately.
some of us are
Cars
concerned about
honking,
your strategy
people talking,
regarding the
the
rush of
Sterling
the morning
Industries
commute.
debt.
She's
She
been
stood on the
buying the
sidewalk
bonds
for a
aggressively,
moment,
but
letting
you
the
haven't
energy
called
of
in
the
city
default.
wash over her.
You're holding a losing
She had just
hand.
signed away her
Why?
past to secure
Elena
her future.
opened the folder.
The money was
She
moving.
didn't look at Henderson
The gears were
immediately.
turning.
She
She
let
walked
the
to the
silence
corner
stretch
and hailed a taxi.
just for a moment.
She didn't want to
asserting
go
her
back
control.
to the hotel yet.
It's not a losing
She needed
hand,
to see
Mr.
something.
Henderson.
Take me to
It's
Oak
an
Ridge
investment
Drive,
in
she told the
stability.
driver. If
It
Sterling
was the street
collapses,
where the mansion was
it creates
located.
a vacuum in the market.
She needed to see it in the
Competitors
daylight
will
from
rush
the
in.
outside,
Prices
knowing
will
what she now
volatility.
knew.
By
The
holding
drive
the
took
debt,
40
we
minutes.
control the pace
As
of
the
their
car moved
restructuring.
away from the city
But you're
center
propping up a
and into the
competitor,
affluent suburbs,
Henderson pressed.
the buildings
It doesn't
became
make
larger,
financial sense.
the spaces wider.
Unless there's something else.
The trees were taller.
Elena looked
It was
up,
a world of
meeting
quiet
his gaze.
wealth.
When
Her
the
eyes
car
were
turned
steady.
onto Oak Ridge,
Business is not
Clara
just
told
about
the driver
numbers.
to slow down.
It's about ecosystems.
Just drive past, she said.
We don't want a dead
Don't
competitor.
stop. We
The
want a
car
partner
rolled
who
slowly
knows their
past the
place.
mansion.
She
It
slid a
looked
document
imposing in the
across
morning
table.
light.
Here
The
are the
windows were
projections,
clean.
reflecting
By
the
Q4,
sky.
our
The garden
holding
was
was
Sterling
manicured.
will give us
It
voting
looked
rights on
perfect.
their board. But Clara
We
saw
won't
the
destroy
cracks
them.
now. We will
She
refine
saw the
them.
vulnerability.
And in doing so,
She saw
we
the debt
secure our
hanging
own
over
supply
it like a
chain.
dark cloud.
It was a half-truth.
She imagined Roberto
The logic
inside,
was sound,
drinking his
the projections
coffee,
accurate,
checking his phone.
But the motivation was
unaware
buried
that the
deep
ownership
beneath
of his
layers
sanctuary
corporate
was shifting
speak.
beneath his feet.
She wasn't doing this.
She
for the
imagined
supply
Juliana
chain.
walking through the
She was
rooms,
doing it to ensure
planning
that when
changes
Lucas
that would
finally
never
stood
happen.
up,
A
the
sense of
ground
calm
beneath him
washed
wouldn't
over
crumble.
her.
It
She
wasn't
was building
happiness.
a safety net.
It was
he didn't know
resolution.
existed.
The suspense
Henderson
that had been
studied the
coiling in
document.
her stomach since
He looked
the
at the
gala
other
was
board
beginning
members.
to unwind. They murmured
She
among
knew what had to
themselves.
be done.
She had the
Finally,
means to
Henderson
do it.
nodded slowly.
The only thing left
Very
was time.
well.
The
10
strategy
days.
holds. The countdown was ticking.
Elena said,
Thank you.
closing the folder.
She said to the driver
Meeting
as they
adjourned.
passed the house.
As the board members
You can turn
filed
around.
out,
Elena
the car
remained
accelerated,
seated,
leaving
the
the mansion
adrenaline
behind,
faded.
leaving
Clara
behind
looked
the
out the
familiar
back
ache in
window
her
until the
chest.
house disappeared
She had won the
around a
moment.
bend in the road.
She had proven her
She
competence.
turned back to the front,
but there was no one
Take
to
me back to
celebrate
the Grand
with.
Hotel.
No
she
one
said.
to share the victory.
I have work to do.
She picked up her
She
phone
leaned
and
back in the
scrolled
seat
to a
and
contact
closed
she
her
never
eyes.
called.
She thought about the
Lucas.
conversation with.
She hovered over the name
Arthur
for a second.
The way he had
then locked
spoken
the
about her
screen.
uncle. Later
It
that
made her
evening,
feel connected
the
to
office was
something
empty.
larger than
The
herself.
cleaning crew moved
She wasn't
quietly
alone
in the
in
halls.
this.
She
Elena
had her
sat at
uncle's
her
wisdom
desk,
guiding her.
the glow of the
She had the
computer
law on her
monitor
side,
illuminating her
She had the
face.
truth.
Hawthorne
Roberto
sat
had lies.
opposite her,
He had
reviewing a
secrets.
stack of reports.
And lies always
The
collapsed
supplier
under
agreement
the weight
is
of truth.
finalized.
It was
Hawthorne
only a
said,
matter of
sliding
time.
a paper toward
Her phone buzzed in her
The
bag.
small watch
She
component
pulled it out.
manufacturers.
It was a message from
district.
an unknown number.
We own them now.
She opened it. Elena
It was a
picked up
photo.
the paper. It showed
These
the
were the
front
suppliers
door of the
Lucas
mansion.
used.
There was a package
The ones
on the
his
map.
father had threatened
The
to
caption
cut
read
off.
delivered.
Will they
It was
continue
from
to
Arthur.
supply Sterling's
The first set of
independent
documents
retailers?
had been sent to
Yes,
the bank.
Hawthorne confirmed.
The process had begun.
Under the new contract,
Clara stared
they
at
are
the photo.
obligated to fulfill
The door
all
looked
existing
solid and
orders.
penetrable. No matter
But
who
she knew
places
better.
them.
Doors
Elena
could be
let out a
opened.
breath she didn't
Keys
know
could
she
be
was
changed.
holding.
Good.
Ownership could be
Keep it
transferred.
anonymous.
She typed
Use
a
the
reply
shell
company.
proceed.
She
Elena,
put the phone away.
Hawthorne said, his
The
tone
taxi
shifting
merged
from
onto the
lawyer to
highway,
friend.
speeding
How
up
long
toward
can
the
you
city.
keep this up?
The wind
You're
whipped
running a
past the
global
windows.
conglomerate by day
Clara watched
and
the
playing
world
guardian
blur by.
angel by night.
She felt a surge
You
of
haven't
energy.
slept more than
The
4
sadness
hours a
was
night
still
in
there,
months.
but it was no longer
sleep enough,
paralyzing. She said
It was part
though
of
the
her
dark
now,
circles
a
under
scar
her
that
eyes
reminded
betrayed
her
her
of what she had
How is he?
survived.
Hawthorne
She thought
hesitated.
about Roberto.
He knew how
Did he feel
dangerous
safe?
this
Did he
question
feel
was.
secure? She hoped
He's
so.
struggling because the
shop
fall
is
was
open.
always harder.
He's
when
working
you didn't see it
18-hour
coming.
days.
She touched
He
the
fixed the
pocket
roof
of her
himself
suit
when it
jacket.
leaked.
The copy
He
of the
refused
trust
a loan
document
from
was
his
there.
father's associates
It felt like a
last week.
heartbeat against her
He's
side.
proud, Elena.
She was no
He's
longer
doing
just
it all on
Clara,
his own.
the ex-wife.
A smile touched
She was
Elena's
Clara,
lips,
the creditor.
sad and proud.
She was Clara,
He
the
always
owner.
was stubborn.
The title of
He
the
asks
story
about
was
you,
changing.
Hawthorne added
And she was
softly.
the one holding
Not
the pen.
directly.
The
But I hear
taxi
things.
slowed as it approached
He tells
the hotel.
clients he's waiting
Clara
for a
sat up
specific
straighter.
part.
A
She
rare
checked her
spring.
reflection in the
He
mirror.
says it takes time
Her
to
eyes
find
were
the right
clear.
fit. Her posture
Elena
was
looked down
upright.
at her
her hands. She was ready for the next manicured step. Now, smooth. The driver stopped. She remembered the oil stains, the calluses. Clara paid and got out. Tell me he's through the revolving doors. He's alive, Hawthorne and into the lobby. But he's lonely. The concierge nodded. We all are. Welcome back, stood up Mrs. Clara. And walked back to the window. Thank you, she said. The city lights walked to the elevator. Like distant stars. As the doors closed, I can't go back. She caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. Not until the merger is she looked like a stranger. Not until his father understands that power. The elevator rose. It's Clara took a deep breath. If I go back now, 7 days Lucas will always wonder phone if he resting on her knee because of me. The silence of the room was absolute. Alone. Broken and only by the distant hum of traffic from the street below. When he knows you own the ground, reminder that the world continued to spin. Then he'll know I didn't save him. The upheaval in Elena said, her voice firm. She had changed out of her suit into a soft sweater and jeans. She turned back, felt like a hug. There's the industry summit next week. The Sterlings will be there. Arthur had said he would call back once he had reviewed the specific. They don't know that the primary investors will again. Are you attending? He had hinted at something more, Elena said. Something deeper than just the liquid funds. The week leading up to something tied directly to the property itself. Elena chose her attire vibrating against her leg. Not the humble dress
She picked
of
it
the
up
past.
immediately.
Not the
Arthur
overly
Clara.
aggressive power
Arthur's
suit
voice
of the
came
boardroom.
through,
Clear but
something
laced
elegant,
with a peculiar tension.
something that commanded
I found
respect without
I was
shouting.
digging through the
She
appendices
practiced
of
her
Henry's
speech in the
trust,
mirror,
the
watching
ones
her
we
own
didn't look at
eyes.
yesterday. She needed to
There's
be
a
cold
clause,
enough to be taken
Section
seriously,
14,
but
paragraph
warm enough
C.
to be trusted. Clara tightened
She
her
needed
grip
to be
on
the air
phone.
they needed.
What does it
not
say?
the
It's a
girl they
right of
rejected.
first refusal. On the morning
Arthur
of the
explained.
summit, the air was
sound
crisp.
of papers rustling
The venue
in the
was a
background
grand
on his
hotel
end,
ballroom, but not just
filled
on the
with the
assets.
elite of the business world.
It's tied to the real estate
Chandeliers
holdings
cast a warm
associated
glow
with the family
over the
crowd.
Waiters
Waiters
circulated
circulated
with
property on
champagne.
Oak Ridge. Elena
Your uncle
arrived
anticipated
late,
that
letting
Roberto
the buzz
might
of the
leverage
room
the
build
house.
before her
He
entrance.
put a clause in that
She
gives
stood
the
in the
trust
shadows of the
beneficiary,
balcony, overlooking
the you,
the floor.
the option to
She saw them
assume any
immediately.
debt secured by the
Arthur
property
and
if
Margaret
the primary
Sterling
owner
stood near the
defaults
center,
or attempts to
surrounded by a
refinance
group
without
of
spousal
potential
consent.
investors. Clara
They
stood
looked
up
older
and
than she
walked to the
remembered.
window.
The
The
arrogance
city
was
lights
still
were beginning
there,
to twinkle
but it was
on,
frayed at
one
the
by
edges.
one.
Like
Arthur's
stars
suit was
igniting
slightly
in the
less
dark.
pristine. He knew she
Margaret's
whispered.
smile didn't
He
reach
knew
her
Roberto
eyes.
would try to
They
use
were
the
hunting.
house as collateral.
And then she saw him.
He knew Roberto's
Lucas.
nature. He
Arthur
stood slightly
corrected
apart
gently.
from his parents.
Henry told me
holding
once
a glass
years ago
of water.
that Roberto
He
looked
looked at
tired.
assets as
His
tools
suit
to be
was
used
the
up,
same one he had
not
worn to the dinner
foundations
months
to be
ago.
built on. But he
Your
wore it
uncle
with a new
structured
kind
the
of
will to
dignity.
protect the home
He wasn't
from
slouching.
Roberto's ambition.
He wasn't hiding.
When Roberto
He was
refinanced
listening.
last year,
He was
triggered
learning
this clause.
Elena's heart
He didn't
hammered
know
against
because
her
the
ribs.
clause is embedded
It took
in the
every
original
ounce of her
deed
willpower
transfer from
not to
20
run
years
down the
ago,
stairs and
when
throw
Henry
her
helped
arms
you two
around
by
him.
the place.
She gripped the
It's
railing,
buried in
her
the
knuckles
public
white.
records.
Not
But it
yet,
links
she
back to
told
the
herself.
trust.
Watch.
Clara felt a chill
A man
run
beside
down
her on the
arms,
balcony cleared
despite
his
the
throat.
warmth of the room.
Impressive
It
turnout,
wasn't
isn't
fear.
it?
It was
Everyone
the
is waiting
sensation
for
of
the
being
keynote
watched
speaker.
over from beyond
The
the
mysterious
grave.
head of Vance
Her uncle
Global.
had left her a map.
No one has seen her
and
in
she had
public
finally
before.
found the X that
Elena
marked the
didn't look
spot.
at him. So,
Anticipation
when we buy the
is a
debt, she
powerful
said,
tool.
her voice gaining
They say
strength.
she's ruthless.
We aren't just
The
becoming
man continued.
creditors.
Bought
We
out
have half the
priority.
district's suppliers
Exactly,
overnight.
Arthur said.
Some
If
say
Roberto
she's going
misses
to
the
announce a
payment due in
merger
10
with
days,
Sterling today. The bank
usually
saved
has
them
the
from
right to
bankruptcy.
foreclose.
Elena finally
because
looked
of this
at him.
clause,
Or maybe
the
she's
trust
going to
has the
teach
right
them
to
how to
assume
save
the
mortgage
themselves.
before the bank can
She
auction
checked her
the
watch.
property. It was
And
time
since you control the trust,
She adjusted her
you
jacket,
control the house.
took a deep breath,
Legally,
and stepped out of the
Roberto
shadows.
cannot contest it
She
without
walked down the
admitting
grand
he
violated the
staircase,
original
her
deed
heels clicking
conditions
rhythmically
by
on the marble.
refinancing without
The
your
sound was
signature,
subtle,
which he
but
did.
heads began to
Clara
turn.
closed her eyes.
There was a presence in the
She
room
remembered the
that
day they
shifted
bought
the
the
atmosphere.
It was
People
raining,
stopped
just
talking.
like today.
Whispers
Roberto
rippled
had been
through the
excited,
crowd.
pacing the
Who is
empty
that?
rooms,
Is
talking
that her?
about potential
The
value,
Vance heir?
about equity.
Elena kept her eyes
Her uncle had
forward.
been there too.
She didn't look at the
standing
Sterlings.
quietly in the corner.
She didn't look
watching
at Lucas.
Roberto with those sharp,
She walked toward
knowing
the
eyes.
stage.
He
As
had
she
signed
ascended
the
the
papers
steps,
alongside
she
them.
felt the weight of
She
the
had thought
moment.
he was just being
This was the culmination
supportive.
of months of
Now
sleepless
she realized
nights
he was
of
planting a
loneliness,
seed of
He
strategic
was building a
maneuvering.
trap for the day
She reached the
Roberto's
podium.
greed outpaced
The
his
microphone was
integrity.
adjusted for her
Why didn't you
height.
tell me, Clara
She
asked,
looked out at
her
the
voice
sea of cracking
cracking
slightly. She saw
Why
Arthur
keep it a
Sterling
secret?
stiffen.
Because Henry knew
She
you.
saw Margaret's
Arthur
eyes
said
widen
softly.
slightly. He knew
And she
that
saw
if you knew
Lucas.
you had a safety
He
net,
was staring
you
at
might
her,
have
his
stayed
glass
in the marriage
halfway to
longer
his
than you
mouth.
should have.
He didn't
He
recognize
wanted you
her
to
at
leave
first.
when you were ready. The woman on the
Not
stage
because
was
you were
confident,
forced to stay by
powerful,
financial
radiant.
fear.
He
She
wanted
was not
you to
the
be
girl
free
who had
Claire.
washed dishes
This
in A.
clause,
It's
small
not just
apartment,
about the house.
but then her eyes
It's about
met his.
giving you the choice
just
to
for a
come
second
back on your own terms.
And she saw the flicker
Tears
of
pricked
recognition,
Clara's eyes,
the
hot and
confusion,
sudden.
the hope.
She turned away from
Good
the
evening,
window,
Elena
pressing her
said,
forehead
her
against
voice
the cool
amplifying
glass.
through the hall. The
I am
reflection
Elena
staring
Vance.
back at her was blurred
Thank
by
you for
moisture.
coming.
The
She
room
had
was
felt
silent.
so alone in this
She
fight,
paused,
like
she
letting
was
her name
standing
settle.
against a titan
She
with
saw
nothing
Arthur
but her
lean
bare
toward
hands,
Margaret,
whispering
but she wasn't
urgently.
alone.
They knew the
She
name
had an
now.
ally who had
They knew
planned
the
for
power
this
it
moment
held.
decades ago.
We are gathered
The
here to
grief she had
discuss
been
the
carrying
future of our
shifted,
industry, transforming
Elena
into a
continued.
profound sense
A
of
future
gratitude.
built on innovation,
It wasn't just
resilience,
money.
and
It was
integrity.
love. Too
Tangible,
often we rely
strategic
on
love.
legacy.
Thank
We
you,
rely
Arthur,
on
she
names,
said.
but
Wiping
names
her
are just
cheek
labels.
with the back of her hand.
Value is created
Thank you
by
for finding
action.
this.
She
I'm
glanced
just the
down at her
messenger,
notes,
Arthur
though
replied.
she didn't need them.
The
credit goes
Tonight,
to Henry.
Vance Global
Now
is
here is the
announcing a
strategy.
new initiative.
We proceed
A partnership
with the debt
program
acquisition
for
as
independent
planned.
retailers.
But when the payment date
believe in
arrives,
supporting
if
those who
Roberto
build
hasn't
with their
paid,
hands,
which is
who
likely
fix what
given
is
his
broken,
cash flow
who
issues,
create value from
we
nothing.
invoke Section 14.
She looked directly at
We
Lucas
notify the
again.
bank, and
He had
Roberto
lowered his
simultaneously. He was
It will be
standing
a
taller
shock.
now. He will think
understood.
the bank is foreclosing.
This wasn't just a business
Then we reveal
announcement.
that the trust
It was
has
a
assumed the
message.
debt.
I see
He will
you.
be a tenant
I
in a
believe
house
in
he
you.
thought he owned.
We will not be
Clara
acquiring
imagined
Sterling
the scene.
Industries.
Roberto
Elena said,
standing
her
in the
voice clear.
foyer,
We
holding
will be
the letter.
offering them a line
The
of credit.
confusion, the anger,
Conditional
the
on
realization.
restructuring.
She didn't feel
Conditional on
joy at
merit.
his pain. A murmur
She
went
felt a
through
sense
the
of
crowd.
balance being restored.
Arthur Sterling looked
The
pale.
universe was correcting
He had expected
itself.
a takeover.
Do it, she
He
said.
had expected destruction.
Prepare the notification.
Instead, he
But
was
don't
being
send it
offered a
yet.
lifeline.
Wait
but
until
one
the
that
morning
came
of
with
the 10th
strings.
day.
Strings that
Understood,
demanded
Arthur said.
change.
Clara,
Elena
are
stepped
you sure
back
about
from
this
the
once
podium.
that letter is
The
sent?
applause began,
There is no
slow
going
at first,
back.
then roaring.
The relationship
She
will
didn't
be
smile.
irreparable.
She nodded politely.
The relationship was
and
irreparable
the
the
moment
he handed me the
She didn't
divorce
stop
papers,
for interviews,
Clara said.
She didn't
her
stop
voice
for
steady.
handshakes.
He chose his
She
path.
walked toward the exit.
I am just choosing mine.
She knew Lucas would
and
follow.
my path leads back to
She
that
knew the
house.
questions would come.
Not as a wife.
The secret was out.
As an owner.
The game had
Very
changed.
well, Arthur said.
She pushed open
I will
the
draft
heavy
the
doors
documents
and stepped out into
I'll
the
send
cool
them over
night
for your
air of the
signature
hotel
tonight.
terrace. Rest,
She
Clara.
walked to the railing.
You have a big
looking
week
out
ahead.
at the city.
I will,
She
heard
said.
the door open
Good night,
behind
Arthur.
her.
Footsteps.
She ended the call,
hesitant
and
at
placed
first,
the phone
then
on the
faster.
nightstand. Elena,
The room was dark
the voice
now.
broke her
The
heart.
city outside
She
fully
turned around.
illuminated.
Lucas
She
stood
walked
there,
over to the
breathing
suitcase
heavily,
and opened it.
as if he had
She
run
looked at the
all
clothes
the way from
inside,
the ballroom.
the simple
He
things
looked
she
at
had
her,
packed.
searching her face.
She thought about the
trying to
wardrobe
reconcile
she had
the
left
woman in
behind
the
in the
power
mansion.
suit with the
The
girl
silk
who had left
dresses,
him in
the
cashmere
rain.
sweaters,
You,
the
he
shoes
whispered.
lined up in the
It
closet.
was you.
They
The
were just
investors.
things. The Vance
Objects.
heir. They
Elena
didn't define
nodded.
her. She
Her
didn't
uncle
try to
had taught
hide
her
it
that.
anymore. Value
Yes.
wasn't in what you owned
All this time,
but in what
Lucas
you controlled.
said, his voice trembling
And she
with
controlled
emotion.
her own destiny.
You
now.
knew.
She
You knew
walked
everything.
to the small desk
And you
in the
let
corner
me.
of the
You
room.
let me
and
struggle.
turned on the lamp.
I let you stand.
The light was warm.
Elena corrected
casting
gently.
a golden pool on
I
the
couldn't
wood.
give you the answer,
She sat
Lucas.
down and opened
You
her
had to find
laptop.
it yourself.
The email
If
from
I had
Arthur
told
was
you,
already there. You would have
She
never known if
downloaded
you were
the
strong
attachment.
enough. The legal
Lucas took
language
a
was
step
dense,
closer.
filled with
The anger
jargon
was
and
there,
citations,
but it was mixed
but
with
to
awe.
Clara, it
You
looked
saved
like
my
poetry.
family.
It
You
was
saved
the
the
story
shop.
of her liberation
You saved
written
me.
in ink and
I
law.
saved the business.
She
Elena
read through the
said.
clause again.
You saved yourself.
Section 14.
You refused your
paragraph
father's
C.
help.
The words
You worked
seemed to glow on
18-hour
the screen.
days.
She
You kept
thought
your
about
integrity.
Roberto. That
What
was he doing
Lucas?
now? Probably
Not
having
me.
dinner with Juliana.
Lucas shook his head.
Probably talking
Tears
about
welling in his
renovations,
eyes.
about paint colors.
Why didn't you tell
about
me?
the future they
Why
thought
did you
was
leave?
secured? Because I
They were
needed
building
you to know
castles
that
in
I
the
wasn't
air.
leaving you, unaware
Elena
that the
said,
ground
her
beneath
voice
them was
cracking.
owned by someone
I was
else.
leaving the situation.
The irony was sharp.
I needed to
almost
become
bitter.
someone who could
He had
stand
kicked her
beside
out to
you
make
without
space for his new
overshadowing
life.
you.
But
I
he had
needed to
done
be
so
your
in a
equal.
house that was
Not
legally
your
tethered
savior.
to the woman
Not
he
your burden.
discarded. He had
Lucas
forgotten
closed
the
the
foundations
distinction.
between them. He had forgotten
He
the
reached
history.
out,
his hand
He had
hovering
forgotten
near her
her.
face. Clara
Afraid
leaned
she
back
might
in the
disappear.
chair.
She
She felt
still
a
Elena.
strange sense of
I
calm
am,
settle
she
over
whispered.
her. The
And I'm still
anxiety that had
yours.
plagued her since
you'll
the
have
gala
me.
was gone.
Lucas let
The
out a
fear
sob,
of the unknown,
a sound
was
of pure
replaced by the
relief,
certainty
and
of the
pulled her
plan.
into his arms.
She knew what would happen.
He held her tightly.
She knew the steps,
as if he were afraid the
she
wind
knew the
would
outcome.
blow her away.
The suspense was
Elena
no longer
buried her
about
face
what would
in
happen
his
shoulder,
shoulder,
breathing
but about
in the
how
scent of
Roberto
him.
would react.
It was the
when
same
truth
scent as
arrived.
before. Would he
So
beg?
would
Would he
he
rage?
home.
Would he finally
I hated
understand
you,
the value
he
of what
whispered
he had
into her
lost?
hair.
She stood up
For a
and
while.
walked to the bathroom.
I hated that you left.
She splashed cold
but I never
water on
stopped
her
loving
face.
you.
Looking at
I know,
herself in the mirror,
Elena said, holding
the
him
redness
just as
in her
tight.
eyes had faded.
I never stopped
Her
either.
expression was
They stood on the
composed.
terrace.
She looked
wrapped
like
in
a
each
woman
other,
who had weathered a
while the
storm
party
and
continued
come out the other
inside.
side not just
The world was
intact,
still turning,
but strengthened.
The Sterlings were still
She dried
inside,
her face,
grappling
and went back
with the
to
new
reality.
bedroom.
She
The
didn't
market
turn
would
on the
still
television.
fluctuate tomorrow.
She didn't order
But in
room
this
service.
moment, none of that
She
mattered.
wasn't hungry. The secret
She
was
was
out.
fueled by something
The barrier
else
was
now.
gone.
Purpose.
They were no longer the
She
heir
sat on the
and
bed and
watchmaker.
picked up the locket
They
she
were
had
just
packed.
two people who had
She
found their
opened
way
it.
back to each
The
other.
picture of
through
her
the
parents
dark. smiled back.
Elena
at her.
pulled back
They
slightly
looked
to
young,
look at him.
hopeful.
It's
They
going
had
to
built
be
a
hard.
life together based
Your
on
father,
partnership.
he won't like
not
this.
power.
Let
She
him not
traced
like
the
it,
edge of the photo
Lucas
with her
said,
thumb.
wiping his eyes.
I hope I'm making
I don't
you
work
proud.
for him anymore.
She whispered to
I
the
work
empty
for us.
room.
Elena
The silence
smiled,
didn't feel heavy
a genuine
anymore.
smile that
It
reached
felt
her eyes
respectful.
for the first time.
Clara
in months.
closed the locket,
Then let's
and
go
placed
home.
it on the nightstand.
To the apartment?
She, Lucas asked,
Lay
down and pulled the
No,
covers up.
Elena said.
The
taking
hotel
his
bed
hand.
was firm,
To the shop.
unfamiliar, but
We
she
have
was
work
tired.
to do.
The
And
mental
then,
exertion
maybe
of
we
the
can look
day
for a
had
new
drained
place.
her. She
Somewhere
closed
with
her
a bigger
eyes
window.
and let her mind wander.
Lucas laughed.
She
The
thought
sound
about
of
the
pure
10th
joy.
day.
Yeah.
She imagined walking
we
up
can
the
do that.
driveway again. They walked back
Not in a
toward the
taxi,
entrance,
but
hand
in her
hand.
own car.
The doorman
Not with a
opened the door
suitcase,
for them,
but with a briefcase.
As they stepped back into the
image
light,
was vivid.
Elena
clear.
looked back at the
She could
terrace
see the
one
look on
last
Roberto's
time.
face.
The shadows
She
were
could
gone.
feel the weight of
The
the
secrets
keys
were
in her
gone.
hand.
All that
Sleep
was left
came easier
easier
this
head
time,
slightly, and
there
saw
were no
Lucas
nightmares.
sleeping beside her.
No dreams of locked
His
doors.
breathing was steady.
She dreamed
his
of her
face
uncle's
relaxed
study.
in a way she
He
hadn't
was sitting
seen
at his
since
desk
before the
writing
ultimatum.
something.
The events
looked
of the
up and
previous
previous night felt like a dream.
You found it, he said.
The revelation.
I knew you would.
She
Leaned
woke up just
forward.
Before dawn.
The technical
the sky
assessment
outside
I just
turning
completed
pale
shows a
gray.
40%
She sat
reduction
up,
in upgrade
swinging her
costs
legs over the
using
side
the
of the
modular
bed.
approach.
Today was day
That's not
3.
manipulation.
7 days left.
That's engineering.
The clock was
I've
ticking,
worked the floor,
but she was no
I
longer
know the
running
machines.
against it.
This plan
She was
works.
walking with it.
The shareholders
She got
looked
up
at Lucas
and began her morning
They
routine.
knew him as the son who
Shower,
walked away.
dress, coffee.
Seeing him
Each
here,
action was
advocating
deliberate.
for Elena's
She
plan,
chose another
shifted
suit,
the
this
dynamic.
one navy blue.
It wasn't just an
Professional,
outsider imposing
authoritative.
change. It was
She
an
packed her
insider
laptop
validating
and
it.
the signed documents
Henderson
into her
looked
bag.
between them. She was
We
ready to
stand
face
together
the
on
day.
this?
There were
We
more
stand
calls
together,
to make,
Elena
more
said
preparations to finalize.
Or we all fall separately.
The legal machinery
The choice
was in
is
motion,
yours,
but it
there was a
needed
long
fuel.
pause.
She would be the
Finally,
fuel.
Henderson nodded
As she left the
slowly.
room,
She
Very
paused
well.
at the door.
We will approve
She
the
looked back at the
restructuring.
empty bed, the
As they
quiet
left the
room.
room, Elena let out a breath she had been holding. A waiting room
That was
between the
close,
life she
she
had
admitted.
and the life she
You
was
were brilliant,
claiming.
Lucas
She
said.
closed the door
But you
and
didn't
locked
have to do it alone.
The click was solid.
I'm learning that.
She walked down the
said.
hallway to the
Over the next
elevator.
few weeks,
The journey
rhythm
back
of
to
their
their life
mansion had
settled
begun.
into a new pattern.
Not physically, not
They
yet.
worked long days,
but legally,
often
financially,
late into the
emotionally.
night.
Elena's
She was returning,
reputation in the
and
market
this time,
solidified.
she wouldn't be knocking.
She wasn't just the
She
heir.
would be unlocking.
She was the architect.
The secret of the will was
turnaround.
the key. Articles
And
were
she held
written
it
about
tight.
her strategic
The
genius.
suspense to the
They
sleek,
praised her vision,
glass-walled
her grit.
office where
They
Roberto
didn't know
sat
about the
behind a
sleepless
desk that
nights
suddenly
the
felt
doubts,
too large.
the tears shed in
The
the
morning
car on
light
the way to
streamed
the
in,
office, illuminating
but
the
Lucas
dust
knew.
motes dancing
One
in the
evening,
air. They stayed
but
late at
Roberto
the
didn't
office.
see the beauty of
The
the
city
light.
lights twinkled
He
below.
saw only the red numbers
Elena
on
was
a
reviewing a
spreadsheet
final
open on his
report on
computer
the Sterling
screen.
merger.
The phone on
It
his
was
desk
complete.
rang, a
The
sharp,
company was
intrusive
saved,
sound that made his
restructured,
shoulders
and poised
tense.
for growth.
He let it
She
ring
closed
twice
the folder
before picking
and leaned
up,
back in her chair,
forcing his voice
"It's
into
done,"
a calm
she
register
said.
he didn't feel.
Lucas looked up from
Roberto
his own
Vance,
work.
he said.
"What happens now?"
Mr. Vance, this
Now,
is Marcus
Elena
from First
said,
Capital.
standing up and
The voice
walking
on
to
the other
window.
end was polite
"We
but
decide
firm.
what we want, lacking the
company
usual
is
deference
stable.
Roberto was
I don't need
accustomed
to be here 18
We're
hours
calling
a day
regarding the
anymore.
credit line
Do you want to step
extension you
back?
requested yesterday."
Lucas asked.
Roberto
coming to stand
tapped a
beside
pen
her.
against the desk.
I want to
a
live,
rhythmic, nervous
Elena
tick.
said.
I
Yes,
spent so
Marcus.
much time
I
building a
expect the
future
approval
that I
by
forgot
noon.
to be present.
We
in
have
the
some
present.
acquisitions pending.
I want to fix watches
There was
again.
a pause on the line.
I want to cook dinner.
A silence that
I want to
stretched
walk
too
in the
long.
park without checking
Actually,
my phone.
sir,
There's been
Lucas
a flag on the
smiled.
account. I can arrange
Due to the
that.
recent changes
the shop
in your
is still
marital
there.
status
It's
and the
quiet
separation
without
of
you, though.
assets.
It won't
We've
be
had
any
to
more,
freeze the joint
Elena
lines of
promised.
credit until
She
further
turned to
notice.
face him.
But I need
Compliance
you to
requires
understand
us to
something.
verify ownership
I will always have
structures.
this power.
Roberto's
The
hand
money,
stopped
the
tapping.
influence.
The
It's part
pen
of me
lay
now.
still on the
I
mahogany
can't give it
surface.
back.
Will
Freeze
that
you
bother
can't
you?
freeze my account.
Lucas thought for a
I
moment.
own 51%.
He looked out
of
at the
company,
city,
then back
the
at her.
assets are corporate.
It bothered me when it
Technically,
was a secret.
sir, the
It
collateral
bothered
used
me
for
when
the
I felt
refinancing
powerless.
last year,
But
was
now,
tied to
now
the
it's just a
personal
tool.
residence, like a
which is
hammer.
now under dispute.
It depends on who
Marcus
holds it.
explained.
You hold it with
Until
care.
the legal status
So
is
no,
clarified,
it doesn't bother me.
We cannot release
as long
further
as we hold it
funds.
together.
I'm sorry,
Elena
Mr.
felt a
Vance.
tear slip down
It's
her
protocol.
cheek.
The
She
line
went
went
dead
quickly.
before Roberto could
You have no
respond.
idea how much I
He
needed
stared
to
at the
hear
phone.
that.
The
I
dial
think I do,
tone humming in his
Lucas
ear
said,
like a
pulling
pulling
her
her
into
into
a
a
hug.
hug. He slammed
Because
the
I needed
receiver
to say
down.
it.
The sound
stayed like
echoing
that
in the
for a
quiet
while.
office. Watching the
His
city
heart
breathe
began to
below
race.
them. A frantic
rise was
drumming
complete.
against his ribs.
Not just the
He had
rise of
counted on
Elena
that credit
Vance in the
line.
market.
It was
but the
supposed to
rise of
cover
their
the payroll
partnership.
for the end of the month.
They had navigated the storm.
It was supposed to cover the
survived
mortgage
separation
payment on the mansion
and emerged stronger.
which was due in less
The
than a
market
week.
respected Elena
He had
now,
assumed
not
Clara's
because
share
her
of the
name,
dividends would
but
bridge
because
the
of her
gap,
work,
as they always
and Lucas
had.
respected her
But
not
Clara was
because of her
gone,
power,
and
but
apparently
because
so
of
was
her
the
heart.
money. The
He
next
stood up
morning,
and walked
Elena
to the
made
window,
a decision.
looking out at the
She
city.
called Hawthorne.
From this
"I'm
height,
stepping down as
everything
CEO,"
looked small,
she said.
manageable.
Ms.
But
Vance,
down there in the
Hawthorne
streets,
sounded shocked.
obligations were piling
The stock
up.
will plummet.
He loosened his
No,
tie,
it won't, Elena
feeling
said.
the collar constrict
I'm appointing
his
a
throat.
board of directors.
He had told Clara she
I'm
was
staying as
nothing.
chairman.
He had told
I want to
himself
focus
she
on
was
strategy,
nothing.
not
But now,
operations.
her absence
and I
felt
want to
like a
reopen
hole
the
in
watch
hull of
shop
a ship.
as a subsidiary.
Water was rushing
a training
in,
ground for
and he
engineers.
couldn't find the plug.
That's
The door to his
unconventional,
office opened
Hawthorne
without a
noted.
knock.
It's personal,
Juliana walked
Elena
in,
said,
carrying 2
Make it
cups
happen.
of coffee.
She hung
She
up
looked
and looked at
radiant,
Lucas,
dressed in a
I'm
casual
coming back
chic
to the
outfit
shop.
that cost more
Part-time.
than most people's monthly
You okay
rent.
with that?
She
Lucas
didn't see the
laughed,
tension in
a
his
sound
posture.
of pure relief.
She saw only
I think
the
I
man
can
who had
manage.
promised her the world.
They left the office
Hey,
together,
she said, placing
not
a
in the
cup
black
on his
car,
desk.
but walking
I
to
thought
the
you could
subway
use this.
station like
You
everyone
looked
else.
stressed when you left
They
this
blended
morning.
into the crowd.
Roberto turned,
2 faces
forcing
among
a
many.
smile that didn't
But as
reach
they
his
walked,
eyes.
Elena held
Just
her
business
head high.
things.
She
Nothing
had
to
conquered
worry
the world
about.
of giants.
He took the
but
coffee,
she was
but he
returning
didn't
to
drink
the
it.
world of small
The heat
things.
seeped through the paper
She had
cup,
proven she could
burning
be
his
the heir
palms
they
slightly.
needed.
But
More
more
importantly,
importantly,
she had
it
proven
grounded
she
him.
could be the woman
Is it
she
about the
wanted to
house,
be.
Juliana asked,
The suspense of the
leaning
secret
against
was
the
gone.
desk.
The
She
drama of
picked
the
up a conflict
conflict was resolved.
turning it over in her
But
hands.
the story wasn't over.
I was thinking,
It was just
maybe
entering
we should
a
host
new
a party
chapter.
once the papers
One
are
written
fully
not in
signed.
boardrooms or mansions
To celebrate the new beginning,
but in the quiet moments
invite
of
some
a
of your
life built on
investors.
truth. Roberto
As they
flinched.
descended into
into the subway station. Now is not the time. Elena knew that no matter what challenges came next, Juliana faced them with the same resilience that had in the modest coat and controlled a significant shifting from playful to concerned. They smiled at each other. A private secret shared in a public space. You told me the house was free and clear. While their world was stabilizing, you said she was walking away with nothing. One built on glass and arrogance. Roberto said quickly, too quickly. Miles away. But there are sterile silence of the Sterling Industries. Banks are being difficult about the transfer. The air was thick with tension. It's temporary. Arthur Sterling stood by the window, Juliana repeated, looking out at the same skyline. She set the paperweight down with a sharp click. But where she saw opportunity, Roberto, he saw a threat. I like certainty. The lights of the city. I left my apartment mocking him. I told my friends I was moving into the mansion. On his desk, what am I supposed to tell them if you can't pay the bills? I can pay the bills. The Global logo was embossed on the cover. The stress fraying his patience. Restructuring. He immediately regretted the lifeline. He softened his voice. It felt like a death warrant. I'm sorry. Margaret sat on the leather
The
sofa.
situation
in the
with
corner
Clara
of the room,
was complicated.
her posture rigid.
More than I anticipated.
She held a cup of tea,
but I
that
have
had
it
gone
under
cold
control.
20 minutes ago.
Juliana studied
She hadn't
him.
taken a sip.
She was young.
The silence
wasn't
between them
foolish.
was heavy. She
saw
saw
the
the
sweat on his
unspoken
brow,
acknowledgement,
the
the
way
way
his
his
eyes
eyes darted to
status.
the computer
They
screen.
were no
whenever
longer
she
the
looked
masters
at
of
him.
this domain.
She smelled fear.
They were tenants.
Okay, she said
Have you read the
slowly.
terms?
Just make sure
Arthur
you do.
asked, his voice
I'm not
low,
going back to
lacking
where I
the
was.
commanding boom it
I
once
expect
had.
a certain lifestyle.
He didn't turn around.
You promised me
I
stability.
scanned them. I know what I promised,
Her voice
Roberto
tightened.
said.
They
He
retained
walked
voting
around the
control
desk
on
and
all
stood in
major
front of her.
decisions. He wanted to
We are
reassure
consultants,
her, but he also
in our
needed
own
to
company.
reassure himself.
Arthur turned
I'm
slowly.
Roberto Vance.
His face looked
I don't
older than
fail.
it had a year ago.
Good, Juliana said.
The lines around his
She
mouth
kissed
were
his
deeper,
cheek,
but it
etched
felt
by months of
perfunctory.
sleepless nights.
I'm going to the spa.
And the constant fear
Don't work
of the
too
phone
hard.
ringing with bad
She left the
news.
office.
Closing
Consultants,
the door
he
behind
repeated,
her.
the word tasting
Roberto
bitter.
was alone again.
We built this empire.
The silence rushed
My
back
father,
in, and his
heavier than
father
before.
him. He walked
And
back
now
to
we
his
are advisors
computer
to a
and
girl who
logged into the
fixes
personal
watches.
banking portal.
She is not just
He
a
typed
girl
in his
who fixes
password.
watches, Arthur.
The screen loaded.
Margaret said.
He clicked on
though
the
she
joint
hated
account.
admitting it.
Access
He saw the
denied.
summit.
He
He
clicked
saw
on
the
the
numbers.
investment portfolio.
She saved us from
Restricted.
liquidation.
He
The
tried
banks
to
were
initiate
calling
a
the
transfer
loans.
from the company
We had
account
nowhere
to
else
the
to
personal
turn.
account.
We had dignity.
Transaction
Arthur
failed
snapped.
insufficient liquidity.
Walking over to the desk,
He pushed the
and
keyboard
slamming
away.
his hand down on the
It
report.
slid across the desk.
We had legacy,
knocking the coffee
now
cup
we have
over.
charity.
Brown
Do you think
liquid
the shareholders
across
respect
the
us
polished
now?
wood.
Do you think the
dripping onto
market
carpet.
sees us as leaders?
Roberto didn't move
They
to
see us
clean
as
it.
survivors.
He stared at the
There is a
stains
difference.
spreading, dark
Margaret
and
stood up
irreversible,
and walked over to
It was
him.
like his career.
She placed a hand
his
on his
marriage,
arm,
but
like
he
his
shrugged
life.
it off gently.
He had built
She
everything
understood
on
his
leverage,
pain.
on debt.
It was the
on
pain
the
of
assumption
irrelevance.
that the value would always
For
go up.
decades,
Their
he
name
had
had
assumed
opened
Clara
doors.
would always be there
Now
to
it was the
smooth
reason
over the
doors
rough
were
edges,
closing.
to sign
The
the
decline
papers,
wasn't just financial.
to manage the home
It was
front so he could
existential.
chase the next
They were
deal.
becoming ghosts.
He picked
in
up
their
his
own
personal
machine.
phone.
Lucas
He
is
scrolled
happy,
to Clara's number.
Margaret said softly.
He hadn't called her
trying to
since
find
the
a
day
silver
she
lining.
left.
He
Had
had
assumed
assumed
she would call him.
He looks alive,
begging for
He
clarification.
stands beside
money,
her
for help.
They are a team.
She hadn't.
Lucas
He
is
dialed the
bewitched,
number.
Arthur
It
said,
rang once,
pouring
twice,
himself
10
a drink
times.
from the decanter
Then
on the
voicemail.
sideboard.
Clara,
His hand
he said
shook
after
slightly.
the beep.
He thinks
His
this
voice
is a
sounded
partnership.
rough. He
It's
doesn't
me.
see that he is
We need to
merely the
talk.
consort to
There
the
are
queen.
some
He
issues
has lost
with the
his
accounts.
birthright, Margaret.
The bank is
And he
asking
smiles
questions.
while it happens.
Just call me back.
Perhaps he realized
We
the
need to sort
birthright
this
was
out.
a cage.
It's important,
Margaret murmured.
He hung
More
up.
to herself than to
He
him.
waited.
She
She
watched
walked
the
to the
phone.
window and looked
1
down
minute
at the
passed.
street.
5
Traffic
minutes.
moved slowly below.
10.
We
No
pushed
call
him away.
back.
We
No
pushed
text
her
message.
away. We thought we
Nothing.
were protecting
He
the
felt
company.
a surge of anger.
Instead,
hot
we
and
nearly
bright.
destroyed it.
How dare
Maybe.
she ignore him?
Maybe
How
this
dare
is
she
the
leave him
correction
to
we
deal
needed.
with this mess?
Arthur
He had
took a
given
sip
her
of the
settlement.
whiskey.
He had
been
been doing
generous.
little to warm the
She was
cold
supposed to
knot
be
in his
grateful,
stomach.
not silent.
Correction? He stood
Is
up
that what
and
you
paced
call
the
this
office.
humiliation?
The stain on
I
the
walk
desk
into the
was
boardroom
drying.
now.
He grabbed
I
a
see
box
Henderson's
of tissues
looking at
and
me
wiped
with
it up
pity.
aggressively.
Pity, Margaret.
Rubbing until the wood
I would have
was
preferred
dry.
anger,
but a faint
Anger I
shadow
could fight.
remained. Pity
A
is
ghost
final.
of the spill.
He walked back
threw
to
the
the
tissues
desk
in the
and
trash.
opened the report again.
He needed to fix
He
this.
flipped through the pages.
He needed to find
each
another
one
line of
detailing a
credit.
change in
He
protocol.
needed to sell some
a
assets.
shift in authority.
But selling took
a new
time.
oversight committee.
He didn't have time.
Look at this.
The
he
mortgage
said,
payment
pointing
was
to a
due in
clause.
7 days.
Quarterly
If he
audits
missed
by
it,
Vance
the
Global
bank would penalize
representatives.
him.
If
It
he
will be
missed
in our
two,
books.
they would call the
In our
loan.
files.
He sat
They will
back
know
down
every
and
secret,
opened a new
every
email.
weakness.
He began to
They
type
already
to
know,
a private
Margaret
lender
said.
he had used in the past.
They know we were reckless.
The interest
They
rates
know
were
we ignored
predatory,
the market
but he had no
shifts.
choice.
They know we valued
needed
status
cash
over
flow
solvency.
immediately.
Arthur
Arthur
slumped into
deleted
his
typed
chair.
again. The energy
words
seemed to
sounded
drain out of
desperate.
him.
He
Leaving
hated the
him
way they
looking
looked on the
small.
screen.
I wanted
He
to
was a
leave something
billionaire.
for him.
He wasn't
whispered,
supposed
his
to
voice
beg.
breaking.
But the numbers
Lucas,
didn't lie.
I wanted
The
him to
empire
have
was
what
hollow.
I had.
He
A
hit
name
send.
that meant something.
He leaned back in
a
his
foundation
chair
that
and
couldn't
closed
be
his
shaken.
eyes.
You
You
thought
gave him
about
a
the
name,
mansion,
Margaret
He
said,
thought about the
coming to
quiet
stand
rooms,
behind him.
the empty
She
closet
rested her
where
hands
Clara's
on his
clothes
shoulders.
used to be.
But you
He
tried to
thought
give him a
about
chain.
Juliana walking
Elena,
around like she
she
owned
gave
the
him
place.
wings.
She didn't
and
own
she gave
it.
us a chance
He
to
barely
keep the
owned
name
it.
alive.
He was a
Even
tenant
if we
in his
don't
own
own it
life. entirely, paying rent to
Arthur
the bank,
covered
to
his
his
face
investors,
with his
to his own
hands.
ego. The fear
A
was
knock at
still
the door
there,
startled
lurking
him.
beneath the surface.
His assistant peeked in.
The fear that one
Mr.
day,
Vance, your 2
Elena
o'clock
would
is
decide
here.
they were no longer
Roberto
useful.
opened his eyes.
The fear that
He
Vance
straightened his
Global would
jacket.
absorb them
He
completely.
smoothed his hair.
And the sterling
He put the
name
mask
would
back
become a
on.
footnote in
Send them
history.
in, he said.
It was a constant
assistant
anxiety,
left.
a shadow
Roberto
that
took a
followed
deep
him
breath.
home. He had
That
to
sat at the
perform.
dinner table.
He had to
That
convince
woke him at
everyone
3 in the
else that he
morning.
was solid.
What happens when
Even
she
if he
gets
felt
bored?
like he was crumbling?
Arthur asked,
He
his
stood
voice
up
muffled
and walked
by
to
his
the door.
hands.
He
What
opened it
happens
with a
when she
smile.
decides to sell
He
the
shook
assets?
hands.
We
We
are
talked
at her
about
mercy.
markets and trends.
Then we work.
He laughed
Margaret
at
said
jokes
firmly.
he didn't find funny.
We prove our worth.
But inside, the
Not
clock
as
was
owners,
ticking.
but as leaders.
Every handshake
We
felt
show
like
her
a
that we know
countdown.
this business better
Every
than
signature
anyone.
felt like a
We
noose
earn our
tightening.
place.
He glanced
Arthur
at
looked
his
up at
phone
her.
on the desk.
He
during
saw
a
the
lull
steel
the
in her eyes
conversation.
that he had always admired.
Still no message from Clara.
She was right.
He felt
They
a
could not
cold knot
retreat.
form in his
They
stomach.
could not hide.
She was out there
The
somewhere.
decline of their absolute
Alone,
power was inevitable.
without his money. But the decline
And yet,
of their relevance
she was the
was
one
a
who
choice.
seemed untouched.
You think she'll let
He
us?
was the one with them.
Arthur asked.
Office, the car,
She saved
the house,
company,
the mistress.
Margaret said. But he was the
She
one
didn't
who was
liquidate.
afraid. The
She
meeting
kept
ended.
Lucas.
The client
wants
left.
this to work.
Roberto
But she
closed
won't
the
tolerate
door and locked it.
incompetence. He didn't
Not
turn on the
anymore.
lights.
Arthur
He
nodded
stood in the
slowly.
dimming office
He
as
closed
the sun
the blue
began
report.
to set outside.
The sound of the cover
city
shutting
lights
flickered
flickered
on
in the
again.
quiet room.
He walked to
Then
the
we
window
adapt
and pressed his
We
hand
swallow
against
our
the
pride.
glass. And we
He
worked.
thought about Clara's
It will
words
be hard
when she left.
Margaret warned.
It has a way of
The staff
surprising
knows.
people.
The industry
dismissed
knows
them.
We will
Now
be
they
watched.
echoed in his mind.
Let them watch.
What did she know?
Arthur
What was she
said,
doing? He
standing
picked up
again.
his phone again.
He straightened his
He
tie.
called Arthur,
a
the family
reflex of his
lawyer.
old self.
The one who had handled
them
the
see that,
divorce
eh?
papers.
Sterling knows
Arthur,
how to survive.
Roberto said when the
Even
man
in the
answered.
shadow of a Vance.
I need you to check something.
He walked to the door
The
and
accounts.
opened it.
The
joint
office
ones.
outside was dim.
Why are they frozen,
The staff
Mr.
having
Vance?
left
Arthur
hours
said.
ago?
His
But
voice
tomorrow
was
they would
neutral,
be back.
professional, and the work
I
would
informed
begin.
you during the settlement.
Not the work of expansion.
Once the separation
but the
agreement
work of
is
preservation.
signed,
The
the work
assets
of
are
humility.
segregated pending
As they
final
left the
division.
building, the
He
night
signed
air
the
was
waiver.
cool.
I need
Arthur
access,
looked up at the
Roberto
Vance
said,
Global Tower
for business
glowing in the
purposes.
distance.
It's an
It
emergency.
stood taller than their own
I'm afraid
building.
I can't help with
It
that.
was a
Arthur
monument
said.
to the new order.
My client, Mrs.
He felt
Vance,
a pang of
has
jealousy,
not authorized
sharp
any
and
release
acute.
of funds,
But he also
in
felt
fact,
a strange sense
she has
of
requested
relief.
a full audit
The burden
of the
of keeping the
transfers
ship
made in the
afloat
last
alone
6
was
months.
gone.
He was
Roberto's
no longer
blood
the
ran
captain
cold.
steering through the
An
storm.
audit why she
He
suspects
was the navigator.
irregularities, Arthur
Lucas
said.
invited us to
Standard
dinner.
procedure.
Margaret said,
I
as they
suggest
walked
you
to their
cooperate,
car.
Mr. Vance.
Sunday. It will look
At their
better
new
in
place.
court if there are any
Arthur hesitated.
complications. The idea
There
of
won't
sitting
be
at their table
complications,
in their
Roberto
home,
said,
his
his
voice
voice
rising. It was a
Tell
further
her to
step
calm
down
me.
the ladder.
Tell her to stop
But he
this.
looked at Margaret.
I'm just the
seeing
lawyer,
hope in
Mr.
her
Vance,
eyes.
Arthur said.
She wanted the
I
family
follow
whole
instructions.
again. Even if
Good
the
evening.
structure had changed.
The line went dead.
Will Elena be there?
Roberto lowered the
Arthur
phone.
asked. An audit.
It's their home.
She was auditing
Margaret
him.
said.
She
Of
was
course
digging.
she will be.
He thought about
Arthur
the ledger
opened
in
the
his
car
study.
door.
The
Then we will
transfers
go.
to Juliana.
But we will not go
the
as
cash
beggars.
withdrawals. We will go
If
as
she
family.
found those,
Family.
if she proved he
Margaret
had diverted
repeated,
marital
testing the
funds.
word. The
It
settlement
felt
could
different
be
now.
overturned. Less about
He could lose
bloodlines
everything.
and more about bonds.
Not just the house.
Yes, the company,
Family.
the
As
reputation.
the car drove away
He
from the
walked back to
corporate
his
tower,
desk and
Arthur
sat down
looked
in
out
the
the
dark.
window one last
The city
time.
lights outside
The
were
lights of
bright,
the building
but
seemed
they
to
didn't
pulse.
reach him.
He
He
wondered
was
if
in the
Elena
shadows.
was there, looking
He
down
had
at
kicked her
them.
out to protect
He
his
wondered
new
if she
life.
felt triumph.
But in doing
He
so,
hoped not.
he had removed
He hoped
the
she
only
felt
person
only
who could have saved
responsibility.
his old one. Because if she
He put
felt
his head in
triumph,
his hands.
she was no better
The
than they had
vulnerability
been.
was no longer
The city
a whisper.
passed by in a blur
It was a
of lights
scream,
and shadows,
and no one could hear it but
Inside the
him.
car, the
The mansion
silence was waiting
returned,
for him,
but it was
the
less
mortgage
heavy
was
than
waiting
before.
for him. They had
And
accepted
Clara.
the reality.
Clara was pressure.
The decline of the old
city
empire
lights
was
smeared
complete.
across the windshield.
The rise of the
distorted
new one
by
had
the
begun,
wipers that
and
slashed
they were
back
along
and
for the
forth
ride.
in a rhythmic,
Arthur closed
hypnotic
his
sweep.
eyes.
He
thought
thought
of
of
Lucas.
disconnected from the road.
He thought of the boy he
as
had
if he were
been
watching
before
someone
the
else
money,
drive his
before
car.
the expectations.
Someone who was tired.
He missed him.
Someone who was afraid.
He hoped this new path
The
would bring him
conversation
back.
with Arthur replayed
Margaret,
in his
he said
mind
quietly.
on a loop.
Yes,
An
Arthur.
audit?
Did
Clara
we make
was
a mistake?
auditing him.
With her.
She wasn't just sitting
the
in a
beginning,
hotel room crying.
Margaret looked out
She
the
was
window.
hunting.
The
She
rain
was
had
digging
started
through
again,
the financial
striking
wreckage
the
he had
glass.
created.
Yes,
looking for the
she said
bones of his
simply.
mistakes.
We did, and she would
But
find
mistakes
them.
are only fatal
The transfers
if we
to
don't learn
Juliana's
from them.
account.
Arthur
the cash
nodded.
withdrawals
He
labeled
watched
as
the rain.
consulting fees.
Then we learn.
The luxury
The car
purchases
turned the corner,
charged to the company
disappearing
card.
into the flow of
They
traffic.
were all there. The
waiting
sterling
in the
name
digital
was still on the
archives,
building,
waiting
but
for her
the
to
power
pull the
behind
thread
it had
that would
shifted.
unravel the
The
entire
anxiety
sweater.
of the decline
He
was
turned
still
onto
there.
Oak Ridge Drive.
A low hum in the
The
background
mansion
of their
loomed at
lives.
the end of the
But
cul-de-sac.
it was no longer
dark
a panic.
against the stormy sky.
It was a motivation.
Only the porch
They had
light was
fallen.
on. A
Now they had to
solitary
learn
beacon
how to
in the
stand
gloom.
in a new world.
It used to feel like a welcome.
world where money wasn't
Tonight,
the only currency.
it felt like an interrogation
where respect
lamp.
was earned.
He parked
not
the car in the
inherited.
driveway,
and where the
the
woman
engine
they
ticking
disowned
as it
held the
cooled.
keys to their future.
He sat there for a moment,
The fear remained,
listening to the rain
so
drum
did the hope.
against the roof.
And for now,
He
that
didn't
had
want
to
to go
be enough.
inside.
The storm
Inside
had
was
passed,
where the
but
expectations
the landscape
lived.
was changed forever.
Inside was where
They
Juliana
would have to
waited.
navigate the new
He
terrain
took a deep
carefully,
breath,
held
one
it
step
until
at
his
a
lungs
time.
burned. One
and then
humble
exhaled
decision at a
slowly.
walls themselves
He had to
were holding
perform.
their breath.
He had to be the
Arthur
billionaire,
Sterling
the
sat in his
provider,
office, the man
the
who had
blue
everything
report
under
still on
control.
his desk.
He couldn't
But
let
now
her
it was
see the
accompanied
cracks.
by a stack of
If she
rejection
smelled
letters.
weakness, she would leave.
He had tried to find
He
an
knew her well
alternative.
enough to know that.
He had tried to
She
find a
loved
way
the
to
lifestyle,
dilute
the
Elena's
security, the status, to bring in another partner. He was just the vehicle that delivered that the Sterlings could stand. If the vehicle broke down, she would find another one. But every door he knocked on remained closed. He opened the car door and stepped out into the rain. Margaret entered the office without knocking. He didn't bother with an umbrella, a habit she had never broken despite the change in their circumstances. It matched the chill in his chest. She held a tablet in her hand, door and stepped into the foyer. The meeting with Chase Bank is confirmed for tomorrow, perfect 72 degrees, placing the tablet on the desk. The smell of dinner wafted from the kitchen, to their liaison. Something rich and heavy. They're hesitant, garlic and butter. Hesitant is better than no. It should have been appetizing, Arthur replied. Instead, it made his stomach turn. The headache had been a constant on the rack and loosened his tie. We need the liquidity. Juliana's voice came from the living room. If we can fund that independently, we reduce our reliance on Yes, he called back. We regained some leverage. The sound. Margaret sighed, his steps to be walking to the window. She was sitting on the sofa, the same as always. A glass of wine, but the perspective had shifted. She had changed. They know about the debt hold, Arthur. Her hair loose around her shoulders. Vance Global owns the majority of our outstanding bonds. But as he approached, no bank noticed the tension without their approval. It didn't reach her
searching for a
eyes.
partner.
She had been
We're
waiting.
searching for permission.
She had been thinking.
Arthur stood up
"You're
abruptly,
late," she said, taking a sip of wine.
I built this
I started
company.
dinner an hour ago.
I expanded it.
It's probably
I won't
cold
be
now.
reduced to asking
Work,
Roberto
a former
said,
employee,
collapsing
for permission
into the
to fix
armchair
my own
opposite her.
machines. He didn't want to
She
sit
is not a
next to
former
her.
employee,
He needed
Margaret
space.
said sharply,
Complicated
turning to face
meeting.
him.
The
And
bank
she is
is
not
being
asking
difficult
for
about the
permission.
refinancing
She is
paperwork.
exercising her rights.
Juliana
as
set the glass
majority
down on the
stakeholder.
coffee table.
There is
with
a
sharp
difference.
clink. Arthur
Difficult
stopped
how I
pacing.
thought you said it was
He
done.
looked at his wife.
You said
Clara
seeing the
signed
fatigue in
everything.
her eyes that
I thought the
matched his
house was
own.
ours. I need to
The
know
house
if there's
is
any
mine.
way out. Roberto
Any
corrected
other
automatically.
Any
Clara
rumor
signed
of someone
over
else
her
looking
rights.
to buy in.
But the bank has
There are rumors,
procedural delays.
Margaret admitted, lowering
because
her
of the
voice.
divorce. The market is
Procedural
buzzing
delays,
about the mystery
Juliana
heir of
repeated.
Advance Global. She stood up
They say
and
she's
walked over
ruthless.
to the window.
They say she's
looking out
buying
at
up
the rain.
distressed assets.
You know, my
across
friends
the
are
city.
asking when they
Some
can
say
come
she's
over for
clearing the
housewarming.
board for a monopoly.
I keep telling them
Arthur
soon.
scoffed.
But soon
Let them
keeps
talk.
getting further away.
Rumors are smoke.
It makes me look. I need
uncertain.
fire.
Like
I
I don't
don't
know where
capital.
I stand.
The next morning,
Roberto rubbed
the
his
meeting
face
at
with
Chase
his
Bank
hands.
was held in a
The
small
fatigue was
conference
bone
room
deep.
far. Juliana,
Please.
smaller than the grand
Not
halls
tonight.
Arthur was used
I have
to.
a headache.
The bankers
The
were
audit.
polite.
He stopped
but their
himself.
eyes were guarded.
He hadn't meant to say
They
that.
shuffled papers.
Juliana
avoided
turned
direct
around
eye
quickly.
contact and
Audit
spoke
what
in
audit
circles.
business audit.
Arthur
Roberto
felt the
lied too
rejection
quickly.
building before a
Standard
single word was
compliance.
spoken. Nothing
Mr.
to worry
Sterling,
about. The
you're a
lead
bad
banker,
liar,
Mr. Reynolds
Roberto,
began,
Juliana said,
steepling his
her voice
fingers.
dropping an octave.
We have reviewed your
She
proposal
walked back
for the
toward him.
secondary
Her
line
movements
of credit.
predatory.
It's
I heard you on the
ambitious.
phone earlier.
It's necessary.
When you thought I
Arthur
was in the
corrected.
shower.
The
You were
upgrade
talking
will
to
increase
Arthur.
efficiency by
About
30%. About money.
It's a solid investment.
Roberto felt a spike of
We
anger.
don't doubt the
mixed with
viability of
shame.
the project.
You were eavesdropping.
Reynolds
I was
said
protecting
smoothly.
myself.
We
She
doubt the
snapped.
collateral.
You told
Given
me she
the
was
current
gone.
debt structure with
You told me
Vance
she was
Global.
nothing. Any new
But now
lending
you're
would
worried
be
about her.
subordinate to their
Why? What can she
claims.
do? She's in
the
a
event of
hotel room
default,
with a
they get
suitcase.
paid first.
She has lawyers.
We get nothing.
Roberto said.
We won't
The truth
default.
slipping out
Arthur
despite his
said,
best
his
efforts.
voice rising slightly.
She has resources
we have a
we
plan.
didn't account for.
Plans change.
Juliana laughed,
Reynolds
a harsh,
countered.
brittle sound.
And markets shift.
Resources. She's a
Our
housewife,
risk assessment
Roberto.
team has flagged
She
your
hasn't
account
worked
as
in
high
20
risk
years.
due to the
What
concentration
resources
of
her uncle's
ownership.
pocket change.
Unless
Don't
Vance Global
underestimate
provides
her,
a guarantee.
Roberto warned.
We cannot proceed.
He remembered the calmness
Arthur
in
felt
Clara's
the blood
eyes when
drain
she
from his
left.
face. The way she
The
had dropped
guarantee?
the keys. You want Elena
She's
Vance
not who
to
you think
guarantee
she
our
is.
loan.
Well,
We
neither
want
are
the
you.
primary
Juliana
stakeholder
shot
to
back.
signal confidence.
She sat on the edge
Reynolds
of the
said.
coffee table.
Without
leaning
that,
in close.
our hands are tied.
I need security.
Arthur stood
Roberto.
up, his
I
chair
need to know that
scraping
this is
loudly
real.
against the floor.
I need the deed
This is
transferred
absurd.
to your name solely.
You're telling me I can't
and then
borrow
I need
money
my name
against my
added
own
to it.
company because
Today,
another company owns
tomorrow
too
at
much
the
of my
latest.
debt.
I'm not
telling
living in
you,
a house that
Reynolds
could be
said,
taken
remaining
away.
seated, his
because
voice
of some
calm and
technicality.
unyielding.
I
That
can't
the
do that
market has
today,
consolidated.
Roberto said.
There is
The bank
only
has
one
to
player
clear the
with
title
the capital
first.
to back you now.
Then make them clear
and
it.
that player
Juliana
is Vance
demanded.
Global.
Arthur
Call
left the bank.
Pay them
without
whatever they
saying
need.
goodbye.
I don't
The
care
city
about
air
the
was
cost.
cold.
I
Biting
care
through his
about the
coat.
ownership. Margaret was
If I don't
waiting
have
in the
my
car.
name on this house
She
within
saw
the
his
week,
face and knew
I'm
the
going to
answer
start
before he
wondering
spoke.
if I made the right
No,
choice.
Arthur said,
The threat
getting
hung
into
in
the
the
back
air,
seat.
heavy and
He slammed the
suffocating.
door.
The
Roberto
sound
looked at
echoing
her,
in the enclosed
really looked at
space.
her. They
And
want
saw
her
the
signature.
transaction for what
They
it
want her
was.
blessing. She wasn't
Margaret
here for
nodded
love.
slowly.
She was
So
here
there
for
is
the
no one
mansion.
else.
She was
No
here
one,
for the safety he promised.
Arthur whispered,
Leaning
and now
back
that the
against
safety
leather
was in
seat.
question,
He closed
she was
his
showing
eyes.
her teeth.
The irony
Are you
was threatening me,
suffocating?
Roberto asked
They had
quietly.
disowned her for being
I'm stating
inadequate.
facts,
They
Juliana
had cast
said.
her out for
She
lacking
stood
the
up and
status
smoothed
to
her
support
robe.
their legacy.
I love you, Roberto.
And now their
but I
legacy
love my
existed
future
solely
more.
because she
Don't make
allowed
me
it.
choose between them.
She was the air they
Fix the
breathed,
bank,
the ground they stood
fix
on.
the title. The girl they
Fix
called
Clara.
a distraction
That's
was
what
the
you
only
do.
thing keeping
You
them
fix
from
things.
oblivion. She
Where
turned
do we
and
go
walked
now?
out of the living room.
Margaret asked
the
softly.
footsteps echoing
Arthur
on the
opened his
hardwood
eyes.
floor. He looked
She
out
didn't
the
look
window
back.
at the passing city.
She didn't ask if he
saw
wanted
the
dinner.
Vance Global Tower.
She didn't
in the
ask if he was
distance,
okay.
gleaming like a
She went to the
beacon.
bedroom.
We go
and
to
a
them,
moment
he said.
later.
He heard
We
the
stopped
door
fighting the
close.
current.
Not a
We
slam,
swim with
but
it.
a firm shut.
Will Lucas be
a
there?
boundary. Lucas is
Roberto
always
sat
there,
alone in the
Arthur
living
said.
room.
He's
The
the
fire
bridge.
in the fireplace
If we
had
want to
died
cross
down
this
to embers,
chasm,
casting
we have to
long,
walk over him.
dancing shadows.
The drive
against
to the watch
walls.
shop was silent. The house was silent. The neighborhood was familiar. But the silence was different now. It was accusatory. It was a place they avoided, around the room, a symbol of the furniture Clara had chosen. Now it was the command center of their salvation. The rug she had walked on. The shop was every day for the sign hand painted. The windows brought a stranger into all shapes and sizes and told her to make it hers. It was humble. And now that stranger was demanding Arthur stepped out of the car while the true owner was quietly felt a surge of shame, hot and to take it all back. He was about to ask for help from the people he had tried to destroy. He poured himself a drink. He adjusted his hand, shaking a futile attempt to armor himself. He drank it in one gulp. Margaret touched his arm, burning his throat. Leave the pride at the door, it didn't help. Arthur. Nothing helped today. He walked to the study. They walked to the door. He needed to check the numbers again. The bell chimed as they entered. He needed to see if there was any smell of oil and would welcome them. He turned on the desk lamp. Lucas was at the workbench, a loop in his eye. The leather was cold, working on a delicate mechanism. He opened the laptop and logged into the banking portal again, reviewing a tablet. The numbers hadn't changed. They both looked up. The balance was still insufficient. For a moment, the credit line was still frozen. The tension was palpable. The mortgage payment was physical weight in the small room. He did the math in his head. Lucas removed the loop. He could sell the vacation home in the Hamptons. He didn't smile. That would cover the payment. He waited.
But that would take time to liquidate.
Mother,
He didn't have
Lucas
time.
said.
His
He could
voice
borrow
was
from the
neutral.
company.
Lucas,
But that was
Arthur
embezzlement.
replied.
That
He
was
looked
what
at
Clara
Elena,
was auditing him
Ms.
for.
Vance.
If he did
Mr.
that,
Sterling,
he would give her
Elena
the
said.
evidence she needed
She didn't
to
offer
destroy
a
him.
hand.
He
She
put his
didn't
head in
offer
his
a seat.
hands. She
The
waited
pressure
for
was
them
physical,
to state their
a
business.
band tightening around
Arthur
his
cleared
skull.
his throat.
Juliana
He felt
wanted
small
the
in
title.
this room. Clara
The
wanted
power
the audit.
dynamic had
The
shifted
bank
so
wanted the payment.
completely it was disorienting.
Everyone wanted something from him.
We
We
and
had
he
a
had
meeting
nothing
with
left
Chase
to
Bank
give.
today. He had spent
Elena
everything
nodded
on the
slightly.
illusion of success.
I heard.
He had
They
spent his
refused the
marriage
loan,
on the illusion of
Arthur
freedom.
said.
The words
And now the
difficult
bill
to
had
force
come
out.
due.
They
He
said
opened the bottom
they
drawer
said
of
they
the
need a
desk.
guarantee from
The
Vance
ledger was
Global.
still there.
Elena
He
pulled
placed
it
the
out and
tablet on
stared
the
at it.
counter.
The
She
handwritten
crossed her
notes.
arms.
Rent, and you
Oak
want me to
Street.
provide it.
Allowance.
We need the capital
Travel.
for the upgrade.
Evidence of
Arthur
his
said.
betrayal.
The
He
modular
could burn
plan
it.
Lucas
He
suggested.
could throw it in the
It
fireplace
works, and watch
but we
it
can't
turn to
fund
ash.
it without access
But
to
it wouldn't
credit.
change the digital
Elena
records.
looked at Lucas.
It wouldn't change
Did you
the
know
bank
about this?
statements, Clara.
I suspected.
Already had
Lucas
copies
said.
of. I
Burning
told
the
you they would
ledger
try to
would just
find
be
a
an
way
admission
around.
of guilt.
The market is
He
tight.
closed the drawer.
Elena
He
turned
leaned
her
back
gaze
in the
back
chair
to Arthur
and looked at the
Why
ceiling.
should I? The house
tried to
creaked.
cut us off.
A pipe groaned
tried
in
to
the
starve
wall.
us.
The wind
called me
rattled
a
the window
liability.
pane.
Arthur
It sounded like
flinched.
the house was
The
breathing.
truth of her words
It
was
sounded
a
like it
physical
was
blow.
waiting. I was
He remembered
remembered
Clara's
Clara's
words again.
The admission hung
Walls
in the
have a
air,
way of
heavy
remembering.
and raw. He had thought
I
she
judged
was
you by
being poetic.
standards that no longer
Now he thought
apply.
she was being literal.
I valued money
The
over
house
merit.
knew.
I
It
knew
knew
that
that
now.
built it. And
It knew who had
Elena
maintained
pressed. It
Is
knew
this
who had
just
loved
about
it.
survival?
And it knew who
Or
was
is it
trying
about
to sell it
change?
out from under them.
It's about survival.
He stood up and walked
Arthur
to the
admitted.
window. But
The rain had stopped.
I want it to be about
The
change.
clouds were breaking.
I don't want to lose the
revealing a
company.
sliver of moon.
I don't want to lose
The garden
my
was
son.
dark. The
Elena
roses
studied
hidden
him.
in the shadows.
She looked. He thought
Inside
about
the
Clara.
Sterling residence.
Where was she? Was she sleeping?
Arthur
Was
Sterling
she
was
working? He
tying
imagined
his
her
tie
sitting
in
in a
front of the
similar
mirror.
room. His
Somewhere
reflection
else,
looked back
looking
at
at
him,
similar
stark
papers.
and unyielding.
But she wasn't afraid.
He adjusted the knot. He could feel it, pulling it tight
She was
until
calm,
it restricted
and
his
her
breathing
calm was more
slightly.
terrifying than
It felt
his panic.
appropriate. He turned away
Constriction.
from the window.
That was
and
what
walked
today
to the
was
door.
about.
He
Margaret
needed to
entered
sleep.
the room.
He needed
holding
to
his
rest
jacket.
so he could fight
You
tomorrow.
don't have to do this,
But he knew he
she
wouldn't
said
sleep.
softly.
He
You
knew
could
he
claim
would lie in the
illness.
bed beside
Let me
Juliana
represent the
and stare
family.
at the dark,
Arthur
listening
turned to
to
her
her
breathe.
breathe.
No.
Wondering if she was
If I
dreaming
hide,
of
I
the
admit
house
defeat.
or of someone
If
else
I show
who
up,
could give
I
it
admit
to her.
change.
He turned
There's
off
a
the
difference.
lamp. The
I will
room
be there.
plunged into darkness.
I will sit in the seat
He
they
walked
assigned
out
me.
into the hallway,
And I will listen.
The floorboards creaked
Arthur,
under his feet.
Margaret said,
Each
stepping
step felt
closer.
like a confession.
Don't fight her.
He climbed the
Not
stairs
today.
slowly. Not in
The
front
master
of the
bedroom door
shareholders.
was closed.
If you fight,
He
put his
lose.
hand on the knob.
If you collaborate,
he hesitated.
you survive.
He didn't want
I
to go
know.
in.
Arthur
He wanted
said,
to
taking
run.
the jacket.
He wanted to get
He
in his
slipped his
car
arms into
and
the
drive
sleeves.
until the gas ran
I just
out.
hope she remembers
But there was
that I
nowhere
built
to
the
go.
walls she is
He
now
was trapped
living in.
by his debt.
She knows,
by his
Margaret
choices.
said.
But
By
she's
the woman
renovating the
sleeping
house.
in his bed.
Let her.
And the woman holding
They
his
arrived
debt.
at the tower
He
separately.
turned the knob and
a
opened the
deliberate
door.
choice to maintain
The room was
professional
dark.
boundaries.
Juliana was
Elena
asleep,
and
her
Lucas
back to him.
entered through the main
He
lobby.
walked to his side of the bed
security
and sat
guards
down.
nodded respectfully.
He took off his
Their
watch
badges
and placed
updated
it on
with
the
new
nightstand.
Vance Global logos.
The ticking was loud in
the
the
elevator
silence.
ride to the boardroom
He lay
floor
down
was
and
swift.
pulled the covers up.
When the doors
The
opened,
lavender scent was faint.
the hallway
now,
was
almost
lined with
gone.
assistants and
Soon it would
junior
be
executives.
replaced by Juliana's
They whispered
perfume.
as Elena passed.
Soon everything
their
would
eyes
be
wide.
replaced.
She didn't
But
look
not
at them.
yet.
She
Not for
walked
5
with a
more
steady
days.
pace. He
Her
closed
heels
his eyes.
clicking on the marble.
He tried to imagine
Lucas
a
walked
solution.
beside her, not
a way
behind.
out. A miracle.
He was her partner,
but
not
all he
her
could see was
assistant.
Clara's face.
Inside the antechamber
Calm,
to the boardroom,
composed.
Arthur
Waiting.
and Margaret were already
He drifted
waiting.
into a restless
Arthur
sleep,
stood by the window,
dreaming of signatures
looking out
that
at the
wouldn't
gray
dry,
sky,
of checks
Margaret
that
sat
bounced,
on a bench,
of doors that locked
reviewing
from
a
the
tablet.
outside. When
The
Elena
house
and
settled
Lucas
around
entered,
him, Arthur
heavy and
turned.
silent, the air in
It
the
was
room
no longer
shifted.
his sanctuary.
The history between
It was
them,
his cage.
the rejection,
And
the
the key was
pain,
in the hands of the
reconciliation
woman
he had thrown
hung
away,
in the silence.
gone from her eyes.
Ms. Vance,
The
Arthur
uncertainty
said,
was
nodding
gone from her
formally.
posture.
Mr. Sterling,
She dressed slowly,
Elena replied,
choosing a navy
ready,
blue suit
as I'll
that
ever be,
commanded respect
Arthur
without
said.
shouting for
He
attention.
looked at Lucas.
She buttoned
You
the
look well,
jacket,
son.
smoothing the
You too,
fabric
Dad,
over her
Lucas
hips.
said.
He
It
wanted
felt
to
like
say
armor.
more, to bridge the
She
gap.
packed her
but
bag
the
with
moment
the documents
demanded
Arthur
protocol.
had prepared.
The double double doors to the boardroom was heavy in her hand, weighted with the power
The board
she
is
was
seated,
about to claim.
the assistant announced.
She met Arthur in the
Elena
lobby
took
of
a
his
breath.
office building.
This was it.
He was waiting
The
for
point
her,
of no return.
holding 2 cups of
She
coffee.
looked at Lucas.
He handed
and
one
gave
to her,
a small,
his expression
encouraging
serious.
nod.
Ready,
She
he
stepped
asked.
forward.
Clara
Arthur
took
followed
the
a
coffee.
step behind.
The warmth seeped
Margaret
into
followed
her
him.
palms.
They
I've
entered
been
the
ready
room
for
together.
a long time, Arthur.
The boardroom was vast.
Today is just
the
table
paperwork.
long and polished.
The bank
to a mirror
representative
shine.
is waiting upstairs.
Around it sat the shareholders,
Arthur said
the
as they
external
walked toward the
advisors,
elevators.
and the senior management.
His name is Henderson.
20 pairs of eyes
He's eager to
turned to
offload
the
the
risk.
risk.
The murmur
Roberto's
of conversation
missed
died
payments
and flagged the
instantly.
loan as high
Everyone
risk.
knew the rumors.
They don't want the foreclosure
Everyone knew
headache.
the Vance Global
They want the
acquisition
liquidity.
was final.
Good, Clara
But seeing
said,
her walk
stepping
in
into the elevator.
alongside the Sterling,
The doors
made it
closed,
real.
sealing
Elena
them in a
walked
quiet
to the head of
box
the table.
polished steel.
The seat there was
I don't
empty.
want them to know it's
It
me.
had been Arthur's
Not
seat
yet.
for 30 years.
The shell company is
Today,
solid.
it belonged to the
Arthur
majority
assured her.
stakeholder.
Vanguard Holdings.
She pulled out the chair and
No
sat
direct
down.
link to your name.
She
in
placed
the
her
public
folder on the
records.
table.
Roberta
Lucas
won't
took
see
the
your
seat to
name
her
on the
right.
transfer documents
Arthur took the
until
seat
the
to her
notification
left.
of default.
The symbolism
was
was not lost
By then,
on anyone.
it will be too late
The old
for him
guard
to
was
stop
now
it.
flanking the
The
new
elevator
power.
dinged. Arthur sat
Opening
down
onto
onto
the
the
executive floor.
He felt the eyes of
The
the board
carpet
on
was
him.
thick.
He
muffling
expected
their
footsteps.
He expected
The air
scorn.
smelled of lemon polish
Instead,
and
he saw
money.
curiosity.
They were led into
They
a
were waiting to
conference
see
room
how
with
he
a
would
large
react.
table and
Would
a
he
view
sulk?
of the river.
Would he argue?
Henderson was already
He straightened
there,
his spine.
a man in his 50s
He would not
with
give
a
them the
tired
satisfaction
face and a
of
stack
seeing
of
him
files
break.
in front of him.
Elena opened her
He stood up
folder.
as they entered.
"Good morning,"
offering
she
a
said.
handshake that was
Her voice
firm
was
but
clear,
hurried.
projecting
Ms.
to the
Vance,
back
he
of the
said,
room without
addressing
effort.
the Shell Company
"Thank you for being
representative
here.
name. We have
Thank
a lot
you
of
for
work
meeting
to
on
do."
such short notice.
She began to speak.
As I explained
outlining
over the
the
phone,
roadmap
this
for the next
asset
quarter.
is troubled.
She spoke
The
of
borrower
efficiency,
has a history
of
of late
modernization,
payments.
of
We're
ethical
looking to
labor
divest.
practices. Clara
She
sat
didn't
down,
mention the past,
placing her folder on
She
the
didn't
table.
mention the debt.
She didn't smile.
She focused on the future.
She wanted him to see
As she
her as a
spoke,
businessman.
Lucas watched his
not a
father.
woman seeking
Arthur was
revenge.
listening.
I understand
He wasn't
the risk,
taking notes
Mr.
aggressively.
Henderson.
Nor
That
was
is
he
why the
staring
price
out the
reflects
window.
the distress.
He was listening.
You want out.
Occasionally, he
I want
nodded.
the position. It was a
It's
small
mutually
gesture,
beneficial
but to Lucas,
arrangement.
it felt like
Henderson
a mountain
nodded,
moving. Sliding
halfway
a
through the
document
presentation.
across the table. A shareholder
The note
raised
is
his
substantial.
hand.
Mr.
Are you sure your
Henderson,
firm has
the
the
same
liquidity
man
to
who had
cover the
questioned
purchase
Elena
price
months
up
ago.
front? We
Ms.
need
Vance,
wire
he
confirmation
began.
by noon.
Regarding the supply
Clara
chain
opened her
restructuring.
folder. Inside was the
confident
proof
that
of
the
funds
Sterling
from her
legacy
uncle's
suppliers
trust.
can meet the
The
new
numbers
standards?
were clear, black
Or
on
will
white.
we need to look
She
externally?
slid the page toward
Elena
him.
paused.
The funds are
She
ready.
looked at Arthur.
As soon as we
Mr.
sign,
Sterling,
the
she
transfer
said.
will be initiated.
This falls under your
Henderson
oversight.
picked up the paper.
What is your assessment?
His eyes widened
The
slightly.
room went silent.
He hadn't expected
It was a
that.
test.
She was giving him the floor. She was allowing him to lead within her framework. Arthur looked at her, surprised. He hadn't expected to be consulted publicly. He looked at the board, then back at Elena. "The legacy suppliers are capable," Arthur said, his voice steady. "But they need investment. The modular upgrade plan will allow them to meet the new standards without being replaced. I recommend we proceed with the internal upgrade." Elena nodded. "Agreed. Mr. Sterling's team will lead the implementation." Lucas felt a surge of pride. It wasn't just about the business decision. It was about the respect. His father was being treated as an asset, not a liability. And Elena was treating him with dignity. The meeting continued for another hour. Decisions were made. Votes were cast. Every time Elena asked for input, Arthur provided it. Every time Arthur